He was just a pathetic vampire, so weak he couldn't even be bothered to grow hair. And yet, he had the audacity to challenge the crocodile boss that ruled the swamp. If he could just drink its blood, using his ridiculously powerful absorption ability, his power would skyrocket like a rocket. But that all-out attack he launched didn't even leave a single scratch on the boss. Instead, he was sent flying by its massive tail like a broken kite. Before he could even get his bearings, his entire body was swallowed by its giant mouth. Anyone would have thought it was game over. With his last ounce of strength, he screamed in desperation, "I can't fall here, I have to win. I absolutely must win." His burning will awaken the Makazong bloodline within him, granting him the power of super-speed regeneration. He charged madly, deep into the boss's body, and ripped out its glowing red core. With a thundering explosion, the swamp boss was officially defeated. His body was completely transformed, radiating an overwhelmingly powerful aura. He coldly declared, "From now on, fresh blood and victory will both belong to me." The reason he risked his life to become stronger was because in his past life, he had been a vegetarian vampire. Just for losing control of his instincts one time, he was hunted by a group of holy knights for 12 long years. In the end, he couldn't escape his fate of being destroyed by them. His fortune and fame all turned to dust. When he opened his eyes again, he was shocked to find his body was still intact. This place was his familiar tattered tent. Looking at the carvings on the wall, he determined that this was half a year in the past. Have I been reborn? Could it be because I was farming too many views and likes for my girl? Remembering the tragic death of his previous life, he was determined to grow stronger before the holy knights could track him down. Standing in the silent swamp, looking at the monster's corpse at his feet, he had only intended to drink the blood of the forest's master. But his body unconsciously absorbed the mana stone as well, and the magical power within it far surpassed his imagination. A surge of energy spread out, covering his arm in a layer of tough, black scales, and Egan realized he could now resist the sun for 3 whole days. Memories flooded back. He remembered the first time he encountered this creature when he was captured by mercenaries. In the chaos, he had drunk its blood to fight back and escape, a truly spectacular last-minute reversal. Although his strength had increased, it still wasn't enough to face the knight, Dung Durhit. He had to avoid a hopeless battle, because that knight possessed the ability to track monsters and spirits. Instead of running, he chose to accumulate power, and quickly left before the sun rose. Suddenly, a roar echoed, and amidst a blue glow, a spirit rose from the water's surface. It thanked him for destroying the one who had usurped its domain, but its tone immediately turned sharp and cold. It warned that any who trespassed in its domain would pay with blood. This was the water spirit, Miriam. She declared that the forest would become enraged and curse the intruder. Miriam thought he couldn't hear her, but he coldly asked, "What are you?" Miriam was stunned when she realized he could see her, and she asked with a tremble if he was of the bloodkin, only to receive a single, cold "yeah" in response. When she realized he had heard all her earlier insults, the girl was too embarrassed to speak. Miriam quickly introduced herself as a water spirit, whose domain had been taken by the crocodile, which had turned her into a slave. She joyfully thanked him for finally freeing her from her life of slavery. Miriam enthusiastically recounted the scene of an old man being swallowed whole, followed by a handsome man appearing like the ultimate plot twist, while he noticed the tattoo on his arm was slowly fading. Seeing his change in demeanor, Miriam switched to using honorifics and grew curious about the meaning of his mysterious tattoos. He had no memory of when he became a vampire. It was as if he were born a creature of the night. His ambiguous past had forced him to live in seclusion, and now that a tattoo was fading, he suspected it was a sign that his power was being unsealed. Wanting nothing to do with her, he turned to Lev, telling her to take good care of the forest. Miriam frantically tried to stop him, since it was rare for her to find someone she could talk to. She lamented that fewer and fewer people could see spirits anymore, and begged him to help restore her lake. Seeing that he was still unmoved, she tried to entice him with an offer of pure water that she had created herself. Her constant nagging made him lose his patience, and he yelled at her to get lost, but Miriam stubbornly kept following him. Even though he bluntly rejected her, she still cried out from behind him, "Sir, Sir of the Blood Tribe, working with me would surely be to your advantage." A few days later, in the village of Broadwind, someone ran in frantically, shouting that the red-eyed monster had appeared. The village chief was startled, and the villagers immediately gathered outside. Before them lay a huge pile of beast carcasses, leaving everyone both stunned and excited at the prospect of having meat to eat. One young man eagerly asked if the villagers could really take all of these spoils. Everyone was overjoyed as if they had struck gold, but they still wondered about the intentions of the red-eyed monster. For over 10 years, the man living at the foot of the mountain had always brought them meat. He was cold on the outside, but warm on the inside. Just then, a dark figure emerged from the forest and asked for permission to enter the village, causing everyone to freeze in place. More than 10 years ago, when he first appeared with his red eyes and mysterious mask, he had terrified everyone. But because he regularly brought them meat, a strange relationship had gradually formed between him and the villagers. Facing their curious stares, Egan calmly explained that he had once been sick, forcing him to live in seclusion, but now that he was cured, he had come to tell them. He removed the cloth covering his face, expressing his wish to repay the villagers for their kindness. The villagers were still stunned, unable to believe their eyes. As his handsome face was revealed, he smiled and told them they could seek him out anytime they needed. The entire village erupted in screams of astonishment, shocked that the red-eyed monster was actually so handsome. Everyone began to wonder if he was secretly a nobleman living in hiding. Under the villagers' admiring gazes, he quietly turned and left. Miriam marveled at his real face, then curiously asked why he gave all the meat to the humans, to which he calmly replied that in human society, building relationships is more important than raw power. Miriam couldn't believe it, shouting that he planned to blend in with humans without preying on them. She argued that since he was leaving in a few days, there was no point in tiring himself out by building relationships. Egan soberly realized this was no longer a matter he could stay out of. He put his mask back on and coldly warned her that when the mercenaries arrived, the entire village would be slaughtered. Miriam gasped in utter shock as he continued to expose their dark conspiracy. The mercenaries' objective was to capture a young boy and deliver him to the Lord's castle. To leave no witnesses, they would slaughter every villager, and if this wasn't stopped, the Holy Crusaders would certainly be drawn to the incident. Bewildered, Miriam didn't understand how he knew all of this. She asked with a trembling voice if the entire village was really going to be massacred. Even though she had been with him for a few days, she couldn't guess what he was thinking. He simply replied that she would have to wait and see, but first, he needed to build trust with the villagers. He explained that appearing harmless was a crucial first step, which only confused Miriam more about the connection to the mercenaries. He stopped so suddenly that Miriam crashed right into his back. She cried out in pain, asking why he had stopped all of a sudden. In front of them, a squad of fully armed soldiers was making their way through the forest at night. The soldiers quickly spotted him and became suspicious, seeing a stranger who had just come from the village. Seeing that he was alone and appeared weak, they decided to get rid of him to avoid any future complications. A masked soldier wielding a greatsword charged aggressively toward him. Miriam screamed his name in a panic. The weapon sliced through the air as it came crashing down. But in that very moment, his eyes blazed with a brilliant crimson light. In the blink of an eye, the attacker collapsed, having dared to act so insolently before such overwhelming power. Amid the bloody scene, he calmly told Miriam that the whole point of gaining the villagers' trust was so that no one would question his actions. Floating in the air, Miriam stared in horror at the bodies lying scattered at his feet. He coldly declared that his ultimate goal was to wipe out this entire band of mercenaries. His unexpected brutality sent the soldiers into a panic, and they screamed that he was a vampire, not a human. However, greed still drove a few of them to risk a counterattack. One of them yelled that capturing a vampire alive would bring a massive reward. They saw this as a life-changing opportunity and charged into a frenzied battle. Another one, bloodthirsty, also rushed forward, determined to take his head, even if it was just from a corpse. A man swung his sword fiercely, shouting that the vampire's head was his. Faced with the relentless assault, he dodged gracefully and launched lightning-fast counters, making them scream in terror that he was a demon. Just then, a giant wearing a steel helmet and wielding a spiked mace stepped forward. He berated his comrades and declared that he would personally crush him. He swung the mace with all his might, but the man stopped the heavy blow with just one hand. The sheer difference in power left the soldier speechless, sweat pouring down like rain. He looked at him with a deadpan expression and said that the night was his stage. Immediately after, he delivered a finishing blow that sent the giant collapsing to the ground. Standing in the middle of a battlefield with no one left to resist, he calmly noted that this was the perfect time to cover his tracks. The surviving soldiers trembled and backed away, shouting for a simultaneous attack. Mustering all their courage, they charged into one final battle together. The loud noise attracted the villagers. The village chief and everyone else ran over carrying torches. Before them was only a scene of devastation, leaving the village chief stunned and confused about what had happened. He looked at the man suspiciously and asked if the red-eyed monster was responsible for all of this. He calmly denied it, saying he just happened to find them already dead while checking his hunting traps. He pointed to the scene and speculated that the soldiers had been ambushed by wolves on their way to the village. A young man shone his torch and recoiled in horror when he recognized the head of a ferocious black wolf. He continued to explain that he took the opportunity to strike while the wolf pack was busy feeding on the corpses, also warning that there were still wolves nearby, though the village chief remained skeptical. However, the young men who examined the bodies all confirmed the presence of wolf claw marks. The clear evidence made everyone agree with his explanation. Although still wondering why a wolf pack would be reckless enough to attack such a large group of soldiers, the village chief had no choice but to accept it. He bowed his head and apologized for his suspicion, and the man just replied gently that misunderstandings were normal. When discussing how to handle the bodies, he suggested a proper burial, which made Miriam silently marvel at his acting skills. The truth was, after he eliminated the mercenaries, the smell of blood attracted a pack of wolves. He had already dealt with them and cleverly created false trails to mislead everyone. Miriam didn't understand why he had to be so careful, but she realized that if he had left immediately, he would have been the prime suspect. She secretly guessed that he was plotting a grander scheme. Suddenly, he handed the village chief a blood-stained letter bearing the Lord's seal, which he had found on one of the soldiers. The moment he saw the seal, the village chief's expression changed instantly, and he hurriedly read the contents. The more he read, the more terrified he became, trembling as he uttered words of disbelief. He turned to the crowd and loudly called out the name Felician, leaving everyone utterly bewildered. The village chief revealed that Felician might be the Lord's illegitimate son, and the soldiers had come to take him away. Earlier on the battlefield, the mercenary commander watched in horror as his comrades were taken down by just one man. He moved like a phantom, spreading absolute fear among the survivors. The soldiers panicked but still tried to reassure each other that he only had 2 hands and 2 feet. One of them tried to command the formation, ordering them to surround him instead of charging in blindly. But the commander had already realized the hopelessness of the situation when he saw there was no escape. The man's eyes flashed red, and he closed in on the commander at a speed impossible to react to. A punch like a sledgehammer slammed squarely into his face, sending him flying into a tree trunk. The violent shock to his internal organs made him collapse instantly. He lay motionless, completely incapable of putting up any resistance. Seeing their comrades falling all around them, the remaining men could only tremble and beg for their lives. The dying commander watched him approach and gasped, asking if he had been lying in wait for them. He desperately asked why he was being targeted when their only destination was the village on the other side of the mountain. Egan stood tall like the Grim Reaper himself, coldly replying that he was simply curious about their purpose for invading a village that belonged to him. Upon hearing this, the soldier was utterly terrified, stammering an apology and insisting they had no intention of hunting any vampires. He confessed the truth. Their target was a child of noble blood who was hiding in the village. Egan stared him down with eyes as sharp as daggers, questioning the true motive behind those words. He was suspicious that mobilizing such a large force for just one child was basically the same as wanting to wipe the entire village off the map. The trembling soldier admitted that the people behind this weren't the main family, but rather 2 heirs named Chimera and Bertel. He explained that it was an internal political plot, and mobilizing so many men was just a precaution against any unforeseen risks. He fell to his knees, pleading for his life at the mere mention of Bertel's name. Painful memories surged within Egan as he remembered Bertel, the man who had mercilessly hunted him in the past. He realized that massacring the villagers wasn't the official mission, but was born from the greed and cruelty of these mercenaries, the very thing that led to the tragedy in his past life. The soldier continued to beg, saying they just wanted to seize the opportunity for a little profit and would never dare to challenge the Blood King. He tremblingly admitted that they thought it would be an easy mission, never expecting to run into the final boss. Egan coldly turned his back and walked away, leaving only a warning to be careful of the wolves on the way back. Thinking his life had been spared, the soldier frantically bowed his head and thanked him profusely. But in that very same moment, he unleashed the final, killing blow without a shred of hesitation. Miriam asked in shock why he would pretend to spare the man's life when he was just going to kill him anyway. He calmly replied that now that his identity as a vampire had been exposed, he couldn't afford to leave any survivors. He glanced toward the darkness where a pack of wolves was lurking, drawn in by the thick scent of blood. Back in Broadwind Village, the atmosphere was chaotic as the village chief announced the identities of the men who had been killed. The villagers were absolutely stunned to learn that the orphan boy, Felician, was actually of noble blood. Just as the chief began to worry about the escort party being completely wiped out, Egan appeared and offered to escort the boy to the city himself. Seeing their hesitation, he gave a knowing smile and said that as a knight, he simply could not turn a blind eye. He confidently introduced himself before the villagers, declaring that he was Egan of the House of Egan. Miriam could only scream internally at how smoothly the lie rolled right off his tongue. Contrary to her fears, the villagers immediately believed him and began to respectfully call him Sir Egan. Miriam realized with a bitter taste in her mouth that because these people had never met a real noble before, they completely bought his story. The villagers gathered around him with looks of admiration, continuously asking questions about his life as a knight. He played along, saying that for various reasons, he had left the world of men to live a life of seclusion in the forest. This answer only made everyone believe even more strongly in his noble status. They assumed that only someone with superhuman swordsmanship could have survived alone in the forest for so many years. The village chief, Mu, said that their village was far too poor to ever repay such a kindness. He gently replied that simply being allowed to rest for the night was more than enough, which delighted the chief, who immediately invited Egan to his home. As night fell, he stood by the window in a quiet, wooden room, gazing out at the forest. He examined the new layer of dark skin that had formed on his body, which looked like a skill he'd unlocked after defeating a boss. It was a defensive ability he had absorbed from a swamp monster, causing his red eyes to gleam with calculation. This protective layer would help him resist the sunlight, which would be a great help on the journey ahead. Miriam sarcastically remarked that he was a blatant liar, calling himself a knight when he didn't even know how to read. He nonchalantly replied that it wouldn't matter even if he were exposed, since he was about to leave this place anyway. Miriam flew around him, demanding to know his true purpose for suddenly getting so friendly with the villagers. Just then, a villager's respectful voice called out, announcing that their luggage was all packed and ready. He turned to Miriam and remarked that in just one night, his social standing had changed dramatically. He concluded that power is far more persuasive than mere words. He decided to make his lie a reality by taking full advantage of the trust he had already built. The village chief gave him a letter of introduction and asked him to take good care of Felician. Felician showed up with a large backpack and greeted him politely. He replied calmly, already calculating how he could use the boy's status for his own advancement. The group departed from the village, their shadows stretching long across the mountain road. Their journey led them through lush green valleys and across wild, untamed trails. Looking down from a high cliff, he asked if the village in the distance was Brahma. Felician confirmed it by reading a wooden sign, which surprised him, as he didn't know the boy could read. The boy explained that his mother had taught him before she passed away, and the memory made him visibly emotional. He grew quiet and thoughtful, while Miriam suggested that the boy could teach him how to read. He then bluntly asked Felician to teach him, leaving the boy completely stunned. He explained that his family had fallen into ruin, and it was his sword, not books, that had ensured his survival. Hearing his story, Felician was filled with deep sympathy and looked at him with an expression of profound pity. The two continued to walk in silence along the sun-drenched path. He thought to himself that once you've gained someone's trust, any lie becomes believable. Miriam made a sarcastic comment about his acting skills, but had to admit that his plan was quite effective. Looking into Felician's trusting eyes, she realized the boy had completely fallen for the story. Felician bowed his head in apology for having doubted him because of the rumors back in the village. He said with sincerity that he would judge things for himself from now on, instead of listening to gossip. He even justified the man's inability to read, figuring it was normal for someone from a warrior background. Felician enthusiastically offered to teach him to read so that he wouldn't be embarrassed in front of others. Suddenly his eyes flashed with alertness. An arrow came whistling through the air, aimed directly at them. As quick as a flash, he intercepted the arrow just before it struck Felician, leaving the boy petrified with fear. From the shadows, two bandits emerged, arguing with each other over the poorly aimed shot. Felician trembled, realizing they were being ambushed by robbers. One of the bandits stepped forward with a sinister smile, demanding they hand over everything they had. Faced with such aggression, he unleashed a terrifying pressure and warned in an icy voice that if they didn't retreat right now, all of them would die here. As if to answer his own threat, a blazing red arc of his sword flashed through the air, extinguishing any chance of survival for the man before him. The scene instantly turned into a living hell as Egan moved decisively, cutting the bandits down in mere moments. Felician stood completely frozen, his mind unable to process the horrific slaughter he had just witnessed. The last surviving bandit could only scream in despair as he watched his comrades get butchered. Standing among the corpses, Egan calmly sheathed his sword and said coolly that he had done exactly as they demanded, handling the situation nice and clean. The bandit, consumed by rage, charged forward knowing he had no chance, but against a seasoned vampire it was nothing more than suicide. Fiery red slashes tore through the air, each precise strike disabling the bandits one by one until they could no longer fight. One of them stumbled backward in terror, his lips trembling as he begged to be spared. But the only answer he received was a pair of cold, merciless red eyes. Looking at the carnage around him, Egan wondered why humans found it so easy to slaughter those weaker than themselves. He grabbed a barely breathing bandit by the throat and asked in a chilling voice if being weak was an excuse to be trampled underfoot. After finishing the last of them, Egan turned to the stunned Felician and asked if being literate helped him understand this situation any better. Felician still hadn't recovered from the bloody spectacle as Egan walked toward him. The boy trembled and repeated his earlier promise that he had said he would see and judge things for himself. Egan looked him straight in the eye and affirmed that whether he believed him or not, he would never let a single drop of blood get on him. The bustling city scene unfolded with the shouts of vendors echoing through the streets. One merchant loudly advertised rare herbs from the north for just 20 silver coins a bundle. When someone mentioned a cheaper price elsewhere, he immediately shot back that his goods were of far superior quality. Miriam flew among the crowd, thrilled by the countless new sights. Felician worriedly reminded Egan to be careful, as the merchants here were notorious swindlers. He recounted how his former master had been ripped off many times while shopping in this very market. All around them, arguments over prices raged on, creating the familiar chaotic atmosphere. Egan observed it all and thought to himself that the most important thing right now was to get some money. He stopped in front of a shop and told Felician to wait outside. Approaching the counter, Egan asked the shopkeeper to appraise the animal hides he had brought with him. The shopkeeper was surprised to see such a large number of rare black wolf pelts. The old man carefully observed Egan's worn-out clothes. An idea to lowball him sparked in his mind, thinking Egan was just a common vagrant. He figured this was an easy mark to fool and prepared to make a pitifully low offer. With a sly smile, he began to disparage the quality of the goods. The old man declared that the hides were worth only 18 silver coins. Immediately, Egan glared, his crimson pupils radiating a terrifying pressure. The shopkeeper panicked, sweat pouring down like rain as he realized the danger. He quickly changed his tune, admitting that black wolf pelts were an extremely rare commodity. Under the suffocating pressure, he stammered, raising the price and trying to de-escalate the situation. He forced a smile and raised the price to 23 silver coins. Egan just let out a low, menacing grunt. The panicked shopkeeper continued to raise the price to 25, then 27 silver coins. He hurriedly corrected himself, offering an even higher price to avoid angering the fearsome customer. Finally, under Egan's cold gaze, he shouted out a price of 28 silver coins. Inwardly, he was screaming at being forced to haggle against himself, feeling like his pockets were being emptied. Exhausted, he settled on a final price of 30 silver coins, and Egan coldly agreed. The transaction was completed under the flickering firelight of the marketplace. Egan stared at the paper filled with squiggly characters and felt a headache coming on. Although he had learned the basics from Felician, he realized the road to literacy was still a very long one. Miriam appeared and remarked that his new outfit looked pretty decent. He smoothed the fabric and thought that while it wasn't high-end silk, it was still worth the money he'd spent. He was pleased that the trip to the market had gone more smoothly than expected. Miriam teased that he didn't even need to haggle, since his terrifying aura made the prices go up on their own. She excitedly said he should buy more luxurious things, but Egan was content as long as his clothes protected him from the sun. Miriam continued to chatter on about the extravagant life a noble vampire ought to enjoy. When asked how she knew so much about high society affairs, she proudly said she had heard it all from other spirits. She advised him to learn ancient languages and the imperial tongue, but then admitted she couldn't read herself. When Felician appeared, Egan pretended to be talking to himself to avoid suspicion. Felician apologized for showing his weakness after the series of shocks he'd endured that day. Miriam commented that everything had probably been too much for the young boy. Egan calmly said that it was understandable for a normal person to have trouble adapting to scenes of death. He affirmed that he still had enough strength for the journey ahead, and he emphasized that the night was still young. Under the light of the campfire, Egan focused on learning to read with Felician's patient guidance. Faced with his own incredible learning speed, he wondered if reading and writing were really that easy. Felician, amazed, praised him as a genius, saying it would take a normal person a very long time to learn that quickly. He responded humbly, reminding the boy that simply reading and writing wouldn't be enough for Felician's future as a nobleman. Hearing this, Felician's mood darkened, and he admitted he'd never thought deeply about his true identity. The boy worried that everything still felt too distant, and just then, Egan sensed something unusual. From the darkness, a group of fully armed men on horseback was approaching them. A bearded man with a friendly smile greeted them, using the excuse that he was looking for a place to rest. Egan observed their equipment and realized these were no ordinary men. Compared to the mercenaries from before, this group was clearly a professional force. When asked about the purpose of his journey, Egan knew that even one wrong word would be enough to make them suspicious. He decided to tell the truth, that they were on their way to the Lord's castle, which surprised the commander, who then offered to accompany them, even bringing out wine and mutton as an invitation. A young, blonde-haired soldier named Laban rudely interrupted, demanding to join their group. Parutek quickly apologized and introduced himself, then asked for Egan's name. He answered coldly and concisely, stating that he was Knight Egan. This title stunned Laban for a moment, before he burst into scornful laughter, finding it utterly absurd. He mocked Egan for having no horse and no armor, saying he looked nothing like a knight, then moved closer to probe for his real identity. He suspected Egan was an impostor, claiming he had never heard of an Egan family. His eyes grew dangerous as he continued to interrogate him about his identity. Beneath his mask, Egan's red eyes flashed. He knew he couldn't take back what he'd already told Felician. Looking at the soldiers surrounding them, he realized their reason for approaching was anything but simple. He calculated silently that if pushed too far, the quickest solution would be to strike, since their numbers weren't overwhelming. His hands slowly moved to the hilt of his sword, ready for a massacre if necessary. Just as Laban was about to start something, Captain Parutek immediately grabbed a hold of him. A lightning-fast strike sent the new soldier flying. He slammed hard against the base of a tree and was knocked out instantly. Parutek quickly bowed his head and apologized, asking Egan to forgive the rookie's disrespect. Egan turned his back coldly, said no apology was needed, and continued on his way, causing Parutek to breathe a sigh of relief. Walking through the night, he realized that from now on, he would be the target of much suspicion. He decided he had to become a true knight as quickly as possible to avoid trouble. By the campfire, Laban lay motionless, his face still etched with panic. When he woke up, he still had no idea what had happened. Parutek laid into him, scolding him for his stupidity in provoking such a dangerous night. He emphasized that the entire squad nearly lost their lives because of that one thoughtless action. Parutek admonished him, saying that judging someone by their appearance is a fatal mistake. He began to analyze the details that Laban had overlooked. Egan's cloak was high quality, worth at least 10 silver coins, which is equivalent to several months' salary for a mercenary. He also asserted that Egan was no commoner because he knew how to read. Parutek recalled the terrifying killing intent from that moment. If he had been a second slower, Egan would have drawn his sword for real. He stressed that the entire team could have been wiped out if the situation had gotten out of control. When Laban asked how he knew, Parutek said he saw Egan's hand already resting on the hilt of his sword. His stance and the way he centered his gravity were the standard techniques of a master swordsman. Those are skills that only masters of combat can achieve. Parutek warned him that if he hadn't intervened in time, Laban would have lost his head. His eyes were stern as he asked Laban if he understood just how terrifying knights truly are. He explained that knights are warriors who have been trained since childhood in prestigious noble families. They brave dungeons, battlefields, and hunt monsters to build their renown. Only those who survive countless battles are ever recognized by the nobility, and only then do they finally get the chance to be granted the title of knight. Parutek reasoned that impersonating a knight was a capital offense. It was dangerous whether the man was genuine or a fraud. He believed that anyone who dared to call himself a knight must surely possess formidable strength. For someone so young to already claim the title of knight proved that Egan's power was terrifyingly immense, perhaps even surpassing Parutek's own. From a distance, Egan's red eyes narrowed slightly as he overheard their conversation. He realized the title of knight carried great weight and resolved to play the part perfectly to avoid blowing his cover. Observing the professional soldiers, he wondered why the Tyne clan had previously hired such a weak group of mercenaries. His suspicion grew, questioning why they hadn't simply used their official troops. He silently watched their direction of travel before proactively approaching to ask about their destination. Under the moonlight, he flashed a mysterious smile and proposed they travel together, since they shared a common goal. Egan's captivating aura left Parutek and Laban utterly stunned. Laban even blushed with admiration. The group proceeded together into Maitla, a village on a hill within the Lord's domain. Egan silently thought how fortunate it was that the soldiers believed he was a knight. Traveling with them allowed him to both maintain his persona and gather crucial information. Just then, Miriam appeared, softly calling out to deliver her report. She excitedly recounted that she had managed to eavesdrop on a conversation among the mercenaries. The first piece of news was that the Lord's health was in critical condition. Furthermore, a new dungeon had been discovered within the territory, but the Tyne clan lacked the funds and manpower to explore it. Egan grew contemplative, realizing the dungeon presented a huge opportunity for profit, but it was also fraught with risk. Miriam worriedly asked about Felician's future if the Lord were to pass away. He coldly replied that it was none of his concern, but Miriam still feared the boy would be in danger. Watching Felician walk in silence, Egan guessed the Lord simply wanted to see his son one last time. He thought to himself that both of their fates would change forever from this moment forward. Before them rose Rose Castle, the magnificent fortress of the Tyne clan. Egan stepped quietly into the grand structure. Miriam was thrilled by the castle's immense scale and began dreaming of a life of luxury. He coldly told her to be quiet and to stay close behind him. At the castle gate, a group of mercenaries was delivering goods to a young nobleman. Their commander bowed respectfully and introduced them as being from the Fei Ling Merchant Guild. The nobleman, full of arrogance, introduced himself as Kamira, the eldest son of the clan. After a brief inspection of the convoy, he ordered them to unload the cargo at once. His gaze suddenly fell upon Egan and Felician, his expression turning suspicious. Egan calmly stepped forward and introduced himself as Sir Egan, which drew Chimera's attention toward Felician. Before he could finish speaking, an authoritative voice boomed from behind, demanding that Chimera stop. Egan froze as a familiar sensation washed over him. The voice from behind made him instantly recognize the newcomer. A young knight approached, gently chiding his older brother that inspecting outsiders was his own responsibility. Egan stared intently at the rose emblem embroidered on the newcomer's chest. Horrifying memories came flooding back. He could never forget that voice. In his mind, he saw the face of the vampire hunt squad leader, the very man who had first discovered his hiding place. It was he who, along with his cronies, had brutally tortured him and hunted him relentlessly in his past life. Standing before him now was his sworn enemy, the knight Bertel, with his golden hair and cold, sharp eyes. Bertel, a knight sworn directly to the clan and its second son, appeared with a stern demeanor. Chimera immediately grew haughty, arguing that he didn't need to report everything to his younger brother. Bertel bowed his head and explained that he merely wished to follow protocol, the two brothers clashing like power against discipline. In the midst of the tension, Egan spoke up, cutting through the argument. He stepped forward, presenting a letter and stating that it was from the village chief of Broadwind. Upon hearing the name Broadwind, Bertel immediately looked astonished. He quickly snatched the letter and opened it, reading it right on the spot. Chimera stood beside him, his eyes curiously following every line of text. The appearance of Felician behind Egan made the atmosphere even more tense. Chimera was surprised to recognize the Broadwind village chief's seal, while Bertel was stunned by the letter's contents. The letter reported that the entire group of mercenaries had been wiped out by wolves, prompting Chimera to stare at Felician with a sharp, calculating gaze. Trying to remain calm, Felician offered a polite greeting, causing Chimera to instantly switch his demeanor to one of feigned friendliness. In contrast to his brother, Bertel's eyes remained cold and full of suspicion, while Chimera announced that the Lord was eager to meet the boy. Chimera immediately ordered a servant to prepare Felician. He demanded that the boy be taken for a bath and dressed in proper attire. Just as the servants were about to lead Felician away, Egan stepped forward to stop them. His resolute gaze immediately put Bertel on high alert. Egan coldly declared that he wanted to discuss the reward first and demanded to see the Lord. Bertel immediately objected fiercely, roaring that such a thing was impossible. The air grew suffocating, as Bertel used the Lord's poor health as an excuse for not allowing visitors, and offered to pay the reward in gold instead. Egan stood his ground, his red eyes flashing with impatience as he repeated his demand in a cold voice. Faced with such pressure, Bertel could only grit his teeth in silence. Just as the tension reached its peak, Chimera suddenly spoke up, breaking the heavy atmosphere. He remarked that a brief meeting wouldn't be a problem at all. Bertel protested vehemently, but Chimera sarcastically shot back that his younger brother was trying to control everything himself. Ignoring the protests, Chimera acted as if everything was perfectly fine. He turned to Egan with a fake smile, apologizing for the inconvenience caused by his brother. Chimera clapped Egan on the shoulder in a dismissive gesture filled with hidden meaning, telling him to be careful on his way back. After that, he cheerfully led Felician away on a tour of the domain, and the boy could only follow in silence. Egan watched them go, realizing that Chimera never had any intention of letting him meet the Lord. Suddenly, the sound of heavy footsteps shattered the silence. A burly, red-haired man with a long scar across his face appeared, exuding an aura of power. He threw an unconscious person to the ground and bellowed that he had found the troublemakers. The man explained that they were lazy mercenaries who had been robbing the villagers, so he had captured them for punishment. Bertel quickly stopped him from carrying out a public execution, suggesting they handle it inside the castle. The red-haired man grunted, then agreed to leave with Bertel, leaving Egan to observe the entire event. Parutek recognized the man who had just appeared as the famous knight, Gunfredic. Gunfredic was said to be a monster in combat, possessing outstanding technique. Rumor had it that he once single-handedly defeated thousands of opponents in a major tournament. Parutek speculated that Gunfredic was here because of the newly discovered dungeon. Whoever is first to conquer the dungeon will achieve resounding fame, even though this is just a border territory. Many people had lost their lives exploring the dungeon, so this was a huge opportunity for Gunfredic to make a name for himself. Hearing the word appointment, Egan turned and asked Parutek if their contract was officially over. With his crimson eyes blazing, he proposed a new contract, one that was incredibly tempting but also fraught with risk. Night fell and the moonlight draped over the imposing castle, turning it into a stage for schemes of power. Chimera stood by the window, determined to be the one to conquer the dungeon this time. He was worried now that Bertel had managed to pull the knight Gunfredic to his side. Chimera felt desperate, as there was no time to find any powerful forces of his own. Just then, a servant announced that Knight Egan was requesting an audience. Chimera immediately ordered that he be shown into the room. The door opened, and Egan entered with such an imposing aura that Chimera felt compelled to greet him warmly. Chimera assured him that Felician was being kept safe and promised a generous reward from the Lord. He expressed his satisfaction that Egan had brought the letter to him instead of Bertel, which gave him a distinct advantage. Thanks to this, Chimera felt he could breathe a little easier in the ongoing power struggle. Egan replied softly, his knowing gaze hinting that he had his own agenda. Chimera narrowed his eyes, guessing that the knight wanted to meet the Lord to confirm his identity. Egan got straight to the point, requesting to join the team being formed to clear the dungeon. The bold request left Chimera stunned for a moment. Then he burst into an arrogant laugh. Chimera remarked that Egan was far more interesting than he had imagined. He sarcastically asked if the title of knight was one Egan had simply given himself. Chimera pointed out that he had only killed a few bandits, yet now he wanted to join a major mission. He jeered, asking if he was trying to build a reputation or just recklessly seeking fame. Chimera's smile vanished, his eyes turning ice cold as he pressed, asking what reason he had to accept such a proposal. Egan smirked knowingly and replied that he wasn't the one who needed this deal. Chimera was. Facing a skeptical gaze, he played his strategic card. If the dungeon clear was successful, he would only take 100 silver coins and half of the miscellaneous loot, while all the mana stones would belong to him and his mercenaries. Chimera narrowed his eyes suspiciously, realizing the price was abnormally low compared to the going rate, which only made him more wary. Seeing the other man hesitate, Egan delivered the final blow with a cold, direct statement, saying that if it wasn't acceptable, they could just pretend the conversation never happened. Those decisive words forced Chimera into serious consideration. Observing his attire, he surmised that this was a wandering knight who valued honor more than money. He quickly processed all the information he had gathered on the man so far. Meanwhile, Egan continued his psychological play, reminding him that Chimera was the one in a hurry, not him. The comment hit its mark, leaving Chimera momentarily stunned. He realized he was in a weaker position in the power struggle against Bertel. A smug smile spread across Chimera's face as he silently praised his opponent for knowing just when to strike. He noted that Egan was completely different from the knights he'd met before, who only knew brute force. Chimera stood up decisively and extended his hand, signaling his willingness to cooperate. He agreed to the partnership, thinking there was no reason to refuse such a sweet deal, and formally shook hands with Egan. While Chimera thought he was acting for honor, Egan was actually just aiming for the miscellaneous loot, which was easier to sell than the difficult-to-handle mana stones. Everything was going exactly according to his plan. Elsewhere in the castle, Bertel let out a cold laugh upon hearing that his brother had recruited another ally. He scoffed, thinking that any struggling now was far too late in the race for power. Bertel declared that he would oppose any weakling joining the dungeon-clearing team. When the new knight was mentioned, he showed clear contempt, knowing his brother had few connections among the nobility. He turned to Gunfredic and suggested the knight state his own opinion directly. Gunfredic just calmly asked why that responsibility was being pushed onto him. The meeting room door burst open, and Chimera strode in with a triumphant look. He apologized for keeping everyone waiting before introducing the newest member of the clearing team, Knight Egan, along with the company of mercenaries under his command. Bertel immediately recognized him as the mysterious masked man from the city gate. He objected vehemently, arguing they couldn't allow someone with an unknown background to join such a dangerous mission. Chimera just smiled, asserting that Egan's skills had already been proven when he single-handedly wiped out the bandits. He stressed that with that kind of power, Egan was definitely qualified to participate. Suddenly, Gunfredic drew his sword. He launched a lightning-fast attack in an attempt to test Egan. Egan immediately swung his sword to parry the blow, creating a shocking impact that stunned everyone. A loud crack echoed as the wooden floor shattered under the immense force. Amidst the cloud of dust, Gunfredic flashed a sinister smile and feigned an apology for his sudden attack. He stepped closer, his eyes scrutinizing Egan from head to toe. Gunfredic remarked that his hands had no calluses, making him look more like someone who was pampered than a seasoned warrior. He provoked him, demanding that Egan show his true strength. News of the duel spread quickly throughout the castle, attracting a large crowd of soldiers and servants. Everyone buzzed with excitement when they learned that Gunfredic, the third-ranked knight of the tournament, was about to fight right on the spot. Some people exclaimed in shock that Gunfredic's strength far surpassed human limits. Before hundreds of watching eyes, Egan and Gunfredic faced each other in the tense arena. The spectators thought to themselves that anyone facing Gunfredic was truly unlucky, but but Egan maintained his cool and collected demeanor. Gunfredok drew his sword slowly, his eyes filled with provocation. The air grew heavy with anticipation as everyone waited for the signal to start. A bell rang out and the match officially began. Two figures lunged at each other with terrifying speed. The sharp clang of metal striking metal resounded throughout the arena. Sparks flew every time their two blades met. It was a spectacular duel that had all the spectators holding their breath as they watched. Gunfredok maintained his arrogant smirk as they fought. Meanwhile, Egan calmly observed his opponent from behind his mask. The pressure from their clashes made the ground tremble violently. Camira excitedly claimed that Egan was overwhelming him, but the person next to her quickly corrected her, saying it was just a preliminary test. In reality, Gunfredok still hadn't used his full strength. The battle grew more and more intense, with sword strikes that sliced through the air. Gunfredok silently assessed that Egan's swordsmanship was raw and didn't follow any orthodox school of fighting. However, his fighting style was wild and unpredictable. After a few more probing attacks, Gunfredok confirmed his suspicions. He asked him point-blank if his title as a knight was a fake. Gunfredok continued to taunt him, saying that his wild aura was nothing like that of a proper knight. He coldly questioned him, suggesting the title of knight was merely a facade. Gunfredok remarked that Egan's stance and technique lacked a proper foundation. He concluded that his opponent was relying solely on superior physical prowess rather than any trained skill. In Gunfredok's experience, it only took a few moves to see through an opponent's true nature. Egan retorted coldly, telling his opponent that he talked too much. Gunfredok laughed defiantly, declaring that if Egan could defeat him, he would keep this secret safe. Their blades continued to clash loudly, sending brilliant sparks flying across the arena. Under the pressure of blows as heavy as a sledgehammer, Egan let out a slight grunt during the breathtaking exchange. Egan was nearly breathless as he struggled to withstand the overwhelming power of the red-haired knight. Gunfredok stomped his foot hard on the ground, gathering momentum for his next attack. He swung his sword with a terrifying force, as if intending to split his opponent in two with a single blow, making him widen his eyes in shock. A series of thunderous clashes echoed across the arena. Dust and debris were kicked up into the air, completely obscuring the view of all the spectators. Camira cried out in horror at the scene of devastation, worried that Egan might have been knocked unconscious. But in that very moment, from within the thick cloud of dust, Egan's crimson eyes flashed with killing intent from beneath his mask. He immediately counterattacked with terrifying speed, moving like a phantom to close in on Gunfredok. The relentless, rapid sound of clashing metal rang out once again. During the exchange, Egan couldn't help but inwardly admire his opponent's incredible speed. He unleashed a powerful counterstrike, pouring all of his strength into the slash. A brilliant burst of energy exploded in the middle of the arena. The fight erupted into a high-octane action scene, with their movements so fast they created afterimages. Egan and Gunfredok charged at each other like two swirling tornadoes. The two of them clashed head-on in an uncompromising test of strength right in the center of the ring. Gunfredok let out a huge, excited laugh, putting his full power into it, his muscles bulging as he marveled at the strength of his smaller opponent. Facing that pressure, Egan calmly acknowledged that his opponent's physical strength was superior. But he understood that victory wouldn't be decided by brute force, but by the final, decisive strategy. He quickly shifted his focus, exploiting an opening in Gunfredok's fighting style to counterattack. A vicious and precise arm lock was executed perfectly. Gunfredok staggered, struggling to regain his balance after the unexpected takedown. Egan continued to move with a speed that left the spectators utterly stunned. He closed in like a specter, leaving his opponent completely astonished. Gunfredok realized his opponent wasn't fighting with a conventional style, but relying on survival instincts and an extraordinary ability to adapt. He gritted his teeth, wondering just where in the world this man in front of him came from. Immediately after, a thunderous punch came crashing down. The blow sent the colossal knight flying dozens of feet away. Gunfredok's body slammed hard against the arena wall, creating a deafening boom. As the dust and debris settled, he lay motionless, completely unable to resist. Lying amidst the rubble, Gunfredok gasped for air and admitted his defeat. The referee quickly declared Sir Egan the winner. The crowd was stunned silent for a moment, before erupting into a thunderous roar of cheers. Everyone was buzzing non-stop about the terrifying power of the mysterious knight named Egan. Laban was excitedly showing off, while Parutek could only shake his head in weary disbelief at his friend's sudden change of heart. Down in the arena, Gunfredok slowly opened his eyes. He looked up at Egan, who stood tall and imposing like an unmovable mountain. That image was enough to make him concede defeat completely, with no reservations. Suddenly, Gunfredok shot to his feet, his eyes shining with excitement. Egan grew cautious, but then Gunfredok loudly called for everyone to applaud the victor. To his complete astonishment, Gunfredok grabbed his hand. Then he raised it high into the air with a look of pride. The entire stadium began chanting Egan's name in unison, leaving him standing there, stunned amidst the roaring wave of cheers. After his resounding victory, Egan was treated to a magnificent feast by order of the Lord. The butler respectfully announced that it was a special preparation from Chimera, meant to help him recover before conquering the dungeon. Looking at the table piled high with gourmet delicacies, Egan broke into a cold sweat at the overly enthusiastic reception. The butler had also thoughtfully blocked out the light, knowing he was sensitive to it, and even offered fine wine if he so desired. Unable to reveal his identity as a vampire, he had no choice but to endure it in silence while Miriam flew around, teasing him. Egan coldly refused, saying that he appreciated the thought, but from now on he would take care of his own meals. The servants couldn't hide their surprise at his blunt refusal. He ordered everyone to back away, stating that he preferred some quiet. After the fight, the way everyone looked at Egan changed completely, and the next morning, Chimera eagerly struck up a conversation with him. Chimera acted friendly and curious about why he refused all comforts, while the maids whispered in admiration. Gunfredok suddenly appeared with an overwhelming enthusiasm, leaving Egan both surprised and exasperated. The red-haired guy stuck to him like a shadow, while an annoyed Egan demanded that he keep his distance. Gunfredok excitedly talked about yesterday's match and challenged him to a rematch, causing Egan to coldly ask if he had a fetish for getting beaten up. Even so, Gunfredok was still thrilled at the idea of another duel, and the maids cheered them on enthusiastically, even though he had already established a solid reputation. Being constantly surrounded by a crowd made Egan feel uncomfortable, and he just wanted to find some peace and quiet. As he was leaving, he suddenly froze when he saw a mysterious acquaintance approaching to greet him. Egan was stunned as he recognized the person who had just appeared in the twilight. The evening twilight bathed the castle grounds in a crimson glow. In the gloomy space, the sounds of a savage beating echoed along with desperate pleas for mercy. The victim only had time to cry out in agony before collapsing in a pool of blood. Bertel sighed in frustration, blaming his subordinate for botching the mission. He was furious that the plan had failed, creating an opportunity for the red-eyed knight to show up at the castle. Bertel sneered that the mercenaries were so useless, they couldn't even fight off a pack of black wolves. He violently grabbed his subordinate's face, questioning if the man's eyes were just for decoration. In a fit of rage, Bertel coldly declared that he would gouge out those useless eyes himself. He raised his hand, aiming straight for the subordinate's eye, causing the onlookers to hold their breath in terror at his cruelty. Bertel calmly wiped the blood from his hands, his mind already churning with his next dark scheme. He stood by the window looking out into the silent night, a sinister smile spreading across his face as he thought of a perfect solution. Back with Felician, the boy was exhausted from the brutal beatings. Egan suddenly appeared, coldly informing him that Bertel had arranged for Felician to join the vanguard team entering the dungeon, which was a pre-planned death sentence. Faced with this threat, the boy sat silently in his chair, his gaze unusually firm. Felician calmly replied that if it was his fate, then he was ready to face death. He brought up the Black Wolf ambush, stating that it was a conspiracy by someone in his own family to eliminate him. He knew full well that his family never wanted him to survive long enough to reach the castle. With a piercingly cold gaze, Egan made a bitter proposition. From now on, Felician would become his slave in exchange for protection. He said the choice was simple: either keep running and wait to be killed, or fight to the last breath to seize the right to live. The day the dungeon opened finally arrived, as the massive stone gates slowly creaked open. Egan observed carefully, concluding that no one knew for sure what monsters were inside. They could only guess, with possibilities ranging from goblins, trolls, and giant spiders to unidentified high-level creatures. Gunfredok ordered the troops to advance to the mid-level monster zone and commanded an immediate retreat if any high-level monsters appeared. After the order was given, the soldiers began their reconnaissance, while a few mercenaries secretly discussed their plans to desert. They believed that in the chaos, no one would notice them disappearing. One of them decided to make a run for it to save his own skin, but he was immediately struck down from behind. Bertel appeared with a cold look in his eyes, demanding to know where Felician was. He mockingly called the boy a bastard, and boasted that he himself had arranged this dangerous post for him. His gaze flickered over to Egan, full of suspicion, as he saw him receiving supplies. Egan accepted some dry rations from a mysterious masked person, along with a wish for his safety, while Bertel sneered at the commoners with no family name. Bertel kicked away someone who was in his path, and then roared in Egan and Felician's direction. He moved in close to Felician, exerting immense pressure. Bertel growled, asking if the boy had forgotten his orders. When Felician remained frozen, he ordered him to immediately grab his gear and return to his post, causing the boy to tremble, unable to move. Exploding with rage, Bertel roared, believing the boy was defying his orders. Just as he was about to strike, Egan appeared and stopped him with an ice-cold glare. He sarcastically remarked that putting a young boy on the front lines was an incredibly foolish move. Bertel tried to shove his hand away, but Egan stood his ground, asserting that he was training Felician. He looked Bertel straight in the eye and declared that he had no right to lay a hand on the boy. Bertel furiously shouted back, but Egan calmly announced to everyone that, as of yesterday, Felician had become his slave. The shocking declaration left Felician stunned, while Egan affirmed that everyone present was a witness. Under the watchful eyes of Gunfredok and the soldiers, he made his stance perfectly clear. He warned that anyone who touched Felician would be declaring war on him. Egan stepped closer to Bertel, taunting that if he wanted, they could warm up with a duel right before entering the dungeon. The cold sound of a sword being drawn from its sheath rang out, causing Bertel's face to twist with rage. He cursed inwardly, his plan to eliminate Felician now completely ruined. The soldiers began to murmur amongst themselves, recalling the duel between Egan and Gunfredok as proof of his true strength. Chimera walked over and patted Felician on the shoulder, giving him a meaningful, cryptic smile. He told the boy to survive, but that smile sent a chill down one's spine. Egan watched it all unfold, understanding that Felician was just a pawn in their power struggle. Chimera had once offered to take Felician to the library, instead of pushing him into the dungeon. Just then, a soldier ran up to report that there were no signs of monsters escaping, and that they could proceed with opening the gate. Gunfredok and Egan simultaneously gave the order to begin, and the troops advanced into the dungeon through a thick cloud of dust and smoke. Gunfredok turned back with a cocky grin, reminding everyone to watch out for their own lives. The soldiers tightened their grips on their weapons, shouted their war cry, and charged into the monster's domain. Gunfredok and Egan led the formation, kicking off a fierce battle in the darkness. Felician watched anxiously from the outside, shouting for him to return safely. The dungeon gate swung shut, completely sealing them off from the outside world. The roars of monsters echoed from within, signaling the beginning of a massacre. In the chaos, a soldier was surrounded by goblins and screamed desperately for help. Just as the monster's claws were about to finish him off, a brilliant flash of red light from a sword flew in and saved his life. The soldier was astonished to realize he was still alive. Gunfredok immediately roared for them to hold the battle formation. He fought while ordering the archers to protect the center of the formation. Arrows whistled through the air, piercing the heads of the charging monsters. Gunfredok continued to command, refusing to let the formation break. Meanwhile, a cowardly soldier hid behind a rock, planning to flee. He tried to sneak away, but the darkness of the dungeon quickly swallowed the coward. Pairs of yellow monster eyes appeared in the dark and lunged at him. Gunfredok appeared just in time, scolding the foolish soldier. He grabbed the soldier by the collar and warned him that turning his back to run would only get him killed faster. Gunfredok ordered him to draw his sword and fight if he wanted to live. Before them, the horde of monsters continued to pour in like an endless tide. Watching the mercenaries fight so poorly, Gunfredok gritted his teeth in frustration at how weak his forces were. The monsters kept surging forward, causing one soldier to scream in panic. Gunfredok realized the army had been surrounded on two sides. The situation was extremely dangerous. In that life-or-death moment, he commanded them to switch to a two-front battle formation. Just then, Egan's cold voice rang out from behind, telling him to leave it to him. Ignoring all warnings, Egan charged in like a whirlwind. His blazing red sword strikes wiping out the monsters in the blink of an eye, leaving Gunfredok stunned by his terrifying power. A mystical dark vortex suddenly appeared at Egan's feet, then quickly vanished into thin air. He immediately activated his enhancement skill, clearing the surrounding area in the blink of an eye. Unwilling to let him fight alone, Gunfredok immediately ordered his subordinates to provide support. The two of them, holding torches, rushed deep into the dark cave to provide reinforcements. The sight before them was horrifying, as a long, bloody path was paved with the corpses of monsters. When they reached a fork in the path, Gunfredok froze in shock when he saw Egan standing casually amidst a mountain of monster corpses, even picking up a strange glowing flower. Gunfredok could only manage a forced smile, realizing it was just a common glowworm, not the treasure he had imagined it to be. Looking at the brutal scene, he couldn't help but shudder at Egan's terrifying power. After the battle, the dungeon was filled with the groans of severely wounded soldiers. Egan walked silently through the battlefield, received a report that all remaining magic stones had been collected, and ordered his forces to assemble. Looking at the meager number of magic stones in his hand, he let out a short, frustrated laugh. He was dissatisfied that the reward wasn't worth the immense effort, and then ordered everyone to rest. The blue magic stone in his hand made Egan realize it was completely different from the red type he had absorbed before. Miriam flew around him, chirping that it was small, while he concluded that a monster's strength was proportional to the quality of its magic stone. Miriam recalled the giant swamp monster from before, asserting that such powerful creatures were extremely rare. Egan realized that obtaining that precious red magic stone back then was truly a stroke of incredible luck. He thought to himself that this trip to the dungeon didn't provide benefits proportional to the effort expended. While Miriam was still speculating about high-level monsters, Egan already sensed an immense pressure approaching. Gunfreddick immediately ended the rest period and ordered the formation to be reassembled. He berated the weak mercenaries and declared that he and Egan would lead the formation and that any deserters would be dealt with severely. Although he appeared calm, Egan inwardly sighed, lamenting that he had to take on the responsibility of the vanguard on his very first time in a dungeon. Gunfreddick judged the mercenaries to be too weak and wanted to rely on Egan to stabilize the formation. He requested his assistance in coordinating combat tactics. The atmosphere grew heavier the deeper they went, signaling the appearance of higher-level monsters, the ferocious Oros. Gunfreddick warned that after they eliminated these creatures, a high-level monster would surely be waiting in the center of the dungeon. Egan silently recalled the memory of absorbing the red magic stone from the Swamp Lord. That source of energy had granted him an incredibly important survival ability. Staring into the deep darkness, his red eyes shone with a thirst for power. The thought of collecting high-level magic stones filled him with excitement at the prospect of increasing his strength. Listening to the movements around him, Egan determined there were more than 50 monsters ahead and 3 powerful entities behind them. A slight smirk appeared on his lips, showing his interest in the upcoming challenge. He asked his comrades if they wanted to try their hand first. Immediately after, a blazing red sword strike tore through the space. The Orochi monster was split in two in the blink of an eye, to everyone's astonishment. A thunderous battle cry erupted as the entire army charged into a fierce battle. Egan led the spearhead of the attack, moving like a phantom amidst the encircling monsters. The Oros shrieked in desperation as they were mercilessly wiped out. In the midst of the battle, a soldier shouted for everyone to protect Egan and received a resolute reply. He unleashed fatal slashes, felling enemies in a single instant. A soldier tried to move in to provide support, but Egan had already vanished from his sight. His speed was so incredible that his comrades thought their eyes were playing tricks on them. With his blazing red eyes, he spun around and delivered a finishing blow to a savage monster. Egan stood in the middle of the bloody battlefield, his face stained with the marks of combat, but his gaze remained cold. His final sword thrust pierced through the defenses of the dying monster at his feet. If there were battlefield news flashes, the headline would probably read, "The Advent of a God of Slaughter." For the soldiers who witnessed that scene, the image of the mysterious knight was forever seared into their minds. In their minds, a knight was supposed to fight with nobility and honor. They were meant to always maintain a dignified composure and an indomitable spirit. But what they had just witnessed was the complete opposite. Egan's fighting style completely shattered any traditional mold of a knight. Gunfreddick and his soldiers broke out in a cold sweat as they watched him fight with the monstrous ferocity of a beast. That wasn't the bearing of a protector, but the image of a bloodthirsty, wild warrior. After the battle, silence fell upon the dungeon, and the exhausted soldiers leaned against the supply carts. Egan noticed their stamina was draining at an abnormally fast rate. He guessed their morale had been eroded by the horrific spectacle they had just endured. Realizing the situation wasn't good, he considered halting their advance deeper into the dungeon. Gunfreddick approached him and suggested they retreat, since they had already accomplished their objective. He argued that returning now was the safest course of action. However, Egan coldly refused, stating that he still had plenty of strength to fight, and that anyone who wanted to retreat was free to do so. Hearing this, Gunfreddick decided to press on with him. But instead, Egan ordered Gunfreddick to lead the troops back first in order to preserve their strength. He declared that for the path ahead, he and the mercenary squad would be more than enough. Harutek immediately stepped forward with a torch, earnestly pleading to be allowed to continue fighting by Egan's side. As the soldiers breathed a sigh of relief, grateful to have avoided charging to their deaths, Gunfreddick silently watched Egan's back, suddenly realizing the knight had long understood his soldiers' exhaustion and had quietly shouldered the danger for them. It turned out that beneath that cold, indifferent exterior was a heart that always looked out for the weak. Watching Egan's figure fade into the thick darkness of the dungeon, Gunfreddick couldn't help but ponder. That young man made him rethink the definition of a true knight, with an exterior as cold as ice but an interior that burned like a sacred flame. Labral's hand trembled as he held up a torch to light the way through the pitch-black cave, his mind endlessly muttering curses about his bad luck. Being scared enough to wet his pants while also being forced to go deeper was a combination that would drive anyone insane. Looking at Egan's back ahead of him, he reassured himself that this was the man who had soloed a boss before. If anything happened, he would surely turn the tables in an instant. Suddenly, a dry, crisp crack echoed from right under Labral's foot. He frantically looked down and saw the corpse of a sickly green spider. The spider had been crushed by his own foot, and he barely managed to stammer out the two words, "a spider." Instantly, from within the darkness, tens of thousands of glowing red eyes opened in unison, and the entire swarm of spiders began to emerge. Giant spiders crawled down from the cave's ceiling, completely surrounding the group, causing Labrel to freeze in terror. This was an extremely aggressive, pack-hunting species of spider monster. Inside the cave, they could spit a corrosive acid that could liquefy their prey in a mere instant. Faced with the relentless wave of attacks, a panicked Parutek screamed that there were too many and they should retreat. But the only response was Egan's glowing red eyes and a single cold question: retreat. To Egan, this swarm of spiders was nothing more than an appetizer. He immediately charged straight into the encirclement. His sword drew sharp, swift slashes that tore the monsters apart in the blink of an eye. Seeing that he had charged into battle, Parutek quickly gave orders to the rest of the team. Labrel provides support for Sir Egan. Now that he's entered the battlefield, we can't hesitate. The battle erupted, with the main character moving like a phantom through the bloody fantasy, each critical strike sending green ichor splattering across the cave, yet the swarm of spiders just kept coming. Trapped in the dense encirclement, Labrel screamed, "Help me," as sharp spider legs closed in on his face, his expression twisting in panic. A giant spider with bloodshot eyes and a maw full of razor-sharp teeth suddenly appeared right in front of him. Labrel was frozen stiff like a statue, cold sweat pouring down his face, feeling like he was about to go viral in the worst way imaginable. Just when his life was hanging by a thread, Egan unleashed a fatal slash that sent the monster flying backward. Stunned, Labrel looked up at his savior with a gaze full of both reverence and astonishment. Egan maintained his cold demeanor, continuously dashing at incredible speeds, each swing of his sword tearing through the air and staining the entire cave green with monster blood. Exhausted after the nightmare, Labrel collapsed to his knees, able to do nothing but pant heavily as he stared at the devastated scene. After the storm of blades, a mountain of spider corpses covered the dark cave floor. It was the kind of scene where after the fight, you realize you're the only one left standing on the mat. Labrel looked at Egan standing tall amidst a sea of monster corpses, with a mixture of worship and fear, wondering to himself if he was even human. He forced himself up, trying to regain his composure, and stammered out his praise. "You're incredible, sir. You've killed enough. Can we go back now?" Turning to his captain for agreement. But the captain didn't answer. He just stood there, his face ashen. He uttered with a trembling voice, "Why? Why would something so terrifying exist in a place like this?" Normally, cave spiders have a clear hierarchy, but because high-tier monsters are rare, the expedition team had overlooked this possibility. Before Gunfredic was the highest-tier spider, the cave spider lord, with countless bloodshot eyes, hanging suspended from above. It felt like the words "Game Over" were already on the screen. The monster let out a roar that shook the entire dungeon, and the pressure it emitted was so heavy it was suffocating. Faced with such a high-tier entity, the panicked mercenaries begged to retreat and hoped Gunfredic would come with reinforcements. In the face of his subordinates' fear, Egan remained unusually calm, softly calling out the names Parutek and Labrel. His eyes glowed a vibrant red as if activating his serious mode, and his voice was cold as he commanded, "You two fall back. This one is my prey." Not daring to argue, they both obeyed in unison and hastily retreated. A terrible pressure welled up inside Parutek, as if he were being crushed by an invisible force. Every nerve in his body screamed at him to run immediately if he didn't want to die. Witnessing the scene, the water spirit Miriam appeared with a smirk. "Your instincts have already surrendered to the difference in power levels between you and my master." She wondered curiously if this lord was as strong as the Swamp Lord, then concluded that it might even be a bit stronger. This was shaping up to be a pretty intense fight. Miriam thought excitedly about the spoils of victory. The magic stone would surely be much bigger. The giant spider dove down from above, intending to land a finishing blow, but it was immediately met with a vertical slash that cleanly sliced it in two. Egan stood in the middle of the battlefield, a piece of the monster in his hand, his expression terrifyingly emotionless. Absorbing the Lord's magic stone, he felt his body transform as black scales gradually covered his arm. The second ability he gained after absorbing it was camouflage. His flesh was enhanced to protect his body, and combined with his camouflage ability, it could regenerate a complete layer of human skin. Finally, he could walk under the sun like a normal human being. From then on, he no longer had to sneak around avoiding the sunlight like before. At the outdoor party, Egan appeared without his mask, causing the ladies' eyes to widen in surprise. They gathered around, gushing over his handsome face, and asking about the battle with the giant spider, while he just remained silent amidst the shower of praise as Labrel laughed along. Parutek laughed loudly, boasting about how tough his boss was, while Miriam chirped, urging him to recount his heroic deeds instead of maintaining his cold, aloof persona. His splendid appearance made the girls wonder if he had elven blood. Gunfredic, startled, blurted out, "An elf," while Egan was merely annoyed that his noble status attracted so much attention. Suddenly, Gunfredic slammed his hand on the table with a loud bang, declaring that everything was now clear. He began to list all the unusual things, like his eyes glowing brightly inside the dungeon. His hearing was as sharp as a wolf's, his speed was incredible, and his spear-throwing strength was terrifying. Clearly, he wasn't an ordinary man. And now, on top of all that, there was the suspicion of elven blood. It was like his character build was way too overpowered. Gunfredic let out a hearty laugh, saying that with looks like those, it would be hard not to stand out. The old knight wondered how he could have hidden himself for so long, but Egan just remained silent, annoyed by the red-haired knight's sharpness. Egan touched his chin, a mysterious smile playing on his lips as everyone watched him with curiosity. "Wells," he said, "I never tried to hide anything." That nonchalant answer left Gunfredic, Felician, and the group of ladies completely stunned. Gunfredic burst out laughing, saying Egan was great at lying with a straight face, while the ladies remained mesmerized by his beauty. Amidst the teasing, Egan thought to himself that if suspicions arose in the future, he could just blame it on having some elven ancestry. But deep down, he realized a great change had occurred after the battle. Not only did he have a new ability, but one of his ceiling tattoos had vanished, and strange memories were beginning to surface. A brilliant red light flashed in his eyes, as unfamiliar images flooded his mind like a torrent. He saw himself lying in a strange place, looking different from how he did now. A soft hand took his, and in that strange space, the chime of a bell echoed as Egan felt countless eyes fixed upon him. He wondered in despair as all eyes turned to him. "But my name is Egan, not some stranger named Jiang Yuan Yang." Who was the woman who appeared in that chaotic mess of memories, and more importantly, were those truly his own memories, or just an illusion? His past was shrouded in a thick fog, everything so hazy that he couldn't grasp even a single clear piece of the puzzle. The only thing that remained in his mind was the name Egan, and just as he was lost in thought, a desperate cry of Sir Egan violently pulled him back to reality. The cry for help rang out again, and he turned with a start to see Gunfredic roughly grabbing Labrel by the collar. The red-haired knight sneered and yelled, "I heard everything, you useless brat. How dare you say you're just a burden to Sir Egan?" Gunfredic tightened his grip, nearly choking the young boy. He scoffed, saying, "It's only because Sir Egan isn't a normal person that he hasn't run away yet." Then he turned to interrogate him. "So, are you saying he's a monster? You want a taste of hell?" Amidst the noisy party, Egan remained calm, as if completely detached from all the commotion. He closed his eyes, lost in thought. "The only thing I remember is the name Egan, but after this my intuition is growing stronger." Looking at the ceiling tattoos that were gradually fading, he told himself that if he continued to undo the seals one by one, perhaps the truth would be revealed. Egan understood that he wasn't the flashy titles others had spun for him, like knight or someone with elven blood, but his own true self. Sometime later, he and Felician entered the room where the Lord was recuperating. The old man asked softly, "I heard you were successful in conquering the dungeon this time." Prema bowed respectfully, introduced himself as the third son of the family, and expressed what an honor it was to meet them. Egan stepped forward and introduced himself under his false identity, while the frail lord nodded weakly, saying, "You must have gone through a lot." He ordered a scroll to be brought over and said, "I heard that you needed documents to prove your identity. I'm not sure how much this will help, but this should be enough to confirm your identity as a member of the Egan family." He took the scroll and thanked him, but just then, the lord broke into a violent coughing fit. Those around him cried out, "Father," in panic and worry. Between ragged breaths, he grasped his son's hand and warned, "Because of the ambition of my second son, I cannot close my eyes in peace." Prema, racked with grief, reassured his father not to worry, promising that he would take over the land his father had built. But the Lord whispered back that land is nothing but dust, and a true lord must lead his people, not just possess territory. Felician stood silently in the background, witnessing the family's heavy moment of life and death. Although it was unclear what kind of man he had been, the funeral was shrouded in a sorrowful atmosphere, with many people mourning his passing. However, in the face of death, not everyone shares the same feelings. Bertel stood there with a darkened face, his eyes clearly showing dissatisfaction and resentment. The funeral concluded as the sunset stained the sky red. Gunfredic asked for permission to leave in the middle of the service, and Egan calmly replied that it was fine, as he understood the man had his own business to attend to. Afterwards, he turned and asked Gunfredic if he truly intended to stay in this place. Egan casually confirmed that he would enter the dungeon one more time, because now that the gate was open, he couldn't waste the opportunity to farm for resources. Gunfredic let out a regretful laugh, saying that if it were Count Evergrow, he would surely hold Egan in high regard. The red-haired knight extended his hand, expressing what an honor it would be to fight alongside such a strong warrior. "I hope that the next time we meet, we won't be standing on opposing sides." Egan silently shook his hand, returning the formal gesture. That handshake was as heavy as signing a treaty worth 100 billion between two great powers. His commanding aura, a mixture of various bloodlines, made anyone who laid eyes on him wary. Watching Gunfredic ride away, Parutek shouted for him to take care, then turned and gave the order to prepare to set out. A bewildered Felician asked again, "But you just said you were going to stay." Parutek explained that a knight must have a horse, so they were planning to find one worthy of Egan. Glenn, meanwhile, had gone to the merchant guild to deal with the pile of loot from the monsters. Hearing this, Felician eagerly volunteered to serve diligently as an attendant. But Egan looked at him with cold eyes and stated firmly that for the time being, he didn't need anyone to wait on him. Felician stood there, stunned, completely unable to understand what his master was planning. The scene shifts to Marun, the bustling seaport of the kingdom's largest commercial city, where the shouts of merchants and the clamor of busy ships echo across the harbor. At Marinsamwood port, astonished whispers rose up at the sight of a colossal pile of goods that had just been unloaded. The locals were shocked to learn that this entire haul of spoils was brought back from a monster's den by a single night. Standing in the middle of the crowd, people proudly proclaimed that this was all the work of Sir Egan. The name Egan immediately sent shockwaves through the crowd, because he was the very man who had taken down the trolls in the crippled army's territory, going from a nobody to the center of attention overnight. While everyone was still buzzing with discussion, a merchant stepped forward. After dealing with the goods, Egan entered the Merchant Guild's office to negotiate. Bill Moore respectfully began, saying that the story might be a bit long, but for Egan not to worry. He introduced himself as a representative of the Palin Merchant Guild and promised to take full responsibility for selling all of the spoils. Egan quietly observed him and realized this merchant guild was much larger than he had imagined, despite his initial doubts. Just as Bill Moore was going on and on about an exclusive contract, a loud noise echoed through the room. The door burst open, and a middle-aged man wearing a monocle stepped inside, coldly asking who Sir Egan was. His companion standing beside him worriedly whispered that the situation seemed to be getting complicated. The man who had just appeared was none other than the secretary to the vice-chairman of the Palin Merchant Guild. Egan furrowed his brow, demanding a clear explanation for this interruption. His companion warned that this man held more power than Bill Moore and seemed to want to force the price of the spoils down. Bill Moore tried to intervene, but was immediately and violently silenced by the man named Gray. Gray coldly told him not to compete with an opponent he couldn't possibly win against, reminding him that no contract had been signed yet. He then turned to Egan and sneered that the rumors of him snapping a troll's neck were just a ploy to inflate the value of his goods. Gray arrogantly declared that the vice-chairman wanted to sign the contract personally and demanded they leave this shabby place, inwardly scorning Egan as just some rookie knight. But suddenly, an immense pressure enveloped the room, causing Gray's face to turn pale as sweat poured from his brow. Before Egan's powerful, glowing red eyes, the man was almost frozen solid. The secretary immediately adopted a polite tone, reintroducing himself as Gray and praising this as an excellent opportunity for him. However, he just coldly asked what kind of opportunity it was. Gray stammered, explaining that it involved better negotiation terms for the spoils of war. Egan's gaze cut him off with a short, simple question: how is it better? Seeing that his opponent was still unmoved, Gray quickly revealed that the Vice Guild Master would be negotiating directly. But Egan's reaction sent a cold sweat down Gray's spine, as he repeated with a tremor in his voice, "The Vice Guild Master is coming in person." Feeling the murderous aura growing heavier by the second, Gray quickly bowed low and apologized. "If I have done anything to displease you, sir, I truly meant no disrespect." In response to Egan's question, which was as cold as a blade, about the word disrespect, the secretary was so terrified that he scrambled out of the room, stammering, "My apologies, I will return later." Witnessing the whole exchange, Bill Moore was moved to tears, crying out how truly grateful he was to Sir Egan. He was sobbing even harder than the heroine of a tragic drama during the most climactic chapter. He believed that Egan had rejected the Vice Guild Master's lucrative contract just to keep his promise, which only deepened his admiration. Overwhelmed with emotion, Bill Moore dropped to his knees and swore his undying loyalty. "Whatever you need, Sir Egan, I will do anything," while our main character just gave a smirk, full of hidden meaning. He had just excitedly asked when they would begin, only to have a bucket of cold water thrown on him when Egan replied, "Right now, you can leave." Meanwhile, at the Merchant Guild's office, a trembling Gray reported his failure to his superior, confirming that Egan was not as ordinary as the rumors suggested. The Vice Guild Master didn't get angry, but calmly told him to lift his head, remarking that knights often cling to their hollow honor to make things difficult for merchants. She gave a sinister smile and declared, "If that's the case, we'll just use a merchant's methods to strike back. After all, money and goods are the real weapons." Through the window, she watched his retreating figure and scoffed, especially when the opponent is a knight so poor he doesn't even have a proper warhorse. Prepare a gift for Sir Egan, something that any destitute knight would find difficult to refuse. Aidan gave the order coldly, leaving Felician so stunned he couldn't believe his ears. The boy stammered, "You're telling me to stay here and sell all these spoils?" Egan confirmed that was his mission, to continue selling the monster materials to Iza. Felician wondered sorrowfully if he was always being left behind because he was too weak, and in his despair, he resolved to start training with the sword today so he would no longer be a burden. Egan turned back and looked the boy straight in the eye, asking, "What is the duty of a slave?" The sudden pop quiz left the boy completely frozen. He answered with a tremble in his voice that he was supposed to provide combat support, and also to take care of the daily needs of the knight he serves. Egan nodded. You understand perfectly. Your duty is to support me as my slave. He then instructed Felician to learn how to do business from Billmore to sell the spoils and earn money. Watching Egan's back as he walked away, Felician told himself that if it weren't for him, he would have been dead long ago. He felt ashamed for ever complaining about such trivial things. Just then, Egan's promise echoed clearly in his mind. When I've earned enough money, I'll consider teaching you swordsmanship. Sooner or later, you'll have to support me in battle. Felician's eyes lit up, shining with hope. He placed a hand over his chest and swore to obey Sir Egan's every command. Under the sunset that enveloped the city, Felician waved goodbye to his master. Egan walked away with a completely empty coin purse, muttering to himself that money comes in like a breeze but leaves like a storm. Even after saving as much as possible, his wallet was still empty. The water spirit Miriam flew beside him, worried about her master's shrunken wallet, asking if they would be able to earn more money soon. He remained silent, his gaze fixed on a magnificent new suit of armor. Standing before the gleaming silver armor, he couldn't help but stare in awe. This was the red armor, the dream of every knight in fantasy. Miriam asked, a dream? Does that mean it's very expensive? The main character stared intently and replied, not just expensive, it's an heirloom. Just then, a soldier came rushing over in a panic. He shattered the atmosphere with a loud shout, Sir Egan. The soldier, out of breath, reported that monsters from the eastern forest were pouring into the city, and that Yildirim Iran was trying to stop them. Hearing this, his companion's eyes lit up, suggesting they join the suppression effort. In response to Egan's question of why, he explained that unlike raiding a monster's designated lair, there would be no fee deducted for eliminating monsters that appeared freely. He emphasized that this was Marin, a commercial city where loot could be sold at high prices without any shipping costs, and his eyes lit up at the golden opportunity to make a fortune. Unwilling to miss the chance, Egan decisively gave the order to depart. But just as they were about to leave, a voice called out, wait a minute. Gray, the Vice Guild Master's secretary, ran over, completely out of breath. He brought with him a magnificent black steed, announcing that he had been sent to present him with a warhorse. Gray continuously praised the horse's sleek black coat and its powerful, solid muscles. He affirmed that this was a prestigious, purebred steed from a noble red bloodline. Egan, slightly surprised, asked, a gift from the Vice Guild Master. His icy gaze was so intense it felt like it could scare Gray's soul right out of his body. He hurriedly explained that it was just a small token of sincerity, with no other intentions. Without another word, Egan vaulted onto the horse's back with a single, fluid motion. Seated firmly on the warhorse, Egan spurred the animal and charged forward. He left only a single message behind, convey my thanks to him. As he sped away, Miriam flew alongside him, excitedly cheering, get ready to rake in the cash, master. The frantic soldiers asked their captain what to do, seeing him ride off so quickly, but the captain could only yell, hurry and follow him. The soldiers hastily acknowledged the order and charged after him. Gray stood silently, watching them leave with a calculating look in his eyes. In the eastern forest, the air was thick with the smell of blood from a monster's slaughter, but the sound of hooves suddenly shattered the silence, leaving the creatures bewildered. Before they could even understand what was happening, a dark figure rushed in like a flash of lightning. Egan swung his sword so fast the naked eye couldn't follow, felling a monster in a single breath. His ice-cold gaze swept over the scene before he spurred his horse onward, deeper into the danger zone. From high above, Miriam observed the dense horde of monsters, worrying aloud if the guilds up ahead had already been wiped out. In contrast, Egan's eyes glowed with an excited red hue as he thought to himself, perfect. Because he was not in the habit of sharing his spoils with anyone, he spurred his horse on, charging through the dense forest canopy. The thundering hooves crushed the grass and plants underfoot. Dust kicked up in a thick cloud under the sunlight that filtered through the leaves. Up ahead, a brutal battlefield came into view, where soldiers were struggling desperately. They were fighting for their lives against a horde of ferocious Oros monsters under a bright red banner. Surrounded, the golden-haired knight Madrika, clad in silver armor, shouted, "You will not take another step unless you defeat me." The monsters roared and charged again with such ferocity that her panicked warhorse slipped and collapsed in the middle of the battlefield. Madrika was thrown to the ground, her entire body racked with a sharp pain, as if every joint had been shattered. Even in this hopeless situation, she grit her teeth, trying to maintain her dignity. I am Madrika, a knight of justice. The honor of Marin rests on my shoulders, but before she could finish her vow, the shadows of the red-eyed Oros loomed over her, leaving Madrika frozen in terror. Faced with imminent death, the knight's pride shattered, and she trembled, crying out in despair. Please spare me. Just as the monster's weapon was about to strike, a cold, sharp blade sliced through the air, cutting them down in an instant. Madrika was stunned to see Egan appear like a phantom on his black steed. his red eyes radiating a bone-chilling killing intent. He didn't stop for a moment, continuing to swing his sword ruthlessly while still on horseback. The Oros blocking his path were cut down in the blink of an eye, each slash as fluid and perfect as a master activating an ultimate skill. Witnessing such overwhelming power, Madrika couldn't hold back her tears. She choked out her thanks and asked for her savior's name, but Egan paid her no mind, turning his head as he sensed another monster charging from behind. Its powerful blow struck Madrika, severely injuring her. Blood splattered across her silver armor, but just in the nick of time, he charged in to save her, his blood-soaked blade cleanly cutting down the enemy as if he had predicted its every move. He coldly replied, "Does a name even matter right now? If we die knowing it would be meaningless." Madrika just laughed heartily at his attitude and continued to fight, while our hero swung his sword to block every wave of attacks. As they fought, she declared that if she survived this hellhole, she would definitely ask for his name again. As the group advanced toward Marin, hundreds of goblins swarmed them like a tidal wave. Surrounded, he and his comrades fought to the very end, with the cold, masked knight cutting down every enemy in sight, while Madrika proudly admitted she contributed her fair share. In the end, victory belonged to the humans. The city of Marin was safe, and everyone breathed a sigh of relief, knowing they had won this battle. In the midst of the bustling crowd, Madrika was enthusiastically recounting the events when she suddenly paused. A curious citizen asked who that knight was, the one the entire city was gossiping about like he was the star of a drama. She gave a mysterious smile and announced that the savior's name was Egan. That name sent shockwaves through Marin, as people whispered to each other about his feat of clearing a dungeon in another territory. Rumor had it that he once ripped the spine out of a monster while it was still alive. The citizens hailed him as the hero of Marin, and chants of Egan echoed through the streets, reaching all the way to the seat of power. From a high window, Louis Fallon, the city's mayor, silently watched the frenzied crowd below. As the former representative of the Felan Merchant Guild, he mused that the greater Egan's fame grew, the harder he would be to control. Louis turned to his niece, Fricella, and asked worriedly if it was okay to just let this happen, but she just smiled confidently, assuring him everything was under control. Fricella schemingly said that she wanted him to become even more famous, because the higher his reputation, the greater his fear of losing it. She then asked about the young disciple Egan had with him, the one who regularly sold their spoils of war to the Merchant Guild. Fricella revealed that the child was a secret, illegitimate son of the Tyne clan. Louis became extremely interested in this piece of information. Fricella analyzed that it seemed he was earning money to support that illegitimate child. She believed that if they could cleverly control them both, they could build a relationship with someone who might become the new head of the Tyne clan. Louis smirked, praising his niece for wanting to bribe a knight who was backing a secret heir. As the mayor, he decided to send a gift to thank the hero and put Fricella in charge of receiving him. Fricella respectfully accepted, silently musing that a thirsty man will always find his way to the river. For a seasoned merchant like her, all she had to do was dig the well and wait for her prey to come to her. She was confident that, without any coercion, the man would willingly drink the water she was selling. The door to the parlor swung open, and a powerful, intimidating shadow stepped inside. Fricella smiled in welcome. "Please come in, hero of Marin, Sir Egan." Egan, looking formidable in his black armor, said he had come to express his gratitude and also confirmed that she was the vice director of the Merchant Guild. Fricella politely invited him to sit and acknowledged her position. As she sipped her tea, she observed the knight before her, surprised that someone with such a magnificent appearance could have once snapped a monster's neck. She silently concluded that he was completely different from any other knight she had ever met. Fricella presented the new suit of armor, a gift from the mayor, custom-ordered from the finest workshop in Marinello. She explained that the armor was forged from a special steel, mixed with LC iron and ogre bone, making it so durable that even a dragon's tooth would struggle to pierce it. Inspecting the gift, Egan nodded in satisfaction, saying that thanks to this, he would feel more secure the next time he fought in a dungeon. He thanked her for the lodging and the treatment of his mercenaries, but maintained a reserved attitude, stating that he didn't expect gifts and was simply acknowledging their goodwill. Fricella let out a meaningful laugh, as if she was about to make her big move. Seeing the perfect opportunity, she was about to get to the main point. But he suddenly stood up, said he was busy, and left, leaving Fricella stunned before she could even finish her sentence. He only made a vague promise to return after clearing the Tyne clan's dungeon. Fricella quickly rushed after him, trying to stop him. Egan coldly drew a line, stating their contract only concerned the spoils from this battle, and that this would likely be their last farewell, before turning to leave. Fricella gritted her teeth in anger and shouted, "Wait." He stopped and glanced back over his shoulder with an emotionless gaze. Fricella regained her sharp composure and stepped forward, saying, "We have much to discuss." This was in response to Egan asking what she meant. She dropped the pleasantries, called him by his name and said, "Don't pretend you don't know." Fricella listed every lavish provision, from the expensive armor and pedigreed warhorse to the luxurious inn and sumptuous meals, causing his men to lower their heads in embarrassment. An old man wearing a monocle added that the spoils of war they sold wouldn't even cover half of that cost. Fricella stepped closer, sneering, "Everything has a price, or haven't you learned that yet, sir?" She challenged that if he refused, he was nothing but a nameless knight with no honor, and threatened to expose the truth to the people of Marlon. Egan remained silent, his red eyes glinting with dangerous killing intent as he stared at the calculating woman before him. Faced with her accusation, he gave a slight smirk. He replied coldly, "How amusing. We've only just met and you're already trying to impose on me. You brought gifts I never asked for, and now you demand something in return. What a strange way the world works." Every word he spoke hit its mark, like a master investigator exposing a scandal without missing a single detail. Egan's red eyes blazed, and his voice dropped, freezing the air around them. "A petty merchant like you dares to threaten me." The sudden reversal, coupled with the immense pressure radiating from the knight, left Fricella and her subordinates frozen in fear. He stated coldly, "Let me be clear. I already signed a contract with the Felian Guild through Bill Moore." He strode past Fricella, the heels of his boots striking the stone floor decisively. "As long as you are legitimate buyers, I won't make things difficult. And as for what the people of Marlon might gossip about, I couldn't care less." Egan paused mid-stride. Looking directly at the red-haired woman with an ice-cold smile, he warned, "Go ahead and spread your rumors. You'll soon find out what the real price is." Before leaving, he added a warning that the Felian Guild was colluding with the leadership of Marlon to exploit the very knight who had saved their city. "Keep it up. When danger strikes again, there won't be any knights left to defend Marlon." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Fricella speechless. Egan's subordinate bowed his head and apologized to Fricella for the discourtesy, his tone remorseful yet firm in his stance. Watching his retreating back, Fricella gritted her teeth in regret, thinking that if she had acted differently, they could have been excellent partners. However, her merchant's instincts wouldn't allow her to let such a promising catch get away. Fricella quickly called out, "Sir Egan, please wait a moment." To everyone's astonishment, the arrogant vice-guildmaster bowed deeply, apologizing for her disrespect. She frankly admitted that her greed had caused her to overstep her bounds, and proposed a fresh start with new terms, keeping the current contract but adding better incentives. In her heart, Fricella realized he was completely different from the profit-hungry knights she had met before. Her eyes shone with the determination not to lose such a dangerous, yet incredibly valuable, partner. Egan replied coolly, "Fine, I'll hear your proposal, but it had better be truly compelling." Fricella quickly bowed her head, thanking the knight for his generosity. The new journey began. Egan, clad in majestic silver armor, sat atop his black steed, while Miriam flew around him, marveling at his perfect, top-tier knightly appearance. The mercenary riding beside him couldn't help but praise the contract they had just signed, noting how truly beneficial it was. He explained that the Felian Guild was a massive conglomerate with hundreds of branches throughout the Roman Empire. They specialize in dealing with powerful noble families, especially the Coin clan. The proposal to grant expanded access rights to dungeons and labyrinths was considered even more valuable than a noble title. It sounded like a startup that had just successfully secured funding, but Egan just said nonchalantly, "I only said that to get it over with." Seeing his subordinate so captivated by the flashy exterior, he reminded him, "Wearing nice armor doesn't make you a knight," just as he felt a hostile gaze from up ahead. A large mercenary carrying a huge weapon sneered, "With a baby face like that, can you even hold a sword?" Miriam angrily retorted, but Egan ignored the provocation and moved forward. The young nobleman warmly welcomed him. "Sir Egan, you've arrived right on time." He proudly reminded Egan that he should be addressed as Lord now. Dismounting his horse, Egan remarked that the other man had changed a lot. The two of them discussed the current situation as they walked. The Lord explained worriedly that his younger brother hadn't given up on his schemes and had even hired more mercenaries. Sounding like an endless family soap opera, he mentioned feeling that something was very unusual this time. Egan recalled the group of mercenaries that had ambushed him before and noted that this new group gave off a similar dangerous feeling. With a look of trust in his eyes, the new lord asked Egan to lead this dungeon conquest. Standing before the dark entrance to the dungeon, the lord was visibly tense. A scar-faced mercenary leader stepped forward and coldly asked, "If that brat dies in the dungeon, does that mean I get to be captain?" His brazen words shocked the lord, who snapped back, "What the hell are you talking about?" The man gave a faint smirk and said this wasn't a picnic, and that in the dungeon, lives are as cheap as dirt, so you have to be prepared for any situation. His words were practical, but hearing them just made you want to punch him in the face. The man continued his sinister grin, challenging Egan, while the lord nervously called out for the captain. He coldly curled his lip and replied, "If I die, Then that bald guy over there can be captain, a remark that left the other man speechless. Wasting no time, Egan gave the order to move out. Miriam flew beside him, anxiously mentioning the second young master, but he just calmly said, "I know." He thought to himself that this was definitely Bertel's plot to use the mercenaries to get rid of him. The group ventured deep into the cave, the air thick with the stench of death. Egan silently observed his companions, thinking to himself what he'd do if things didn't go according to their plan. His eyes glowed red in the darkness, a cruel smile spreading across his face as he tightened his grip on his sword's hilt, preparing for the slaughter. Miriam sensed his excitement and flew around him, giggling. The sound of slicing wind echoed as Egan's blade began its dance of death. He moved like a phantom, each slash cutting straight through the bodies of the charging monsters. Even so, Egan didn't slow down in the slightest. He stepped over the mounting pile of monster corpses, leaving behind a scene of utter carnage created in the blink of an eye. He continued deeper into the dungeon's darkness, where the real danger awaited. Witnessing that power, Commander Gaffers was secretly stunned, realizing Egan's reputation was no exaggeration at all. The old commander realized that with him present, the mercenaries hardly even needed to fight. The main character was like a giant shield, protecting the entire team from all danger. However, behind that facade, Gaffers was secretly hatching a dark plot. He waited for the perfect opportunity to strike the finishing blow with his poisoned blade. When they reached an area with mid-level monsters, Egan suddenly stopped and warned them, "From this point on, I can't guarantee your lives." He emphasized that only those who were truly confident should continue following him. Gaffers's men immediately sided with their captain, while the old commander rejoiced internally, knowing his chance to strike was drawing near. As two young soldiers were about to step forward, Bess ordered them to stop, realizing Egan had his own agenda. He silently walked deeper into the darkness alone, reminiscing about the past. He remembered the last time he came here was with Gunfreddick. It felt so boring now without his old comrade. In their short time together, Egan had come to see Gunfreddick as an excellent commander who always took the lead in the most dangerous places. With someone like that, even leading a ragtag squad, they could have cleared out the entire dungeon. Egan narrowed his eyes slightly, wondering how Gunfreddick would have handled this situation. Meanwhile, behind him, Gaffers and his cronies had silently drawn their weapons, their eyes filled with killing intent. "So you finally dropped the phony act, have you?" The bald-headed leader sneered, noticing Egan's attitude had changed, and he just replied coldly. "Fine then." Instantly, a brilliant blue torrent of mana erupted, swirling around his body like a deathly tornado. Egan stared directly at the group of mercenaries and declared with murderous intent, "If you're all that eager to die, then I'll be happy to grant your wish." The entire group panicked at the unprecedented sight, trembling as they screamed, "What the hell is this? Why is there such a deadly flame?" The blue flames raged violently, plunging the battlefield into chaos as screams echoed from all directions. "Help run, who the hell is a fire mage? We were supposed to be ambushing him, but we got countered. Now we know who the real predator is." The battle sank into darkness as the flames flickered out, leaving behind a state of utter confusion. "Damn it, that bastard can use magic too." Curses echoed through the suffocating darkness. The disoriented mercenaries screamed that they couldn't see anything, and their leader roared for them to light the torches immediately. In the darkness, a pair of glowing golden eyes silently appeared, like a grim reaper watching its prey. Just as a scream pierced the silence, the brutal sounds of something slicing through the wind rang out. Accompanying them were blood-curdling screams, as the battle turned into a horrifying nightmare that sent the soldiers into an absolute panic. They screamed that they were under attack and yelled to fight back, but the only response was the sound of bodies dropping one after another. The chaos reached its peak as they began cutting down their own comrades in the darkness. Streaks of red light flashed by like the Reaper's scythe, and then Egan appeared, his blazing red eyes making the air feel suffocating. The bald leader trembled, realizing that in the darkness, the situation was completely to his enemy's advantage. He frantically struck his flint, praying for a light, but it was useless. The man roared in desperation as the weak sparks failed to catch fire. Suddenly, he froze in the dead silence, hearing nothing but the frantic beat of his own heart. The only other sound was the slow, deliberate rhythm of Egan's footsteps approaching from behind. "Need a light," a cold voice whispered right next to his ear, making him jump. Egan casually struck a spark for him, and the sudden flare of light illuminated his own deathly face. He sneered mockingly, "Human eyes are so inconvenient in the dark. Let me help you see better." He leaned in close and asked, "Can you see clearly now who the hunter is and who is the prey?" The leader, trembling uncontrollably, stammered out, "You, monster." Egan revealed a set of sharp teeth in a cruel smile, illuminated by the flickering flame. A single, decisive slash tore through the air, ending everything. Outside, a thunderstorm raged, lightning bolts splitting the night sky that shrouded the ancient castle. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed down the long hallway, Kramer burst into the room, panting heavily, and called out, "Lord Egan." Egan stood silently by the window, his red eyes glancing briefly at the one who had just barged in. Without even speaking, his overwhelming presence was enough to make a person feel suffocated. Kramer asked with a tremor in his voice, "Are the rumors true?" Seeing the wreckage and the man collapsed on the floor, Kramer cried out in horror, "What happened here?" Egan coldly replied, "Ask him yourself." The man lying there, barely breathing, was Maverick. He clutched his injured face and tremblingly confessed his crime. He admitted that he had intended to kill Egan. Maverick confessed that it was all on Bertel's orders, a twist that left everyone speechless. Kramer was stunned, then let out a sarcastic laugh, saying Maverick must have gone insane. He turned to Bertel and questioned him, "Brother, did you really intend to go this far?" Bertel immediately retorted that you couldn't believe the words of a madman. Egan, remaining calm, walked closer to Maverick and demanded that he tell the entire truth. Under the pressure of those blazing red eyes, Maverick panicked, lost control, and screamed, "I'm useless," before charging toward the window. He shattered the glass and plummeted from the great height. Kramer stood frozen by the window, calling Maverick's name in despair. Down in the courtyard, Maverick's body lay motionless after the horrific fall. Bertel immediately took advantage of the situation, claiming that Maverick had gone insane after witnessing the monster's massacre. But Kramer looked at his younger brother with suspicion, noticing his poorly concealed delight. Bertel grew flustered under that sharp gaze. He turned and shouted at Egan, "Don't you dare slander me with such baseless accusations." Egan looked Bertel straight in the eye and asked, "On your honor as a knight, are you truly innocent?" Faced with the direct question, Bertel broke out in a sweat and stammered, insisting on his innocence. Immediately, Egan tightened his armored fist and made a declaration. "I, on my honor as a knight, challenge you to a duel to prove the truth." And so the one-on-one duel was set, clean and simple, with no room for debate. Bertel gritted his teeth, realizing he had fallen into a trap he couldn't refuse. News of the duel spread throughout the castle, causing a stir among the servants and villagers. Rumors of an assassination plot circulated, making everyone even more curious. Amidst the whispers, Egan silently walked toward the dueling grounds, clad in majestic black armor. Under the setting sun, Bertel and Egan faced each other, the air thick with suffocating tension. Their conflict would be settled by force in a battle of honor. The truth would belong to the victor, under the watchful eyes of the gods. Egan raised his sword to eye level, his cold, sharp gaze locked onto his opponent. Bertel roared, unleashing a flurry of frenzied slashes with all his might. He calmly parried each attack with precision. The resounding clash of metal echoed as sparks flew across the dueling grounds. Bertel continuously increased the pressure with powerful strikes, but Egan stood firm like a mountain, effortlessly neutralizing every attack. After the intense exchange, he looked coldly at his opponent. Memories of a past life flooded back, causing Bertel's face to pale in terror as he screamed, "He's Makazong." Informed Dung Durhid immediately. Egan didn't falter. He moved closer and mocked, "How ironic that someone like you has been hunting me for all these years." Those words stunned Bertel, and before he could react, Egan struck as fast as lightning. The rapid succession of blows left Bertel no time to defend himself, sending him flying back in pain. His sword was knocked into the air, spinning before clattering onto the ground. Bertel stood frozen, realizing he had been utterly defeated. He stepped forward and delivered a powerful blow that sent Bertel collapsing pathetically onto the stone floor. Looking down from above, the protagonist's red eyes blazed with killing intent as he declared, "Accept this outcome." Bertel groaned in despair, unable to resist as the final sounds of impact rang out. He silently assessed that Bertel's swordsmanship wasn't bad, but the outcome of the duel was already crystal clear. Even the onlookers could see the vast difference in skill between the two fighters. Kramer watched the entire event from a distance with a pensive expression. He was shocked to realize the protagonist was many times stronger than Bertel. His blazing red eyes flashed as he unleashed a decisive blow that made the ground tremble. Kramer's shout shattered the tense atmosphere. The situation became suffocating as he prepared to deliver the finishing blow. He glanced at the one who had just interfered and coldly demanded, "Step aside. This duel isn't over." Kramer rushed forward in a panic to shield his younger brother, refusing to let Bertel die here. His brotherly love emerging at the climax, he declared that Bertel had lost the ability to fight, and the victory belonged to his opponent. Despite his severe injuries, Bertel still roared maniacally that he could still fight. Kramer yelled, putting an end to the madness, and demanding his younger brother accept defeat. His pride crushed, Bertel roared in rage and despair. He glared at the protagonist, his eyes filled with seething hatred. Resentment swelled within Bertel's heart, believing his opponent was the cause of all his tragedies. But when Egan looked down with his blazing red eyes, the atmosphere immediately became suffocating. An invisible pressure bore down on Bertel, causing him to cry out in terror. He realized his body was slowly losing control. Even his armor became unusually heavy, throwing him into an extreme panic. He coldly issued a final warning: "You should have taken the chance your brother gave you." Before the stunned eyes of the crowd, the protagonist silently departed, leaving a desolate scene behind him. His charismatic departure, turning his back on them all, left everyone watching in awe. Prema stood silently, watching his receding figure and quietly mourning her wayward brother. After the incident at the castle, he returned to the port city of Manhwa. In the blue sky, the cries of seagulls echoed, creating a peaceful scene. He strolled along with Miriam floating by his side and asked if she had any regrets. He casually asked what there was to regret, and Miriam immediately brought up Maverick. He gave a cold smirk, saying that the weak were unworthy of being demonkin and were merely tools to be thrown away after use. To him, Maverick was just a pawn used as bait for the last battle. He gave Miriam a sharp, cold look and asked, "Do you really think I would spare someone who dared to betray me?" Miriam remarked that vampires truly are incredibly cold and unfeeling. She suggested that a vampire should have many slaves, but he just answered curtly that he didn't need any. The doors swung open as he entered a large room. Inside, a panicked man called out the name Garfredik. The man reported that the situation was utterly chaotic, and it was unclear when it all started. He calmly replied that it had been 2 weeks, stunning everyone in the room. The old manager hurried over to greet him, congratulating him on successfully clearing the dungeon. He immediately got straight to the point and asked what had happened to Garfredik. The atmosphere grew heavy at the mention of the missing knight. The manager explained that 2 weeks ago, Garfredik had entered the Evergrove labyrinth and vanished. He immediately galloped his horse through the forest, his mind racing with calculations. Despite searching the entire mid-level monster zone without finding a trace, he deduced that Garfredik must be in the high-level monster zone. The thundering sound of hooves echoed as he urged his horse forward, picking up speed. Zevin Evergrove, the head of the clan, stood on a balcony and welcomed him with a polite smile. Zevin remarked that he was younger and more handsome than he had imagined, and the man returned the pleasantry. Zevin invited him inside to discuss the matter in more detail. In the study, Zevin bluntly stated that Garfredik had been too ambitious, entering the upper levels on his own accord. He asked in surprise if it had truly been his own decision. Zevin confirmed it, explaining it was a region the Evergrove clan hadn't been able to conquer for 100 years, a place known as the Dungeon Lord's domain. He repeated the menacing names thoughtfully. Another knight asserted that the Dungeon Lord was the ruler of the entire dungeon. The newly appeared knight had an arrogant air about him and blamed Garfredik for causing trouble out of a lust for glory. Zevin introduced him as Rugiz, a guardian knight who once commanded the expeditionary force alongside Garfredik. Rugiz looked at him and said he had heard about his victory over Gunfredik. He proudly boasted that he had also defeated Garfredik in the Evergrow tournament, giving the man a challenging look. He coldly replied that it no longer mattered. Rugiz's tone softened as he expressed his regret about Garfredik and offered a sincere apology. Zevin asked curiously about his relationship with Garfredik. He recalled the familiar image of his old comrade. He just answered indifferently that you could say that. Zevin gave a serious warning that for 100 years, every expedition team sent to the upper levels had vanished without a trace. The clan's policy, therefore, is that if there is no news after 1 month, the person is declared dead. Zevin Evergrow looked Egan straight in the eye and reminded him in a low voice that Garfredik had been missing for 3 weeks, and if he wasn't found in another week, all hope would be lost. Hearing this, Egan immediately shot up from his chair and declared decisively that he would set out at once. Zevin quickly raised a hand to stop him, understanding his impatience. He explained that the dungeon was not a place one could just rush into recklessly, and proposed a 3-day period to prepare an elite squad with Rugiz, telling Egan to rest and recover in the meantime. Egan stood silently, concealing the deep calculations behind his blazing red eyes. He quietly thanked him, and Zevin added that they had hired a mage for support. Egan was slightly surprised, silently thinking that the support of a mage would be very useful. Leaving the mansion, he walked down the bustling street. Miriam flew beside him, incessantly teasing Rugiz, claiming the guy looked frail but his true power was far from ordinary, and then asked her master if he believed her. Egan continued to walk in silence, his mind consumed with theories about Gunfredik's mysterious disappearance. Before they parted ways, Gunfredik had mentioned that he was going to be bestowed a title by Count Evergrove for his recent achievements in battle. He couldn't understand why his ambitious friend would pass up such a huge opportunity. As he recalled, Gunfredik had always craved glory, which was why he had poured all his energy into conquering the dungeon. Egan wondered why everything had changed so suddenly, because Gunfredik was never the type to act recklessly without a plan. Suddenly, a commotion from the crowd snapped him out of his thoughts. In the public square, a strange cult was performing a bizarre ritual, with its leader screaming about the end of the world when the moon turns red. He was exploiting strange phenomena, like the earthquakes near the dungeon and the knight's disappearance, to spread fear among the people. Miriam realized with a start that they were talking about Gunfredek. The cult leader frantically ordered a sacrifice of cow's blood and meat to welcome the Messiah. The crowd grew confused and terrified at the horrifying prophecies. The more level-headed onlookers just exchanged skeptical glances, suspecting it was nothing more than an evil cult. Egan frowned as he looked at a strange flyer, while Miriam also sensed the unusual atmosphere. He read its contents, which mentioned earthquakes causing wild animals to die in droves, and began to suspect that a section of the dungeon had collapsed. Realizing the connection, he immediately ordered Miriam to prepare to head to the dungeon at once. Suddenly, a purple-haired stranger with a mysterious smile appeared and said, "3 days is too long. We should go find him sooner." She seemed excited, as if she wanted to obliterate anything that stood in her way. The stranger exclaimed with delight upon noticing the presence of a vampire. Egan froze, and she continued to mock him, remarking on how a vampire dared to appear in broad daylight. She mentioned that the vampire race had been nearly wiped out by the Holy Knights. His anger flared, and he lunged forward, gripping the stranger's neck tightly with his red gauntleted hand. He growled, demanding she reveal her identity and explain how she recognized him. He warned that he would snap her neck if she didn't answer, causing her to panic. She quickly begged him to let her go so she could speak clearly, introducing herself as a pilgrim. Egan paused, his eyes filled with suspicion. Miriam muttered that the name Pilgrim sounded very familiar. She frantically urged her master to stop, warning that killing this person would cause huge trouble. Miriam revealed that she was the mage who had been sent to help them. Egan was momentarily stunned, his mind still struggling to process the information. Miriam explained that the Pilgrim family was a long line of mages who had served vampires for generations. He repeated the words served in shock, but the purple-haired girl had already passed out from the strain. When she came to, Cyranoa Aramuri was immediately furious for being attacked before she even had a chance to explain. Egan was a bit flustered and offered an apology, silently thinking to himself that this girl sure was talkative. Cyranoa adjusted her clothes and began to introduce herself in a formal manner. She announced her name as Cyranoa Ramari, a member of the Pilgrim Order that specializes in serving vampires. She explained that they have the ability to recognize vampires instantly and that she was honored to meet him. Cyranoa said she had been sent by Zevin to find Egan, which made him realize that she was indeed the mage he had been told about. She asked curiously if he and Gunfredek were close friends. Egan remained silent, inwardly cursing his old friend for being so talkative. Cyranoa revealed she had been part of the expedition team when Gunfredek disappeared, prompting Egan to immediately demand she tell him all the details. She began to recount their journey into the Evergrove dungeon to collect certain items. This dungeon has been almost completely explored over the last 100 years, with only the highest floor remaining untouched. As they ventured deeper, a sudden disaster struck, sending everyone into a panic. A violent earthquake caused the ground to collapse right beneath Cyranoa's feet. In that perilous moment, she nearly fell into the deep abyss. Gunfredek lunged forward to save her, falling into the chasm in her place. Thanks to his sacrifice, Cyranoa managed to survive. However, the other survivors blamed Gunfredek, claiming that he had opened the door to the highest floor. Indebted to him for saving her life, Cyranoa decided to find Egan and tell him the whole truth. After hearing her story, Egan began to suspect that Zevin had been fed false information. Cyranoa further revealed that she had seen something strange down in the abyss. It was a drawing of a giant eye that glowed with an eerie, demonic light. A stunned Egan repeated the two words, an eye. Cyranoa asked if he still had the flyer from the heretical cult. When Egan took it out, they were both stunned, because the symbol on it was identical to the eye in the abyss. That symbol was the mark of a fanatic cult, calling for sacrifices to welcome their messiah. In a dark cathedral, the cult leader smiled insanely as he felt the dark power rising. The Holy Knights had fully assembled, ready to march out. Before a massive, chain-bound stone gate, a soldier turned to ask for an opinion. The soldier asked Egan if he felt excited about entering the dungeon. He merely thought coldly that he hoped he wouldn't have to bring back any more bodies this time. A nearby commander chimed in, saying that Gunfredek wasn't the type to die so easily. At the mention of Gunfredek's name, everyone laughed easily, showing their absolute trust in him. Despite his calm exterior, Egan was secretly calculating. Ever since learning the disappearance wasn't so simple, he had decided to closely monitor every suspicious move. Looking at the strange, glowing mark, Egan told himself that the other person had already been waiting for 3 weeks. He thought to himself that surely, Gunfredek could wait another 3 days. Suddenly, a group of people in hooded cloaks appeared and greeted Egan respectfully. They introduced themselves as holy knights from a monastery affiliated with Evergrove, expressing what an honor it was to accompany a righteous knight like him. Egan just forced a smile in response, while Miriam, at his side, scoffed at the title Knight of Faith being given to a vampire. The commander seemed surprised, noting it was rare for holy knights to pay so much attention to a single knight. He joked that Egan could easily become a holy knight in the future, which made Egan smirk cryptically. The idea of a vampire becoming a holy knight was truly ironic, and his gaze turned cold as he looked at the dungeon gate ahead. Egan called Parutek aside for a private conversation, and the two of them split off from the group to talk before heading deeper into the dungeon. Inside, the troop paused for a rest. The commander ordered them to get water quickly and return to their positions, as before them was an area of fantastically glowing water. Miriam cried out in excitement at the magical sight before her eyes. She could feel the abundant water energy, while Egan realized this place was completely different from a natural dungeon. This was an artificial dungeon with stable survival conditions and controlled monster distribution, he noted as he watched the soldiers prepare for the next leg of their journey. Egan thought to himself that if things went bad, this place could serve as an ideal shelter. Rugiz suddenly appeared with a cryptic smile on his face. He remarked that this was an ideal place for evil forces to hide, and asked if Egan agreed. Egan only responded with a cold, wary look. Rugiz continued to praise the troop for reaching this point without any casualties, but Egan cut straight to the chase and asked how far it was to the place where Gunfredic disappeared. Rugiz acted nonchalant, saying that the person Egan should trust the most right now was him. He asserted that Evergrow already knew about every single trap in this labyrinth. Egan coldly retorted, asking that if that was the case, why did people still die every time they entered? Rugiz let out a gruesome laugh, claiming that those deaths were merely sacrifices made to ensure a safe exit from the labyrinth. Hearing those cruel words, Egan's eyes blazed red, just as a violent tremor shook the entire dungeon. Rugiz frantically ordered the soldiers to stay alert, warning that the structure of the maze was changing. As Egan watched the walls shift, Rugiz pointed ahead, claiming it was a shortcut to the upper floor, where giant gears could be seen crushing rock. A panicked soldier screamed Egan's name. He noticed that Rugiz was already standing in a safe position, and immediately became suspicious. Egan questioned him about this suspicious shortcut, as a sense of overwhelming danger washed over him. Rugiz revealed a malicious smile and pointed to where Egan was standing. The ground beneath his feet instantly collapsed. The colossal gears ground everything in their path with a horrifying sound. A massive explosion split the formation in an instant, plunging the scene into chaos. Egan realized this was a premeditated trap, not a natural earthquake, and that Gunfredic must have fallen into a similar situation. The distant cries of his soldiers served as a grim reminder of the price of trusting the wrong person. Egan was stunned by the sight before him. Gunfredic was bound to a stone platform, his body covered in injuries, and he was unconscious. He immediately screamed his friend's name and rushed down. Egan quickly approached to check on Gunfredic's condition. Upon touching him, he let out a sigh of relief, realizing his friend was still alive. As long as he received treatment in time, he could be saved. Romary flew over in a panic, reporting that she could sense something unusual in the deep chasm below. Miriam also warned of a dangerous presence lurking beneath them. Suddenly, an immense pressure erupted from the depths, accompanied by a crimson gale. Egan was astonished as he felt an intense power surging upwards. From within the blazing energy, a gigantic entity began to materialize. A massive monster with fiery eyes gradually revealed itself. It was a minotaur, its entire body terrifyingly wreathed in violet flames. The air grew tense as everyone trembled before its horrifying presence. Someone cried out in terror, unable to believe a minotaur had appeared here. Egan immediately drew his sword, preparing for battle. He ordered Romary to protect Gunfredic while he confronted the monster. The minotaur let out a thunderous roar and delivered a blow that shattered the ground. Egan leaped back to dodge the attack before launching a decisive counter. He poured all of his strength into his sword. A brilliant slash tore through the air, hurtling straight toward the monster. The impact created a terrifying explosion of energy. He unleashed a fatal blow, aiming to finish the beast. Facing the danger, Egan chose to charge straight in to break the stalemate. Suddenly, a colossal wave of pressure sent him flying. A magic circle shaped like a demon's eye abruptly appeared. The ensuing explosion shook the ground and obscured the Minotaur's vision. The chaotic moment made it feel as if he had been thrown completely out of the fight. Egan seized the opportunity to rush toward Gunfredic and save him. Romary trembled in fear as she witnessed the horrifying scene. He moved like a phantom through the smoke and dust, but the Minotaur's giant hand was already reaching for him from behind. Romary shrieked in panic and activated a magic circle beneath Egan's feet. The teleportation spell activated, pulling him out of the danger zone in the nick of time. After landing safely, Egan erupted in fury. His eyes glowed crimson and his sharp fangs were bared as he roared, questioning her actions. Romari, trembling, explained through her tears that it was a minotaur, one of the highest-level monsters, and warned that even a vampire could be killed by its power. Egan gritted his teeth, his voice as cold as ice, and snapped Romari's name with unconcealed anger. Overwhelmed by his intimidating aura, Romari bowed her head in apology but remained firm, insisting she couldn't just watch him rush to his death. She asserted that a direct confrontation with the Minotaur at this moment offered almost no chance of victory. Looking Egan straight in the eye, Romari urgently pleaded with him to stay calm if he truly wanted to save Gunfredek, adding that she was confused because the Minotaur had appeared in the labyrinth, which was only supposed to contain a Cyclops, far earlier than expected. Egan quietly surveyed his surroundings before letting out a soft, sarcastic remark. He quickly realized something was off and suspected a mage had used powerful earth magic. A man in blue armor suddenly appeared with a sinister smile, mentioning that Gunfredek was still alive. He mocked them, saying that he'd previously thought Egan was just a user of cheap illusion magic. His face was filled with smug satisfaction, and when Egan and Romari finally recognized who he was, they both gasped his name in unison, Lugas. Egan stared coldly at the traitor, exposing the truth behind the entire situation. He bluntly asked Lugas if he ever actually intended to save Gunfredek at all. Lugas was stunned for a moment before Egan concluded that he was the one responsible for Gunfredek's current state. He sarcastically remarked that he was merely helping two old friends reunite. Lugas then taunted Egan for being so rude, while Romari watched in horror as he was being suppressed by the traitor's power. Egan's eyes blazed with a murderous crimson intent. He mustered all his strength to break free from his opponent's hold. Lugas was shocked, realizing that the explosive burst of power was anything but ordinary. From a distance, Romari also sensed that unusual source of energy. She noticed the glowing pattern on Lugas's hand was a magic for transferring power. Romari explained that this type of magic was originally meant to transfer energy between people, but because it was abused to absorb power from other living creatures, it had been classified as forbidden magic across the entire continent. Lugas laughed with contempt, claiming that forbidden magic was just an excuse for the weak, and declared that he was the one chosen to survive, all thanks to his master's will. Egan coldly saw through the scheme, realizing Lugas had borrowed someone else's power to take down Gunfredek and was now passing it off as his own. A crimson killing intent erupted around his body like lightning, and his voice was filled with menace. He declared that he would teach Lugas the meaning of true power. Egan charged forward, attacking with terrifying speed. A resounding explosion of energy shook the entire dungeon. Romari had to shield herself from the immense pressure, completely astonished by his strength, which far exceeded her imagination. As they fought, Egan arrogantly stated that hiding one's strength can sometimes be a useful tactic, all while relentlessly forcing Lugas to retreat again and again. Even so, the traitor stubbornly refused to fall back. He unleashed a powerful stream of purple magic in a fierce counterattack. The battle between the two grew increasingly faster and more brutal. The two of them clashed amidst the rubble, their fight creating an atmosphere of extreme tension. Lugas arrogantly declared that every single trap in this labyrinth was under his complete control. With glowing yellow eyes and a malicious grin, he roared, demanding that Egan be swallowed by the darkness. Egan immediately called out to Romari for support. She quickly coordinated with him, using teleportation magic to assist in the fight. In the blink of an eye, Egan shot forward and attacked Lugas like a phantom. He closed the distance to his enemy in an instant, giving the man no time to react. Before he could even process what was happening, Lugas found himself completely on the defensive. However, he still gritted his teeth and let out a defiant laugh. Lugas admitted Egan's strength was beyond his expectations, and that using Gunfredek as bait was the right decision to complete the sacrificial ritual. Immediately, a series of purple magic circles blazed to life all throughout the dungeon model. Agonized screams echoed from all directions as Romari cried out in despair. She apologized, unable to maintain the support magic circle any longer. Egan silently turned his back and walked away through the rubble. Romari frantically called after him, but an intense wave of pain forced her to her knees. She cursed herself in agony for ever getting involved in this mess. Romari deeply regretted not staying out of it from the very beginning. Egan stopped, looking back at the desperate girl while still carrying Gunfredek, and coldly asked if she could save the man. Romari trembled, replying that healing magic wasn't her specialty. Egan stared at her with icy eyes, stating that wasn't the answer he wanted to hear. Under the immense pressure, Romari bowed her head and then resolutely declared that she would do everything in her power. Amidst the blood-soaked space, Egan continued forward, carrying the unconscious Gunfredek on his back. Miriam flew over, reporting that the entire area was sealed off, with every wall being completely unbreakable. Egan observed his surroundings, noting that it looked like an isolated boss room at the very end of a labyrinth. Miriam anxiously reported that even though the place was filled with water energy, she was unable to control any of it. She trembled as she pointed to the pool of red liquid at their feet, especially that terrifying fluid. Egan glanced around the room at the countless stone eyes embedded in the walls and let out a disgusted sigh. He wondered if those were the same eyes Romary had seen in the abyss. The suspicion began to solidify in his mind. When he asked Miriam why she couldn't control the liquid, she replied that she could only manipulate the blood of the dead, which meant the owner of this blood was still alive. Instantly, the pool of blood began to boil, erupting with ferocious energy. From it, a monstrous, giant arm emerged, radiating an oppressive aura that consumed the entire room. Egan stood his ground, facing the evil entity that was slowly taking form from the blood. Meanwhile, Romary was pouring all her strength into using green magic to heal Gunfredic. Egan immediately ordered Miriam to find a way out by any means necessary, and she quickly obeyed. At that moment, a colossal monster with the head of a bull, wreathed in menacing purple flames, fully materialized. Looking at the still unconscious Gunfredic, Egan knew he had no path of retreat while his comrade was still down. His eyes burned with resolve, his hand tightening around the hilt of his sword with unwavering determination. The enemy had to be neutralized immediately. He shot forward like a bolt of lightning, confronting the massive beast head-on. The harsh sounds of clashing metal echoed throughout the dungeon as the vampire warrior's blade met its target in a fierce exchange. Egan's sword met the brutal force of his enemy in a direct confrontation. He unleashed a series of blazing red sword auras that tore through the space, creating terrifying explosions of energy. Egan spun around, delivering a powerful slash aimed directly at the monster's head. The monster ignored the sword auras swarming around it as the battle raged on, with the vampire warrior delivering a relentless barrage of attacks. Just then, he poured all his strength into a fatal swing, but a dry, cracking sound rang out as his blade struck skin as hard as rock. He clicked his tongue in annoyance, realizing a common weapon was nothing more than an ornament against an opponent of this caliber. The Minotaur gave him no time to rest, opening its crimson maw wide to gather fiery, lava-like energy for its ultimate technique. A brilliant red energy explosion erupted, and Egan immediately launched a massive sword aura to counter it head-on. The monster's devastating power blasted Egan away as if he were a ragdoll. He flew backward through the air, surrounded by crimson sparks, his eyes wide from the immense pressure crushing down on him. Gritting his teeth, his blazing red eyes flared with killing intent as he transformed into a shadow of death, lunging forward at an incredible speed. A single, furious slash was unleashed with all of his pent-up power. Egan landed on a high rock ledge, coldly looking down at the roaring monster below. Seeing his now chipped sword, he understood that a normal weapon couldn't harm it. It was a classic case of getting what you pay for. He realized that a conventional weapon couldn't pierce the dungeon lord's defenses, leaving him with only one option: to upgrade his own power. A stream of dark red blood began to flow from his arm, enveloping the blade of his sword. The sword slowly transformed into a blazing blood-red greatsword as Egan carefully observed his new weapon. He told himself that for now, he would use this to turn the tide of battle. Overflowing with killing intent, he shot down from above like a brilliant red arrow. His one and only target was the Minotaur's head. Egan coughed slightly from the immense magical pressure, while the monster stood stunned in astonishment. As the blood blade plunged deep into its body, the monster roared in agony, then erupted with a burst of power that sent him flying. The terrifying shockwave slammed his body straight into the stone wall. Gunfredic was still unconscious, and Romary, panicking, called out loudly, hoping he would wake up. He desperately urged his friend to regain consciousness. Romary hadn't been wrong. This high-level monster possessed a strength that far surpassed all of their initial predictions. Facing the colossal entity that radiated a suffocating pressure, Egan could only grit his teeth in bitter frustration. His eyes burned with rage, and he let out a curse filled with resentment. Damn it all, he roared upon seeing the monster's arrogant display. He poured all of his magical power into fiery red slashes that tore through the space of the dungeon. Romary screamed in terror as he witnessed Egan get sent flying by a devastating blow. He collapsed to his knees, his breath coming in ragged gasps amidst the wreckage, as that familiar feeling of helplessness surged once more. With blood streaming down his face, Egan stared at the brutal reality with heavy eyes. He wondered in agony why this pain was even more horrific than his past traumas, a perfect combo of physical and mental anguish. A single slash of red energy pierced through his body, leaving Egan in a near-death state. Standing in a crimson void, he uttered one last question before collapsing next to his friend on the cold stone floor. The space became terrifyingly silent as Gunfredic remained completely motionless. In his subconscious, a tormenting question echoed, and then suddenly his blue eyes snapped open. His pupils dilated in horror at the shocking truth that was unfolding before him. Romary was in a panic, drenched in sweat, as he realized this was exactly what he had warned them about. No matter how powerful Egan was with his Makazong bloodline, it was still nearly impossible for him to defeat this terrifying entity. Before them stood a colossal shadow monster, with countless glowing red eyes staring down at them. Amidst a sea of red, Romari trembled as he shielded Gunfredic, realizing with despair that there was no escape. The monster's gigantic mouth began to gather a deadly purple energy. Romari squeezed his eyes shut, accepting his death and silently apologizing to his master for his own weakness. Suddenly, a familiar figure appeared, causing him to cry out Egan's name in astonishment. At that very moment, Gunfredic also began to stir. Gunfredic came to, struggling to his feet in pain, and blaming himself for dragging his friend into danger, even as Romari urged him to flee. In his mind, the memory of being used by Luges as bait to trap Egan flashed before his eyes. He regretted ever calling himself his friend, only to end up becoming a burden. In the midst of the battlefield, Gunfredic gave a bitter smile as he remembered the first time he was captivated by Egan's power and presence. He had once longed to become strong enough to stand by Egan's side, but now it seemed like everything was over. The harsh reality made him bitterly realize that the end was near. Gathering the last of his strength, Gunfredic shoved Romari out of the danger zone, giving him only enough time to scream. Romari cried out in a panic, "Wait, Sir Gunfredic." A satisfied smile spread across his face, despite his ruined body, as he silently apologized to Egan. The darkness, along with its grotesque eyes, slowly began to envelop his entire body. In his final moments, he wished that if there was a next life, he would be reborn as a knight to serve Egan, and then he smiled as he faced the darkness. Just then, a single, furious, crimson eye suddenly snapped open in the gloomy darkness. With his face covered in blood, Egan ground his teeth viciously. He was trying to suppress the violent rage that was exploding inside his body. He faced a fiercely erupting mass of crimson energy. Egan whispered Miriam's name as his fist clenched tight. A terrifying dark power erupted, ready to crush everything in its path. He threw his head back toward the sky, allowing a swirling aura of jet black and red to surge forth. A murderous aura coiled around his body like a deadly cyclone. The shadow monster was suddenly crushed under an immense pressure. Purple and red flames clashed, setting off a chain of reality-shaking explosions. Amidst the chaotic battlefield, the haunting image of a colossal skull appeared. Meanwhile, the mysterious figure hidden beneath a cloak simply observed in silence, his eyes glowing intensely. The dark aura reached its zenith, blanketing everything in an eerie, deathly silence. Egan was completely transformed. His blood-red eyes and grotesque armor radiated the overwhelming presence of a supreme being. Witnessing a sight beyond all comprehension, Romari collapsed in terror, stammering that Egan's body was undergoing a monstrous transformation. He let out a deafening roar, allowing the frenzied dark power to rampage through his body. His cold, sharp fangs were bared, exuding a lethal threat. Romari was frozen in shock as he saw the pools of blood all around them reacting wildly to his energy. He trembled as he realized Egan was far beyond any ordinary vampire. A mix of excitement and terror washed over him, and Romari managed a strained smile, knowing he was witnessing history in the making. Floating in midair, he looked down upon the world like a god of death, his eyes burning with fire. With a wave of his hand, he unleashed a colossal stream of energy that tore through space itself, and a heaven-shattering pressure enveloped the battlefield. Instantly, the massive red eye of the dark entity snapped wide open. It radiated a chilling aura that threatened to devour everything. Romari watched in horror as the pools of blood at his feet were suddenly drained dry. Looking at the high-level monster before him, he was appalled by its incredible regenerative speed. It was clearly being healed by some form of advanced dark magic. Romari shuddered at the thought that the labyrinth itself was using the siphoned blood to regenerate the monster. In other words, this thing's whole gimmick was to blade its opponents dry. Giving his opponent no time to breathe, Egan shot forward like a crimson flash. He delivered a devastating blow right into the creature's massive eye. Romari cried out in astonishment as blood gushed from one of the monster's eyes. He unleashed a relentless barrage of crimson slashes that enveloped the massive entity, determined to crush his foe, and realized the master of the labyrinth wasn't the Minotaur. The hundreds of missing people were, in fact, just food for the labyrinth. This entire place was an evil god, worshipped and given sacrifices by a fanatical cult. Through their frenzied prayers, they waited for their savior to appear, to bring a reign of destruction upon the land their god had deemed worthy of annihilation. The anonymous figure gave a twisted smile, provoking the god's wrath and declaring that he had opened its eye to hear his prayers. Romari was horrified to see that all the blood on the floor had been completely absorbed. In mere seconds, the magical sphere erupted with power. A deadly energy spread outwards as countless grotesque eyes began to appear. From within the light, a massive, shadowy entity began to take shape. It had enormous outstretched wings and a single, terrifying crimson eye. Its sheer power caused the very space around it to twist and distort. Seeing the monster begin to move, Romari yelled in a panic, asking where it was going. The high-level monster shattered the dungeon's ceiling. It shot straight up towards the surface with unstoppable force. Romari trembled, unable to believe that a high-level monster could actually escape the dungeon. He gazed at the faintly lit town, filled with despair and the fear of an impending apocalypse. Just then, Miriam flew over frantically, announcing she had found a way out. But then she looked up in astonishment at the hole in the ceiling, exclaiming that the exit had been right there all along. She muttered that her entire search had been pointless, right before panicking as the dungeon began to collapse around them. Miriam quickly flew over to urge Egan to leave, but she froze when she saw his current state. Below them, Gunfredok lay motionless, his breath faint, his body covered in fatal wounds. Standing before his dying comrade, Egan remained silent as an overwhelming dark aura radiated from him. Romari watched in shock, wondering to himself how a vampire could grieve for a human's death. He realized he had never seen a vampire conceal his identity under the guise of a knight before, let alone one who had formed such a deep bond with a human. It turns out even vampires are capable of feeling such powerful emotions. Egan looked at Gunfredok with a determined gaze, bared his sharp fangs, and bit into his neck to save him with his blood, much to Romari's horror. The colossal shadow monster burst free from the dungeon's confines. It created a brilliant pillar of violet energy that tore through the night sky. It soared into the air, leaving a scene of devastation in its wake as it made its official debut on the surface. The townspeople stared up in horror at the sky, where the evil entity roared, its eyes glowing crimson. It was an omen of death that sent a chill down everyone's spine. In the air thick with the stench of death, Romari broke the silence, asking Egan about the origin line of vampires. He explained that the origin was the supreme noble bloodline of vampires, asserting that Egan himself was a descendant with the power to resurrect the dead as his subordinates. As Egan stared in astonishment, Romari asked if he knew how to create a subordinate. He somberly confirmed that he knew the process all too well, but he was still hesitant. He recalled a failed experiment from the past, where the subject couldn't handle the pressure, and his mind completely shattered. Ever since then, he had never dared to try it again. However, Romari believed that with a knight of Gunfredok's iron will, the outcome would be different. According to Romari's master, someone with a strong will who receives origin blood can retain their sanity and all their abilities from when they were human. Romari suggested it was a gamble worth taking, but also warned that with his honor as a knight, Gunfredok might see being turned into a Makazan as the ultimate humiliation. And if that happened, he would very likely turn and attack everyone immediately. What do you think, Egan? Romari's words echoed in the suffocatingly silent air. Egan brooded, telling himself that since he had never revealed his true identity, he had no way of knowing what Gunfredok thought about vampires. Memories of his comrade's bright smile and trusting handshake suddenly flooded his mind, making him falter. He hesitated before making this fateful decision. But then he looked at Gunfredok's critical condition. There was no more time to hesitate. He coldly affirmed that there was no other choice. His mind made up, Egan didn't hesitate for a second, sinking his fangs deep into his friend's neck. Romari realized in terror that the blood was being transferred so quickly that Egan couldn't pull his fangs out immediately. The succession ritual was officially triggered right after that. This was the moment the subordinate's soul and power would belong completely to his master, sealing the ultimate blood pact. A violent burst of crimson energy erupted. It engulfed them both in a terrifying shockwave. Gunfredok screamed in agony as his body began to transform under the influence of the origin blood. From the earth below, a gigantic pillar of light erupted, tearing through the darkness. It shot straight into the sky, releasing a pressure so immense it made the entire forest tremble. At the same time in town, disaster officially struck as the labyrinth completely collapsed. The panicked townspeople fled through a sea of fire, their screams echoing as they realized the labyrinth was caving in. Hideous monsters poured out from the dungeon, frantically attacking and inflicting fatal wounds on anyone in their path. Amidst the rubble and flames, a woman clutched her child tightly, watching helplessly as a monster approached. The shadow monster roared, sweeping through the town with its giant wings, and sending the villagers into a panic as they cried out for help. From high above, Lugiz observed it all with a triumphant smile, thinking the time to reap the rewards of his offering had finally come. He looked down on the people at death's door with contempt, feeling smug about the chess game he and the labyrinth had orchestrated. He had schemed that when the villagers were at their most desperate from the Minotaur's attack, he himself would appear and strike it down to become their hero. Even the Minotaur had no idea that it was merely a pawn in the hands of a villain. A glowing purple sigil appeared on his hand, the mark of a dark pact, made to exploit humanity's despair so he could become their savior. With eyes full of wicked ambition, he reveled in the frantic thought that the more people died, the more he would be revered. Just then, a flood of monsters poured out from the dungeon, attacking the innocent townspeople. A woman collapsed amidst the ruins, the terrified child beside her screaming for its mother. A giant demon wolf with razor-sharp teeth and a long, slimy tongue charged toward them. As it prepared to devour them both in an instant, the mother could do nothing but hold her child and await their fate. She squeezed her eyes shut, ready to accept her tragic end. Her sacred maternal love meant she would never run away alone, even in the face of death. But in that life-or-death moment, a red shadow shot forward at terrifying speed, unleashing a thunderous blow that sent the monster flying. Egan had appeared in his powerful, transformed state. His blood-red armor radiated an immense pressure that made the very air around them tremble. Without giving the monster a chance to react, he lunged forward and seized its jaws. Using his overwhelming strength, he ripped the beast apart right before the stunned mother and child. Amidst a rain of blood and a sea of fire, Egan stood tall like a god of war, his cold, red eyes ready to crush anyone who stood in his way. Lugiz was frozen in shock at the familiar sight, unable to believe that Egan was still alive and even stronger than before. A terrifying thought flashed through his mind, that the boy had awakened some terrible power on the very brink of death, and it seemed that Lugiz had finally guessed his true identity. Standing amidst the rubble, Egan coldly taunted Lugiz, asking if old man Zebin knew about his filthy little schemes. His crimson eyes flashed with killing intent as he declared that all of Lugiz's sins would be punished, right here and now. The moment the words left his lips, a terrifying pressure descended, causing the ground to shake violently. Lugiz stumbled back in horror, his mouth stammering, unable to form words. He couldn't believe what was happening before his very eyes. From within the cloud of dust, a figure with red hair and hauntingly glowing eyes slowly emerged. It was Gunfreddick, but he was no longer an ordinary human. With a twisted smile that revealed sharp fangs, Gunfreddick declared it was time to collect the blood debt from the tournament all those years ago. He advanced with an overwhelming killing aura, staring directly at the trembling man as he roared for him to pay the price. Meanwhile, monster claws tore through the air, causing the panicked crowd to trample one another in a desperate bid to escape. Amidst the dust and smoke, a streak of red light shot forward at incredible speed. It was Egan heading straight for the enemy. A razor-sharp slash intercepted the shadow entity's attack. The townspeople looked up at the sky, stunned, as they realized someone was fighting the monsters. The sight of the knight in black armor with glowing red eyes filled them with both fear and a surge of hope. Someone in the crowd recognized him and shouted loudly that the knight had come to protect their village. Cheers erupted everywhere, with some fanatics even hailing him as a messiah sent down to save them. Ignoring all the cheering, Egan focused all of his power into his dark hands. A massive, red demonic hand materialized and seized its target. It grabbed the monster's head and then crushed it with earth-shattering pressure. He delivered the finishing blow, causing the entity's blood and shadows to splatter everywhere. A brilliant explosion of red energy engulfed the entire battlefield. Amidst a sea of fire, the main character stood tall, his black hair blowing in the wind. He radiated the aura of a war god judging his enemies, ignoring the triumphant cheers echoing throughout the town. Suddenly, a purple magic sigil flared to life on the back of his hand. The searing energy forced Egan to roar in agony. Across from him, Lugiz collapsed in despair, realizing the god he worshipped had been destroyed, while his underlings panicked and scattered in chaos. But the madness had not yet released its grip on Lugiz. He staggered to his feet with bloodshot eyes full of ambition, screaming to his followers that he had inherited divine power and would become the god of a new era. But his delusional dream was instantly crushed when Gunfreddick, with a demonic appearance of red hair and glowing eyes, lunged forward and subdued Lugiz. He cried out in terror as he realized that the immense power from before had completely vanished. He faced the ice-cold gaze of the man before him. Lugiz panicked, wondering if his opponent had been this strong all along. Before he could even recover his wits, the sight of Egan slowly approaching left him trembling in pure terror. Gunfreddick bowed respectfully before Egan and said solemnly, "Your orders, master." A ruthless killing intent flashed in his red eyes as he coldly commanded, "Wipe them all out. Leave no one alive." Witnessing that absolute loyalty, Lugiz completely broke down, screaming in despair that this was impossible. He couldn't accept that the pinnacle of glory, once within his grasp, had vanished in the blink of an eye. Just as he tried to run, Gunfreddick appeared, blocking his escape. With fiery eyes and a chilling smile, he declared it was time for Lugiz to pay for all his crimes and lies. In a fit of madness, Lugiz let out a horrifying laugh as he realized that neither Egan nor Gunfreddick were human anymore. He cursed them, calling them monsters amidst a town engulfed in the flames of war. The horrifying nightmare that had lasted all night finally came to an end. News of Lugiz's crimes quickly spread throughout the Evergrove domain, while Egan became a savior hero worshipped by the people. However, he didn't care for such empty glory. He simply smiled as he watched his companion in the twilight. To him, Gunfreddick's safe return was more precious than anything else in the world. After returning from a life-or-death battle, As emotions swelled, Gunfredok suddenly noticed a tiny creature clinging to his shoulder. Egan casually confirmed that it was the spirit who always accompanied him. The nonchalant introduction infuriated Miriam, who materialized and angrily declared that she was the great water goddess and her master's first contract, so she should be addressed as senior. But her moment of majesty was short-lived, as Gunfredok snatched her up in his palm, causing her to shriek in alarm. Egan coldly remarked that although she was a bit of a nuisance, Miriam did have some minor uses. He explained that ordinary people couldn't see spirits, but Gunfredok and Romary could because they had been in such close contact with his energy. His gaze turned serious as he reminded Gunfredok that from now on, he was officially a loyal subordinate. Egan instructed Gunfredok to only drink animal blood, explaining that he himself only needed monster blood a few times a month and wasn't sure how his subordinate's body would adapt. Hearing this, Gunfredok grew thoughtful, then frantically asked if he had to avoid sunlight from now on, prompting Miriam to chime in with a dramatic warning. Ignoring her warning, he stepped straight into the sunlight, declaring he wanted to test it for himself. This reckless act made Miriam scream in panic that even Egan used to struggle greatly to avoid the sun. However, when he stepped outside, Gunfredok was surprised to find his body was completely fine. Even Egan was surprised by this phenomenon that defied the laws of nature. Romary explained that because Egan was an origin vampire, walking in the sun wasn't a problem for him. And as his direct subordinate, Gunfredok also enjoyed the same privilege. Watching his black claws slowly return to normal, Gunfredok was ecstatic. He was as happy as a child, realizing he could still live a normal life. Gunfredok put an arm around Egan's shoulders and asked with a wry smile why he had to hide so miserably before. He even teased that Egan had once claimed to be an elf. Gunfredok now understood why he always wore a sun hat and refused to train during the day. Egan simply turned away slightly and replied that it was the best choice at the time. Gunfredok smiled brightly, saying there was no longer any reason to refuse, and he hoped his master would take him under his care. He suddenly caught himself, having almost called Egan by his name directly, while his master was still unaware of the situation. Romary quickly reminded him that from now on, he must address him as master, making Gunfredok resentful of the new rule. He protested that they were close friends before he became a subordinate, but Egan coldly replied that arguing was pointless. The atmosphere grew heavy as Egan asserted that Gunfredok was no longer human. He explained that this was the only way to save his life, but the price was a life of servitude and constant danger. Egan stated coldly that if Gunfredok felt betrayed, he didn't have to follow him. Saving him was just a matter of convenience. Looking at the wound on his neck, Gunfredok became pensive, then replied softly that those words were truly hurtful. He clenched his fist, affirming that the most important thing was his bond with Egan, along with his deep gratitude for having his life saved. Gunfredok smiled radiantly and declared that he would follow his master for the rest of his life, no matter what title he had to use. Faced with such determination, Egan could only sigh, knowing his friend would no longer call him by his name as he did before. Gunfredok was so loud that Egan even felt like sewing his mouth shut just to get him to quiet down. Suddenly, Gunfredok remembered something and hurriedly asked a question. Regarding the two blondes and Parutek, Egan nonchalantly revealed that he had given them a secret mission. And at the moment, he wasn't even sure if they had completed it yet. The St. Raglan Monastery sent a letter of thanks to Egan for his great contributions. Thanks to him, the heretical conspiracy within the monastery was exposed, revealing that a Templar had been secretly using a forbidden mana stone to manipulate the labyrinth. After the truth came out, mercenaries were dispatched to investigate, and the Everglow family began to suspect the church's true motives. Amid widespread rumors of the apocalypse, they wondered if this was God's will or a plot by those falsely claiming to be holy. The Raglan Monastery was under the patronage of the Everglow family and operated under strict rules, so this scandal nearly destroyed their reputation. Fortunately, the plot was uncovered in time before it could cause any serious consequences. A radiant Lord Everglow expressed his gratitude to Egan and urged him to accept the well-deserved praise from the people. However, Egan remained cold and distant, humbly replying that he had only played a small part. As Egan and Gunfredok prepared to leave, they asked to be excused. The Lord called out after them, congratulating Gunfredok on his safe return and expressing his joy that they were both unharmed. However, the moment the door closed, the atmosphere immediately became unusually tense. The air grew heavy as the Lord sat silently in the room, his eyes filled with a mysterious, calculating look, as if he were hatching a terrifying scheme. At a bustling tavern, the sound of clinking glasses echoed amidst cheers, celebrating Gunfredok's safe return. Everyone surrounded him with overwhelming excitement, and quite a few admitted they thought he would never come back after the horrific rumors. In the lively atmosphere, Gunfredok laughed loudly, raised his beer, and declared that the main reason he returned alive was thanks to his master. The confession stunned the entire tavern into silence before it erupted, The mercenaries all offered to serve Egan, but he just coldly and decisively replied, "I refuse." The blunt refusal made everyone groan in disappointment, while Gunfredok calmly drained his beer and complained that it tasted bland. A young man noticed that Gunfredok's appearance was somehow different and curiously asked what had happened in the labyrinth. Gunfredok fell silent for a moment, his gaze turning mysterious and contemplative. To break the tension, he pulled a young mercenary aside and teased him about achieving great things while following Parutek, which made the whole tavern erupt in laughter. Amidst the noise, Parutek approached to express his admiration for Egan for exposing the monastery's true colors, a feat that had astonished even Duke Zebin. Egan rested his chin on his hand, his sharp gaze questioning whether the monastery was truly grateful to him. The question startled Parutek, who stammered a guess that it might be related to Lucerus being turned into a sacrifice. Egan coldly confirmed that it was a deliberate move, because he had only requested that the Templar be dealt with, not for the entire monastery to be purged. He calmly explained that if he had destroyed the monastery himself, the Everglows would have pinned all the blame on him. But by leaving that loose end, he forced the family to deal with Lucerus themselves in order to preserve their own reputation. Parutek realized with horror that the entire affair was a perfect trap laid by Egan. Egan smiled coldly, remarking that the only one who'd been backed into a corner was Zebin, before ordering them to leave Evergrove that very night. Under the full moon, the town was enveloped in silence. Without a word of farewell, Egan mounted his horse and plunged into the darkness, beginning a new journey. A caravan of carriages was rushing through the forest when it suddenly found itself surrounded by mysterious figures. Sounds of panic erupted, while one soldier tried to calm his comrades, telling them to stay composed. The leader of the ambush, dressed in a black cloak and riding a warhorse, was none other than Egan himself. Although Lucerus was dead, he had once been a favored subordinate of Duke Zebin, so the Duke's rage had yet to subside. The enemy leader roared that Lucerus's death was a humiliation for the Duke, using his name to threaten them. He threatened to destroy Egan's face, but Egan's gaze remained placid and cold. Immediately after, Egan shot forward like a red flash of lightning, shattering the enemy's formation in the blink of an eye. He shouted a loud warning to his allies to hold the formation. The enemies fell from their horses one after another, their resounding cries of pain echoing through the forest. Those who tried to make a stand on the carriages were quickly cornered and pressed from all sides. Just then, Gunfredok appeared like a god of war, swinging his sword with a loud laugh as he challenged his opponents to even try to escape. He declared that they were the ones who were truly surrounded, completely turning the tables and sending the enemy soldiers into a desperate panic. Egan stood imposingly amidst the trembling remnants of the enemy force. With his sword still stained with blood, he coldly ordered them all to stand still. Gunfredok excitedly praised his master's brilliant tactics and swordsmanship, and at the same time, curiously asked where he had learned such skills. Egan calmly replied that he had learned them from Gunfredok himself. He recalled the moment the ritual was completed, when his own blood merged with his subordinate's body. The knight's entire lifetime of skills and combat experience had been transferred directly into his mind. At the same time, a mysterious voice declared that a subordinate is the property of their monarch, leaving Egan to wonder if it was a hallucination or something else entirely. Right at that moment, a squad of Duke Zebin's knights appeared, arrogantly blocking their path. Commander Macaulay mocked Gunfredok, calling him a useless fool who nearly died in the labyrinth and now dared to insult the Duke. Egan coldly remarked that they were as noisy as a flock of chicks, while Gunfredok simply offered a calm, sarcastic greeting. Unwilling to waste his breath, Egan unleashed a murderous aura and declared he would leave only one man alive to carry the message. Gunfredok quickly stopped him, suggesting they take them alive as prisoners of war. He explained that it was a way of showing respect to one's opponent, and besides, they could collect a hefty ransom for them. This pragmatic idea made the situation both humorous and incredibly logical. Egan considered it for a moment, then coldly agreed, so long as they were kept alive. He advanced on them, threatening that he wouldn't be breaking any of their bones, which caused the knights to panic and drop to their knees, begging for their lives. The men who had been so boastful just moments ago were now reduced to trembling and pleading for mercy. Ironically, the prisoners were led to a luxurious room, which made Macaulay as delighted as if he were staying in a five-star hotel. A young woman smiled and assured them that all expenses would be well taken care of, earning a satisfied nod from Egan. Egan and Gunfredok discussed their plan to demand ransom money from Duke Zebin, which completely astonished the female blacksmith. He handed her his suit of armor and asked her to repair it. He pointed out that the armor, advertised as being incredibly durable, had been pierced with ease, prompting the blacksmith to quickly promise she would reinforce it to be much stronger. While he was at it, Egan also requested that a new set of clothes be made for Gunfredok, which made the knight as giddy as a child receiving a gift. The fact that Egan had managed to bring such a renowned knight to his side made the blacksmith respect him even more. She was confident that with the amount of spoils they had brought back, outfitting them with better armor was entirely deserved. Brimming with curiosity, she skillfully asked him about his plans for the future. Egan revealed that for the time being, he would continue his conquest of the labyrinth's higher floors. Understanding that he needed money for his grand ambition, she smiled and suggested a faster path, the casino. The unexpected proposal made Egan's red eyes widen with obvious interest. Elsewhere, a fist slammed down on a desk, sending papers flying everywhere. In his chaotic office, the Lord roared in fury, enraged by the incompetence of his subordinates. He couldn't believe his Everglow knights had been captured alive, the image of Egan now haunting his thoughts. Although he knew Egan was stronger than Lugiz, he never imagined his power would be this monstrous. His eyes filled with murderous intent at the thought of a stranger brazenly causing chaos in his domain. But the reality was that his knights were being treated like honored guests, waiting for him to bring the ransom money. He wondered if he could continue to let Egan run wild, then suddenly remembered a clue from the Merchant Guild. A sinister smile appeared on his face as he determined that Egan's next destination was most likely Danzian. He confirmed that among all the possible destinations, it was the only one still connected to the contract with the Merchant Guild. The Philia ruins on the Karsvargin Peninsula. This time, he was certain he had Egan's location pinned down. At that same moment, on a ship sailing across the vast ocean, Gunfredic approached to report that the Karsvargin Peninsula was outside the jurisdiction of the Central Keeler Church. He explained the place was once ruled by the fanatical Marquis Archibald, but his regime collapsed after a bloody uprising. Now, with the bishop also having fled, it was pure chaos, which Egan noted with delight was excellent news. The serious atmosphere was immediately shattered by Miriam's horrified scream. She pointed behind them, crying out that the mage was about to die, as Romary was violently vomiting from seasickness, causing Gunfredic to let out a long sigh. He teased that being seasick was many times worse than being drunk. Gunfredic mockingly called Romary weak, forcing the boy to defensively assert that he was a useful pilgrim mage for the journey. Under their questioning gazes, Romary confessed his goal was to collect parts from mid-tier monsters for his chimera research. He quickly clarified that he still genuinely wanted to help Egan, which made Gunfredic laugh at his clever plea to stay. Egan coolly stated that everyone has their own agenda, including Miriam, and the little girl immediately admitted she only signed the contract because she loves to travel and make gold. Miriam's adorable pragmatism left everyone speechless, while she sassily demanded that anyone who criticized her would have to pay her in gold. Gunfredic looked over at the group of mercenaries who were enthusiastically arm-wrestling on deck. He realized they were all drawn in by their master's charisma, creating a lively atmosphere in the middle of the ocean. Taking the opportunity, Gunfredic asked about Egan's true objective. He gazed thoughtfully toward the distant horizon. Two words surfaced in his mind: memories and revenge. He was determined to reclaim his past and become even stronger. Egan's greatest goal was to avoid repeating the tragic death he suffered in his previous life. He was especially wary of the Holy Knights and the Keeler Church, the very people who hunt vampires. Seeing his master lost in thought, Gunfredic smiled and said that he didn't have to share if he wasn't ready. He declared that thanks to Egan, he had a new life, so his master's goal was now his own. Gunfredic said excitedly that there would surely be more interesting things ahead, prompting Egan to ask if he wanted a different path to advancement. Gunfredic immediately replied that following his master was a knight's most glorious path. Standing under the sun on the ship's deck, he marveled at the privilege of being alive and on an adventure. Gunfredic gratefully vowed that he would always stand with Egan, no matter where he went or what he did. Egan remained silent in the face of such a loyal oath. Miriam flew over, expressing that while she loves gold, she likes being with Egan even more, though she still dreams of building a castle made of gold. Romary also pledged his full support, while the mercenaries cheered that they followed him out of a sense of honor and camaraderie. Romary quietly asked for more monster materials and received a straightforward answer. Rewards would depend on contributions. Leaning on the railing, Egan watched his passionate comrades and thought that having to protect so many more people was such a hassle. But a fleeting smile crossed his face as he realized that this kind of hassle wasn't so bad after all, because in his heart they had become as important to him as his own life. The ship docked at the port city of Mafan on the Karsvargin Peninsula. A serious-looking man named Veron approached with his soldiers, introducing himself as the captain of the escort to Baron Biogaren's territory. Egan requested to depart immediately, and Veron quickly agreed. The entire party set off at once, traveling through the forest as night began to fall. Veron explained that the Biogaren domain was in trouble because of a mid-tier monster. Egan immediately guessed it was a wyvern, which was then confirmed. The wyvern was extremely cunning, constantly harassing the extermination squad to weaken them before launching its main attack. Egan determined that this was actually a high-tier monster, and that it could yield a valuable crystal core. Veron advised that if they encountered bandits, they should just pay the toll to avoid any trouble. Egan suspected there was a connection between the bandits and the wyvern, while Veron grew anxious, having been ordered to protect him at all costs. Looking at Egan's refined appearance, Veron mistook him for a frail nobleman and worried he would be in danger. Even though Gunfredic looked incredibly strong, Veron still believed Egan was just a glory hound. But Egan instantly noticed something was wrong as his gaze shifted to a rustling bush. The atmosphere in the night forest grew tense as the rustling of leaves signaled danger. Egan's eyes glowed crimson, and he ordered Gunfredic to hand him a spear. Gunfredic immediately passed him the weapon, while Veron was still trying to understand what was happening. Egan hurled the spear into the thicket like a bolt of lightning, leaving Veron completely stunned. The spear tore through the foliage and plunged straight into its target. A pained scream rang out as a bandit revealed himself and ordered his men to attack. Hordes of bandits swarmed out from every direction, surrounding the convoy. Veron was horrified that Egan had detected the ambush when there had been no obvious signs. Egan ordered Veron to hold his position and protect the carriage. Panicked, Veron advised him to just pay the toll to avoid any casualties. But in response, all he received was a confident smile from Egan. He calmly told him that he was worrying for nothing. Egan spurred his horse and charged forward, with an exhilarated Gunfredic following close behind. Watching the two of them rush into the encirclement, Veron gritted his teeth and silently cursed the reckless nobleman. But the scene that unfolded before him left him speechless, as Egan single-handedly confronted the entire band of thieves. Egan held the glowing red sword and was surprised by its superior quality. He wondered why a group of common bandits would possess such a fine weapon. The trembling leader confessed that they had stolen it from another thief and begged for his life, even offering to become a slave. Egan considered the cost of feeding the whole group, which made the bandit quickly insist that they only needed water to serve him. Veron was astonished that the notorious band of bandits had been defeated in a matter of moments. He silently admired his superior's decision to hire such an extraordinary person. Seeing the once ferocious men now kneeling and begging pathetically left Veron even more shaken. Egan decided to stop the interrogation and ordered everyone to move on, as they were behind schedule. A villager hurried over to ask what should be done with the rest of the bandits, but Egan coldly turned the question back on him. The man stammered, saying that they thought Egan's mission was to protect weak people like them. He faltered under Egan's cold and intimidating presence. Gunfredic burst into hearty laughter, joking that it seemed everyone wanted to make his master the lord of this land. Unexpectedly, the joke struck a chord, and the villagers all fell to their knees in unison, pleading for Egan to stay and lead them. Having observed everything from the sidelines, Veron was suddenly struck by the bold idea of becoming a subordinate to this formidable knight. It just goes to show, wherever there's a person of great talent, others will always want to follow. Veron respectfully explained that the band of thieves they just eliminated had been the ruling power in the area, and now a power vacuum had been created. After listening, Egan remained impassive and curtly asked, "So what?" Veron gestured toward the desolate villages and proposed that Egan become their lord to restore order. The unexpected offer took Egan slightly by surprise, while Miriam flew around excitedly, cheering him on. The little girl kept urging her master to accept, clearly thrilled by the prospect of being the spirit familiar of a lord. Egan considered how the power of a lordship could help him stand against the central church. But his greatest objective was still to find the red blood jade, so he wondered if this position was worth the distraction. Just then, a soldier rushed in to report that the captured bandits had escaped after hiding pieces of metal in their mouths to cut their bindings. During their escape, they had also gravely injured Labrel while he was bringing them food. Labrel knelt, clutching his wound, and begged for revenge. Egan noticed the blood on Parutek's hands and asked if he was hurt. Parutek reassured him that it was just a small scratch and that most of the blood belonged to Labrel. A murderous aura exploded from Egan as he declared he wouldn't forgive anyone who dared to harm his subordinate. The air around them instantly grew cold, making everyone shiver. Gunfredic stepped forward with his spear, ready to march into battle with his master. But Egan ordered him to stay and protect the village, and to pass on the message that he would accept the title of lord. Gunfredic excitedly replied that he understood, and that from now on, he would have to call him lord. Egan stepped into the night with the bearing of a king, seeking to avenge his loyal subject with blood. Cries for help rang out from a sea of flames as a village was burned to the ground. The bandits discussed how Egan was heading to the Philia ruins to hunt a wyvern. They believed he would either leave after completing his goal or be killed by the monster. Their leader laughed sinisterly, planning to retake the area after the night left. They stormed into the village, declaring themselves its new masters and mocking the villagers. The bandit threatened that anyone who resisted would be beheaded, causing the villagers to panic. He was fantasizing about taking over the silver mine when suddenly, a hand of steel gripped his face tightly as Egan appeared and coldly asked about the silver mine. He commented with contempt that the land was in chaos because of vermin like them. Egan sarcastically pointed out that for people trying to escape, they sure left a clear trail of blood. He mocked their utter incompetence. The bandits fled in a panic when they realized the night had returned. One of them knelt and begged for his life, but there was no mercy to be found. Egan swung his sword, finishing him in the blink of an eye. The rest ran for their lives in desperation, but Egan hunted them down like a phantom. A fatal thrust brought down the leader. He only had time to let out a single, pained cry before he collapsed. Egan walked through the night with his blood-stained sword, gazing at the burning village. He reassured the villagers that he was the knight, Egan, and that the danger had been eliminated. He declared that the bandits had been completely annihilated. At the same time, he promised to protect the village from now on. Just then, an arrow came whistling through the air. Egan easily caught it with his bare hand. He immediately looked toward the forest, his guard up. Miriam appeared, warning him of a powerful presence, as strong as a high-level monster. Egan realized that this was the prey he had been searching for. A silver-haired man holding a crossbow stepped out, insulting Egan as a pathetic nobody. He continued his attack with a rapid barrage of bolts. Egan was shocked to realize his opponent was a vampire, noticing his red eyes and fangs. He swung his sword, deflecting the attack in a blast of energy. The silver-haired man laughed with contempt. He scoffed, saying it shouldn't be so surprising, seeing as they were both vampires. He continued to insult Egan, calling him a wandering, low-class Roma. The silver-haired man unleashed the bloodline pressure of the North Heroes clan and ordered Egan to kneel. But just moments later, he was the one trembling on his knees, realizing he had provoked a terrifying existence. He panicked when he saw that Egan dared to wield a silver sword, speculating that he must be a primordial vampire. Egan coldly asked if his father had ordered him to attack one of their own kind. The silver-haired man frantically denied it, admitting that he had acted on his own initiative. He begged Egan to spare his life, and Miriam remarked to herself that this guy folded way too quickly. Egan recalled what Romary had told him about vampire society and its strict, hierarchical clan system. He considered it for a moment, then asked in a chilling tone why he should spare someone who started the trouble. The sheer killing intent made the silver-haired man feel as if his soul was about to leave his body. He slammed his head on the ground, swearing on the name of the North Heroes clan and his father, Duke by Orange, as he begged for forgiveness. Upon hearing the promise to do anything, a calculating glint appeared in Egan's eyes. After leaving the scene, Egan continued his journey, and Miriam asked if he planned to use that vampire to spread his reputation. Egan casually replied that letting the world know Gunfredic as a new master wouldn't be a bad thing. However, Miriam was still worried, since vampires are known for being cunning and untrustworthy. A slight smirk played on Egan's lips as he looked ahead, calmly acknowledging the harsh truth that he was, after all, one of them. Her answer left Miriam with no choice but to sigh anxiously. Even though she understood he was right, she couldn't feel completely at ease. Looking at his comrades' backs, Egan briefly wondered if he should give that vampire a jolt to keep him sharp. He gave a cold warning that vampires are naturally cunning, so they had better behave if they didn't want to die, which made Miriam shudder and think to herself that he was truly a future demon king. After a long journey, Veron broke the silence, announcing that they were about to arrive. He pointed to a massive castle nestled in the mountains and introduced it as the castle of Baron Belgalan. Facing the lord, who was buried in ledgers, Egan bluntly asked why more troops hadn't been assigned to the third punitive expedition. The Baron rested his chin on his hand, admitting the situation was complicated and that managing a territory was no simple task. He hinted that a capable knight would surely understand the financial and military burdens a lord must bear. Egan immediately understood his meaning and stated calmly that it meant he would have to conduct the punitive expedition with his own forces. But he refused to accept a disadvantage and made a clear demand: increase the reward upon the mission's completion. The proposal left the lord momentarily stunned. Egan pointed out that since the Baron had already failed twice, it was only reasonable to increase the compensation if he wasn't going to provide more troops. Baron Belgalan fell silent for a few seconds, taken aback by Egan's sharpness. Then he burst into hearty laughter. He admitted that Egan was indeed as brave and bold a knight as the rumors claimed. He immediately agreed, ordering that one half of the spoils and magic stones be given to Egan. Looking at the written agreement, Egan smiled faintly with satisfaction. He complimented the Baron, saying he was just as generous as the rumors suggested. The Baron smiled knowingly and asked if the punitive expedition could begin the next day, to which Egan immediately confirmed. Satisfied, the Baron promised to assign a guide and arrange accommodations for the party. Egan bowed his head in thanks and left the room under the Baron's calculating gaze. The atmosphere he left behind grew heavy with silent schemes. Once everything was ready, Egan gave the order to head to the Philia ruins. The party left the castle under the scrutinizing gazes of the locals. They whispered among themselves that the third punitive expedition didn't look like it would succeed either. One guard remarked that the knight in black armor must have come from Marin. He was both impressed and worried, because an outsider could hardly understand wyverns. Seeing that their forces were barely larger than the previous teams, he wondered why Egan would still choose this path, even though they knew he was a powerful knight. Just as the convoy passed through the city gates, a frantic shout from behind made Egan halt his horse, and Miriam immediately pointed out that someone was calling for them. A young man breathlessly ran up to them, asking to report something important. Meanwhile, at Baron Belgaland's castle, the shadows of a conspiracy began to deepen under the brilliant crimson sunset. The guardian knight Oleg threw a blood-soaked sack onto the floor, which piqued the Baron's curiosity. Oleg explained it was a trophy from a vagrant who was captured near the castle. The Baron was pleased, wondering to himself if anyone was as loyal and perceptive as Oleg. Oleg proudly declared that having a knight as powerful as him was an honor for the Baron. But the Baron cut him off, saying that wasn't why he had been summoned. His eyes turned sinister as he mentioned the one who had insulted him. He declared that Egan, the leader of the punitive expedition, must be punished. The Baron ordered that if Egan survived the Demon's Gorge, Oleg was to ambush and kill him. Hearing that his master had been insulted, Oleg clenched his fists in a rage. He swore he would crush Egan to avenge his master's honor. The Baron gave a sinister smile at such loyalty. He calculated that he would receive an additional 100 gold coins if Egan were to die. Even the polite letter from Zeb in Evergrove was radiating with obvious malice. To a greedy man like the Baron, the life of a foreign knight was worth less than gold. As the plot was woven, Egan continued toward the ruins, completely unaware of the danger. The true lord of the Philia ruins was the Wyvern, the ruler of the skies. The vast Demon's Gorge gave an absolute advantage to a flying creature, and it also commanded harpies to wear down its opponents. Egan determined that a reckless assault would only waste manpower and resources. He understood the wyvern's behavior well and devised a plan to lure it from its nest, while the soldiers and prisoners built defensive fortifications. Gunfredok approached and reported that everything was prepared. About 40 men were combat-ready, including the prisoners who had sworn an oath of loyalty. The strong were organized into soldier units, while the weaker ones were assigned to logistics. Parutek's and Veron's mercenaries were in charge of defending Romary and the supplies. Gunfredok excitedly announced that the palisade base was complete. Egan nodded, satisfied with the speed at which everyone had worked. He ordered them to make camp for the night and declared they would enter the Philia ruins at dawn. After the long journey, the entire party was finally able to rest. As dawn broke, the group advanced with a great clamor toward the abyss. Murmurs of discontent began to ripple through the ranks of the prisoners. One of them argued that building a palisade only to leave it behind was pointless. One man thought to himself that he was only feigning loyalty to escape slavery. He had absolutely no intention of obeying Egan. Suddenly, Gunfredok froze, his crimson eyes sensing the approaching danger. He turned to call out to his master, but Egan remained as stoic as ever. He calmly ordered the entire force to prepare for battle. The soldiers immediately and swiftly moved into a battle formation. Giant shields were raised, forming a solid defensive wall along the gloomy forest path. Behind the defensive line, a sweat-drenched archer trembled as he scanned the area, but he saw no sign of the enemy. He began to feel contempt, silently cursing Egan for being a coward who was overreacting. But just then, a monstrous shriek echoed out, and the sky suddenly went dark as countless black shadows swooped down upon them. It was a swarm of vicious harpies descending like a nightmare, instantly silencing the archer. Facing the screaming horde of monsters closing in, Egan calmly ordered his men to prepare to fire. The archers drew their bowstrings in unison, concentrating intensely as they awaited the command. The order to fire rang out, and a volley of arrows tore through the air, flying straight into the monster swarm. The harpies struck by the arrows shrieked in agony, revealing their grotesque faces with long horns and sharp fangs. A harpy suddenly dove at Egan's horse, causing the animal to panic. Despite the close-quarters attack, he remained perfectly composed and completely unfazed. With superhuman reflexes, he snatched the monster's leg with his blazing red gauntlet. A cold, murderous intent flashed in Egan's eyes. With a powerful swing, he ripped the monster's body apart in midair. From his position, Egan bellowed an order for Romary to prepare. Romary gripped his magic staff tightly, responding with determination that his time had come. He channeled all of his mana, slamming the staff into the ground to create a brilliant magic circle. Ancient runes swirled around Romary as he cast the powerful spell. The frenzied harpy swarm charged forward, trying to interrupt the ritual. A mercenary immediately rushed forward to protect the mage. He cut down a monster in front of Romari and shouted for him to focus on the incantation. Romari only had time for a quick thanks before continuing to channel the raging torrent of mana. The harpies were pushed back but continued to screech madly as Gunfredic, standing in the middle of the fray, roared for everyone to draw their swords and fight. As the enemy closed in, he decided to switch to close combat, cursing the demon birds. Seeing his comrades fighting so fiercely, Gunfredic let out a hearty laugh, praising them in the midst of the life-or-death battle. Suddenly, a terrified soldier cried out when he noticed something strange. The harpy swarm began to fly in a bizarre, swirling pattern across the sky. Someone yelled that their movements were highly unusual. Egan looked up at the black vortex formed by the swarm of monsters, his crimson eyes filled with a cold light. They merged into a gigantic drill and dove straight for his position. As a panicked Gunfredic screamed his master's name. When the dust and smoke cleared, Egan appeared like a god of death in the middle of the battlefield. His sword swung in precise and deadly arcs. He effortlessly tore each harpy to shreds. He gave the enemy no chance to counterattack. Romari rushed up from behind, a glowing blood gem in his hand. He shouted a single word, seal. A burst of pinkish red energy erupted like a silken ribbon. It bound all of the harpies tightly in midair. The monsters shrieked in despair as they fell to the ground like falling leaves. Romari proudly reported that he had sealed all the monsters in the area. Egan looked down at the helpless monsters scattered across the ground. He praised him, then ordered his men to eliminate them all, keeping only what was necessary. A scar-faced soldier was stunned by the overwhelming victory. He wondered if they were just cleaning up the aftermaths. He realized everything had unfolded as easily as if they were attending a prearranged feast. Another soldier reminded him not to doubt the commander if he wanted to live. He stressed that trusting their commander was the key to survival on the battlefield. The scar-faced soldier took the advice to heart, falling into deep thought. Realizing his comrade was also from Canby, he decided to put his faith in Egan. He excitedly thought that following Egan was much better than being a bandit, and loudly challenged the wyvern. But just as their morale was peaking, Egan suddenly ordered them to clean up and then retreat. The command left the soldiers bewildered, and he even demanded they bring the monster heads to mount on the fence, prompting one confused soldier to ask why they were withdrawing. Egan just coldly replied that they would understand soon enough. The order to retreat sent a wave of unease through the ranks. One disgruntled soldier complained that pulling back was completely absurd. He argued that since they were winning, they should be pressing the attack. But the scarred soldier believed they should trust Egan, which surprised his comrades. He pointed out that they had eliminated over 100 monsters without suffering a single casualty. Furthermore, Egan hadn't used them as bait like the ruthless leaders they'd had before. Looking at Egan's commanding presence in the palisade base, the man realized he was a rare type of leader, both powerful and strategic. Observing from a high vantage point, Egan asked Gunfredic if the approaching group were reinforcements. Gunfredic shielded his eyes to get a better look, his expression turning skeptical. He asserted that Baron Belgalan wasn't generous enough to send reinforcements, and recognized them as mercenaries with shady backgrounds. Seeing their aggressive expressions, he warned that they might have to deal with even more enemies soon. Among the newly arrived mercenaries, one of them also recognized Egan. He whispered that he'd seen him confronting the Baron at the castle, while Gunfredic turned to his master for confirmation. Egan remained silent, watching with vigilant, glowing red eyes as this new variable came into play. As a new conspiracy began to unfold, another change was brewing in a quiet corner of the forest. A mysterious figure was engrossed in turning the pages of an ancient book, covered in the dust of ages. It contained the records of a legend that was etched into the heart of anyone who pursued the path of a knight. The book told the story of the hero who united the island nation of Brancha and was honored as the Night King, Aiden. The image of the king in his dazzling armor seemed to foreshadow the historic upheavals to come, as if history was repeating itself. Although he was an illegitimate son, he was born into a family of knights. He will always be my only idol, and though I know I can never be a carbon copy of him, I still yearn to be a true knight, like a bird soaring towards the free sky. But all of those dreams completely crumbled after the bitter defeat a year ago, when my life plunged into an abyss. The moment I was turned into a slave in a foreign land, my life shattered like glass falling from a great height. I forced myself to survive through the suffering, but the worst part was having to serve a foolish and reckless knight. At the entrance of a dark cave, he brazenly ordered his subordinates to set up an ambush. Wait for the knight to step out, then kill him instantly. Witnessing that despicable plot, I could only endure it in silence. I realized with bitterness that my idol would never resort to such vile tactics. And then, when the entire squad made it out, we all froze in shock. A solid fence had suddenly appeared before the demon territory, leaving everyone stunned. One soldier panicked at the sight of the military base that had sprung up, while Oleg's face paled, unable to understand why the enemy would set up camp so openly. Even more terrifying was the fact that Egan's forces seemed to have spotted them long ago, as he and Gunfreddick calmly waited for them behind the barrier. The soldiers trembled as they realized they had walked right into a trap, and fear spread throughout their ranks. Oleg, furious, drew his sword and roared for them to charge, ignoring his subordinates' pleas and threatening to cut down anyone who didn't advance. Standing in the back, I had to admit that despite his madness, his combat skills were truly formidable. He ordered the slaves to the front lines, and one who had just moved forward was struck down in agony. Oleg relentlessly pressed the attack. He raised his sword threateningly, forcing the slaves to charge forward if they didn't want to die. Trembling as they obeyed, the slaves were forced to rush into battle, while Oleg promised a reward for every enemy killed. Under that command, both soldiers and slaves screamed as they charged toward the palisade base. A brutal commander who treats human lives like dirt is doomed to fall sooner or later, as the roars and cries for slaughter echoed everywhere. Amidst the chaos, a terrified brown-haired slave watched the battlefield. Through the screams, he saw Egan standing majestically behind a barricade. The black-armored knight's unwavering composure left him utterly stunned. He lowered his head bitterly, thinking that a true Night King would never resort to such cowardly tactics. The difference between a true monarch and a man like Oleg, who used slaves as human shields, was painfully clear. Meanwhile, Egan remained calm in the face of the onslaught, ordering his men to counterattack only on his signal. Gunfreddick and his soldiers roared their compliance in unison, quickly reinforcing their defensive line. One soldier silently admired the black-armored commander's strategy, just as Oleg led his own forces into a reckless charge. But at the peak of his aggression, an earth-shattering roar echoed through the sky, making Oleg's face turn pale. In the sky above, a massive crimson creature spread its wings, eclipsing the sun. The wyvern, lord of the ruins, roared so powerfully that the ground trembled, and an immense pressure fell over the entire battlefield. Trailing behind it were countless screeching harpies, forming a swirling black vortex. A panicked soldier screamed that the wyvern had appeared. The monster swooped through the stone gate, its fiery eyes locked onto the prey below. It let out a thunderous roar, its body coiling with pure rage. Then it unleashed a torrent of flames that scorched the earth. The soldiers panicked as the wyvern emerged from the demonic realm, while one knight gritted his teeth against the searing heat and cursed the heavens. From high above, the wyvern observed the battlefield, now engulfed in a sea of fire, with a brutal gaze. On a high rocky outcrop, a lone figure watched in silence. It was Egan, the wind whipping through his long black hair. His blazing red eyes narrowed, and a cold smile revealed sharp fangs as he whispered, "The target has appeared." He knew the wyvern would not ignore someone who had trespassed on its territory and challenged it. Instantly, the wyvern sensed the pressure emanating from him. Its colossal eye glared menacingly in Egan's direction. It opened its massive jaws, and destructive energy began to gather in its throat. The skies of Philia trembled beneath its giant wings, as the swarm of harpies blotted out the sun. Oleg's men panicked and begged to retreat, but he flew into a rage, knocking a man down before snatching a bow from his hands. Without a trace of fear, Oleg fired an arrow straight at the wyvern and roared out a challenge. The wyvern bellowed in fury, and the horde of harpies descended like a storm. A silver-armored knight broke out in a cold sweat, staring in despair at the wave of monsters. A harpy snatched its prey, and screams of agony echoed across the battlefield. The brown-haired young man fended them off, horrified by the swarm of harpies. Despite the danger, he urged his comrades to fight, only to get the ridiculous reply that someone was afraid of birds. While Oleg's forces struggled for their lives, Egan and Gunfreddick calmly observed from behind their barricade. Gunfreddick remarked that the other soldiers had unintentionally become the perfect bait, but noted the wyvern still hadn't descended. Gunfreddick drew his bow, knocking multiple arrows, confident that the wyvern would eventually be hit. A shower of arrows shot straight toward the beast. Struck by the volley, the wyvern roared in pain, its red eyes blazing with unbridled fury. It flapped its wings frantically to dodge the rest before diving down at a terrifying speed. From above, its savage gaze swept across the battlefield. The swarm of harpies was still busy slaughtering the desperate soldiers below. Overwhelmed from the air, the soldiers fought back in a panic as the wyvern continued to command the harpies in a relentless assault. One of Egan's own panicked soldiers pleaded with him to order a counterattack, crying that the enemy was too numerous. Amidst the chaos, Egan remained cold and composed, a murderous glint flashing in his crimson eyes as he finally called out to Gunfreddick. In response to the command, Gunfreddick tightened his grip on his weapon, his eyes blazing with determination as he declared that one blow was all he needed and unleashed a sealing spear. The massive projectile tore through the air with the terrifying speed of a falling star. The spear struck its target, dragging the wyvern down to the ground with a painful roar. Gunfredok flashed a triumphant smile and announced that the real battle had just begun. Egan nodded in satisfaction, clutched his own weapon, and praised Gunfredok for luring the enemy in perfectly. Without giving the wyvern a moment to react, he poured all his strength into his arm and hurled his weapon toward the monster like a bolt of lightning. The attack carried such tremendous power that the wyvern could only widen its eyes in terror. The blow pierced straight through its sturdy defenses. A violent explosion of energy erupted, engulfing the monster in a torrent of screams amidst the wreckage. Dust and smoke blanketed the battlefield as the sounds of choking and coughing echoed everywhere. When someone tremblingly asked if the wyvern was dead, Egan immediately sensed that the killing intent remained and shouted a warning for everyone to get back. From the rubble, the wyvern rose again, its eyes burning like fire as its power exploded with terrifying force. Egan gritted his teeth as he watched his soldiers break rank and flee in panic. The monster opened its mouth and spewed a gigantic sea of flames that incinerated everything in its path. The wyvern roared maniacally, its colossal body coiled amidst the fiery ruins. Gunfredok quickly asked Romary if he could seal it like he did the harpies, and received a determined nod in reply. But the wyvern sensed the danger, its flaming eyes glaring fiercely. Before Romary could even begin chanting the spell, he froze and let out a gasp of astonishment. The monster charged forward with its massive mouth wide open, intending to swallow him whole. In a panic, Romary could only manage a desperate cry. In that life-or-death moment, he screamed for it to stop. Suddenly, a dark figure shot forward, blocking the attack. Romary realized with horror that Egan had used his own body to shield him, taking a wound to his shoulder, and cried out his name in alarm. Fighting through the pain, Egan ordered Gunfredok to get Romary out of there, while Romary desperately pleaded for him to retreat as well. The wyvern continued its ferocious assault, forcing another desperate scream from Romary. Gunfredok immediately dragged Romary from the danger zone, ignoring his frantic calls for Egan as he resolutely pulled him back to safety. Powerless, watching his master face certain death, all Romary could do was scream in despair. Then he pointed in terror as he saw the wyvern open its jaws wide, ready to crush its prey. But Egan stood his ground, defiant. His crimson eyes radiated an absolute, cold determination. He channeled all of his dark power into his arm and unleashed a thunderous punch straight into the monster's jaw. A brilliant explosion of energy erupted violently. Gunfredok screamed in horror as he witnessed the terrifying scene. But Egan didn't back down. He unleashed his dark power, bursting right through the sea of flames. The two supreme forces clashed head-on, each blow shaking the very heavens and earth. A brilliant red slash tore open the wyvern's throat. The monster let out a final, agonizing roar before crashing heavily to the ground, causing a violent tremor. With their leader gone, the harpies panicked and scattered in all directions. The soldiers erupted in victorious cheers as light returned to the ruined sky. Standing before the wyvern's enormous corpse, no one could quite believe it was really dead. When Egan emerged from the wreckage, the entire army roared in astonishment, amazed that he was still alive. Gunfredok immediately ran to his side, anxiously asking about his master's condition. He calmly stated that he'd finished the wyvern by throwing a sword down its throat, and that its blood had helped lessen his injuries. Egan explained that he had used his dark cloak to resist the fire, then delivered the finishing blow with a sword he'd looted from some bandits. He was shocked to see the sword emerge unscathed from the flames, realizing it was an extraordinary weapon that amplified his power. Witnessing his magnificent feat, the soldiers knelt in unison, worshipping him as if he were a god. Shouts of "Long live Lord Egan" echoed throughout the ruins. Gunfredok smiled, realizing that even those who were once criminals had now completely submitted to his master. Meanwhile, as he stood amidst the adoration, someone else lurked in a dark corner. A knight serving Baron Belgalan gritted his teeth in bitter frustration over the failed assassination plot. He tried to retreat quietly, but an iron grip clamped down on his shoulder. A menacing voice spoke out as Egan's soldiers surrounded the man, ready to deliver justice to the traitor. Under interrogation, Oleg confessed that Baron Belgalan was the one who orchestrated everything. Standing before Egan, the terrified lord trembled, not daring to even lift his head. Egan warned him that if he continued to deny it, his crimes would be made public, but that the matter would be dropped if he cooperated. Faced with this pressure, Belgalan confessed that he had been instigated by the nobleman Jebin and admitted his wrongdoing. Facing the man who had just defeated a wyvern, the Baron had no choice but to bow his head. The first condition was to recognize Egan as the lord of the lands under his control, and to submit a petition to formalize his authority. The second condition was a hefty reparation, 80% of his magic stones, the spoils of war, a ransom for Oleg, and additional compensation fees. Furthermore, Egan also recruited several of the Baron's mercenaries into his own ranks, leaving Belgalan with practically nothing. Watching Egan ride ahead, one of his men couldn't help but marvel that the spoils from the wyvern alone were worth a fortune. He was convinced that with such strength and intelligence, Egan's future achievements would be even greater. Lost in thought, he was startled when Egan suddenly asked for his name, and he quickly stammered, "Yes, my lord." Egan then asked about the length of his apprenticeship, and the young man answered truthfully that it had been more than 3 years. He was assigned the task of looking after the armor and maintaining all the weapons for the army. His lordship promised to pay half a silver coin each week, which came out to a full 2 coins per month, a wage that was nothing to scoff at. Hearing that number, his heart felt like it would leap out of his chest, and he hurriedly bowed his head, profusely thanking his new master. Even so, a question still weighed on his mind, and he hesitantly asked if someone of his lowly status might be permitted to ask a few words. After Egan nodded his permission, he mustered all his courage and asked why his lordship had chosen to bring him along. Egan calmly replied that it was because he had revealed the wyvern's habits at the baron's castle, that his lordship was able to devise such a perfect monster hunting strategy. Egan also didn't hide the fact that when he saw him charge in with the baron's knights, he had suspected it was a trap. Hearing this, he could only lower his head and apologize. The words were late, but better than nothing. Egan looked the young man straight in the eye and noticed something interesting. This person had never once drawn his sword and pointed it at him. He had only aimed for the harpies, and seeing that quiet loyalty, his lordship coolly commanded, "From now on, you will follow me." Knowing a series of fierce fantasy battles lay ahead, Egan affirmed that he would fully equip him with armor and weapons. Faced with this rare, life-changing opportunity, he was moved and swore an oath to serve Egan until death. With treatment like this, it was worth following him even until retirement. Egan's act of bestowing equipment upon someone of low birth sent ripples through the camp. The soldiers whispered about the legend of a knight who armed a slave, and they began to hope that if they fought exceptionally well, they too would receive a great reward. Just as morale was surging, a scout galloped back breathlessly to deliver an urgent message to Egan. He reported that he had scouted the village of Robin and found it occupied by an unknown group. Could it be that another band of bandits had risen up? Gazing at the village engulfed in smoke and fire at the hands of the raiders, his lordship's eyes grew cold as he commanded the entire army to prepare for battle to protect the people and annihilate the enemy. Gunfredok and the soldiers answered the command in unison, their spirits boiling with fervor as if preparing to enter a bloody purge to protect their nation and their master. Seeing his subordinates' enthusiasm, Gunfredok laughed heartily and teased Egan about what it felt like to be treated like a lord, creating an atmosphere that was both tense and filled with laughter. However, his lordship remained deep in troubled thought, remembering Del Mondo, the one who had been assigned to watch over the village but had dared to abandon his post. Noticing his troubled expression, Gunfredok asked with concern, but Egan just gave a curt order to move out and spurred his horse forward. The army marched grandly toward the port city of Mafan under a brilliant crimson sunset. As soon as they set foot at the city gate, a guide was already waiting to receive them and subtly offer a word of warning. The man welcomed Egan to Mafan and explained that a group of over 40 armed men entering the city would attract unwanted attention, so he invited his lordship to rest at a private residence to avoid trouble with the authorities. Egan heard him out and immediately agreed. Sitting in the middle of a magnificent hall, raising a glass of red wine, Egan calmly stated that he didn't want to cause unease among the populace, as souring relations with Mafan would bring no benefit. Across from him was Gaidir, the guild master of the Mafan Merchant Guild, a portly man with calculating eyes. The old man acknowledged that Egan's title as the Wyvern Slayer was respectable, but it also made people wary. Gaidir glanced at the accompanying troops and sneered that recruiting former highway robbers could lead to meaningless bloodshed. Around the banquet table, the mercenaries began to mutter, clearly feeling the insult. One of them nearly jumped up to start a fight, but was pulled back down by a comrade and forced to chug his ale to cool off. Gaidir continued in his condescending tone, promising to host Egan at his own residence, which was far more luxurious than any inn. The old man also stressed that he would ensure Egan's soldiers caused no trouble within the city. These probing words made the soldiers grind their teeth in anger, but they had to remain silent so as not to put their master in an awkward position. Egan coldly asked if Agno of the Palin Company had revealed information to him, and Gaidir casually confirmed it, saying he needed to know who he was hosting. Not about to let his opponent feel smug, he dropped the shocking news that he had been put in charge of the entire Paranan, Ronan, and Minton regions. This news struck Gaidir like a bolt of lightning, leaving him utterly speechless. The old man realized that he was no longer facing a wandering knight, but a future lord with the authority to rule over several populous villages. Gaidir bitterly understood the reason for everything. Agno had hastily left the banquet because the Palin Company had already smelled the massive profits to be made from this newly risen lord. Realizing he was late to this lucrative opportunity, Gaidir instantly reversed his attitude. apologizing profusely for his discourtesy. Egan simply curled his lip and said that it was understandable for people to be surprised, as even he had never planned on becoming a lord. Seeing that calm demeanor, the cunning old guild master immediately recalculated and became convinced that Egan must be craving treatment worthy of a king. Gadier flashed a sly smile and suggested that he would need capable people to manage the new villages. Not missing the chance to curry favor, the old man promised that the Manhwa Merchant Guild would provide its full support under his command, and Egan gave a slight nod of approval. Gadier excitedly invited him to order any dish he desired. Truly, the older the ginger, the spicier it gets. In the luxurious hall, Gunfredic ate, while complimenting the merchant's surprising kindness, then raised his glass to toast their victory over the wyvern and their recent action-packed battle. A deafening roar erupted as he recounted the feat of wiping out hundreds of happies without a single loss. He declared that it was only through their trust in and obedience to their brilliant lord that they achieved such a resounding victory. Gunfredic leaped to his feet, his spirit soaring, calling for the soldiers to hold their heads high and continue their service to achieve countless more victories. Inspired, the soldiers roared in unison, pledging their trust to Gunfredic and Egan forever, the clinking of their mugs echoing throughout the mansion. Amid the cheers, Egan remained silent while the spirit Miriam flew around, enthusiastically honoring the man who was about to become the Demon King. As night fell and the party wound down, the atmosphere gradually settled. In a private room, a regretful voice lamented that the red magic stone still hadn't been found, as Egan stood by the window and asked Miriam if she had searched the ruins thoroughly. Miriam materialized, indignantly insisting that the stone simply didn't exist, even though the soldiers had turned over every nook and cranny. He sighed, then listened as she advised him to get some rest. Just as he was about to drift off to sleep, a sharp knock echoed from the door. A servant announced that a guest wished to see him, but Egan replied irritably that he had already declared he wouldn't be seeing anyone at this hour. However, the servant hesitated, explaining that the guest said he would change his mind if he just mentioned the code phrase, the cold, crimson blood of Nob heroes. Upon hearing this, he immediately froze. Egan's eyes widened as the name Del Mondo surfaced in his mind, and a surge of anger erupted at the thought that the man who couldn't even protect a single village now dared to show his face in the port city. Suppressing his fury, he coldly ordered the man to be let in. The door swung open to reveal Del Mondo, trembling as he stepped into the darkness, his face as pale as the failure he was. Egan stared at him with eyes as sharp as a sword, then offered a sarcastic greeting to his distant relative. He remarked that his guest must have had quite a long journey to get here. Under the crushing pressure radiating from the Lord, Del Mondo stood frozen as he slowly approached. Egan ordered the servant to leave, because this conversation wouldn't take long. As the door closed, Del Mondo immediately dropped to his knees on the floor. He bowed his head, greeting the progenitor of the family, and identifying himself as a foolish man who carried the blood of the North heroes. Egan cut him off coldly, questioning him about how the villages entrusted to him had nearly fallen into the hands of that trash. Del Mondo stammered that because of an unhealed wound, he couldn't complete his mission, and had decided to wait in Manhwa to report directly and accept any punishment. Looking at the prostrating man, he realized that he at least had the courage to come and admit his failure, so he decided to give him a chance. He asked him what he was good at, and Del Mondo quickly listed everything from combat to reading and writing. He even confidently claimed he could handle a few mercenaries without using his family's power, and revealed that in a past life, he had been a mid-level administrator in the Roman Empire, specializing in both finance and human resources. Realizing the hidden potential of the man before him, Egan extended his hand and declared, "Come work for me. If you do well, I will wipe away all your past sins." Del Mondo was so overjoyed his eyes lit up, as if the system had just activated, and he eagerly asked what he had to do to atone for his mistakes. Shortly after, Egan led a neat and elegant-looking Del Mondo to meet Guild Master Gadier, introducing him as a distant cousin who would manage the territory on his behalf. After just a few words, Gadiel was already amazed, saying that his manner of speaking alone was enough to show Del Mondo's erudition and graceful demeanor. The old man continuously praised him, saying he was truly worthy of being Lord Egan's relative. Faced with a shower of praise, Del Mondo frantically waved his hands in humility, saying that Lord Egan was like a bright moon in the sky. As for himself, he was just a flickering firefly, not even worth mentioning. That humility only made Gadiel admire Egan's judgment even more, thinking to himself that this lord was not only strong in martial arts, but also skilled at managing people, so his territory was sure to prosper. Gadiel stroked his chin calculingly, regretting that he hadn't met Egan sooner so the Palin company could have gained the upper hand. Unwilling to give up, the old man switched tactics, asking if the lord had any intention of expanding his territory further onto the peninsula. He suggested Nadia Mountain near the border, but he indifferently said he was targeting Marin, until he heard news that there was a silver mine in the mountain, at which point his expression immediately changed. Hearing the two words silver mine completely woke him up, and his eyes narrowed with such calculation that even Miriam cried out in surprise. He leaned forward, his gaze blazing as he demanded to be told everything related to that silver mine. In a lavish room, Romary excitedly spread a large blueprint across the table, asking for an opinion. It was a shield design engraved with a powerful dragon symbol that made even Miriam's eyes widen. Egan examined it, then complimented the drawing, saying it was no different from that of a master artist. Romer chuckled smugly, explaining that people often associate the dark clans with bats, but for an Oregon like Egan, only a dragon was truly worthy. He nodded in satisfaction, acknowledging that the man's skill had reached a master's level. The unexpected praise made Romary as happy as a child receiving a gift, and he couldn't stop smiling. He thought to himself that being a mage under this cold lord wasn't so bad after all, but he immediately reminded himself not to let a few words of praise sway his dedication to his research. After more than 1 month without being able to touch his research, Romary gathered all his courage and asked if he had completed his mission and could receive the previously promised reward. Egan generously told him to take whatever was suitable. Given the green light, he hugged his staff and exclaimed with profuse thanks, like he'd just snatched up a prime cut of meat. Just then, Egan remembered something and asked him if he knew anything about alchemy. Romary asserted that it was the foundation for any mage, since processing minerals is the fundamental first step to creating chimeras. He suggested that Romary must know how to refine silver, as he might soon own a silver mine and would need someone to take charge of it. Hearing this, Romary got so excited, he slammed his hand on the table, startling Miriam. He passionately declared that he would set up a laboratory as soon as he returned to Marin, insisting that a mage could separate silver from ore even more skillfully than a dwarf, before fervently begging to be put in charge of the refining process. Miriam flew around teasingly, remarking that it seemed even he couldn't resist the allure of money. Romary blushed and retorted that it was purely for research funding and not material greed, promising not to disappoint Egan because silver and mercury were essential minerals for a mage. He confidently boasted that his silver processing skills were second to none, mentioning the Academy's goal of creating chimeras. Romary even knelt down and swore he would devote his all if his master entrusted him with refining the silver. Egan calmly replied, "There's no need to sacrifice everything. I understand your abilities." Those words of approval sent Romary into a state of extreme joy, and he bowed his head repeatedly in gratitude. He ordered him to return to Marin with a few soldiers to carefully manage the byproducts on the ship, then turned to Miriam and said that they were going to seize the silver mine, and that it made the most sense to discuss money matters with her. Nader Mountain originally belonged to Duke Bimaz, the youngest son of Marquis Archibald, who had once owned Paranal Village but had passed away a few years prior. Looking over the old documents, Egan wondered why the Archibald family had simply abandoned such a valuable silver mine. Gadel explained that they were likely too busy fighting over the inheritance to pay any attention to the mine. With the family in turmoil, the bandits had nothing to fear. They seized the silver mine and began calling themselves lords, as if the place truly belonged to them. The Canby Peninsula fell into chaos, causing merchants and common folk to suffer countless losses. Egan's arrival was like a breath of fresh air that changed the entire situation. The villagers erupted in joy, shouting, "Long live Egan," because they could finally live in peace. All they wanted was peace to make a living, and they placed their faith in Egan to bring them just that. With certificates and petitions from the peninsula's nobility, Egan's reputation reached its absolute peak amidst a shower of gratitude and fresh flowers. He knew that declaring his ownership of the Nader silver mine would now face no obstacles. If you capture the silver mine, you will have the resources to grow, and the Merchant Guild will also send people to support your expeditions. In return, Gadil hoped to continue their partnership, and seeing the dragon flags flying all over town, Egan silently praised Del Mundo for being quite skilled at promoting his reputation. One soldier said emotionally that they were finally being truly welcomed by the villagers, a completely different atmosphere from when they first marched into the territory. Gunfredic laughed and playfully told him to shut up, reminding him not to get cocky just because he was being cheered on now after being openly despised at first. The soldier wondered aloud, thinking they would go to Marin, but Gunfredic replied that a lord with no mines and no territory is nothing, so only by seizing the silver mine could Egan truly be worthy of the title. When the soldier nearly blurted out something about the silver mine and Ronan village, he was yelled at and called an idiot. Gunfredic emphasized that capturing a few villages and a silver mine wasn't enough to become a lord, and the soldier quickly swore to fight loyally only for Lord Egan. Gunfredic gave a calculating smile, warning that even if they captured the silver mine, they weren't guaranteed to keep it, because the Archibald descendants wouldn't just stand by and watch. He asserted that the title of lord required a combination of power, reputation, influence, and bloodline, not just some self-proclaimed declaration. He gazed at the dignified figure of Egan leading the army from the front. Gunfredok was certain that his master was the one person who possessed all of those elements. Unable to contain his curiosity, he approached and asked if his master had once been a powerful figure in the past. Gunfredok believed that when Egan finally recovered his memories, even more earth-shattering secrets would be revealed. Meanwhile, Egan remained silent, contemplating the vague fragments of memory about mysterious people who bore him no ill will. He wondered who they were, his kinsmen or perhaps other progenitors. Nevertheless, he knew that for now, he had to prepare for a confrontation with the central church of Kalar and its holy knights. Before him stood the towering Nader mountain, silhouetted against the dark night sky. Egan resolved to accumulate military strength, political power, and wealth. He ordered scouts to be dispatched and declared that he would personally wipe out the bandits occupying the silver mine. He understood this wasn't just a battle for resources, but for himself, because if he died again, he would never be able to recover his lost memories. The night rain poured down, casting a heavy, tense atmosphere over the entire camp. The patter of rain on the tent roofs couldn't drown out the murmurs, as some called for beer to ease their worries, while others fretted about the order to march out in such harsh weather. Though their thoughts differed, they shared a common ideal and a common master, reminding themselves to conserve their strength as the sky foretold an ill omen. Moving through the storm was a great challenge, but Egan's orders were absolute, so everyone complied without question. Worry for Anton, who was out on a reconnaissance mission, spread throughout the camp. Some suspected he had betrayed them and fled, while others pessimistically believed he had been captured or killed. Inside the brightly lit command tent, Egan and Gunfredok listened intently as Baron delivered his report on the enemy. The Van Mong gang, consisting of about 50 men, was occupying the silver mine. Their leader, a former mercenary captain, had betrayed and murdered the noble who hired him to establish his own gang. Baron warned that he was extremely cunning, and the area around the silver mine was nothing short of a deadly labyrinth. Despite this grim news, Egan's expression remained as cold as ice, and he declared that they had waited long enough. It was time to confront Van Mong directly, even though Baron strongly advised against it, warning that the heavy rain would make navigating the trap system exponentially more dangerous. He remained completely unfazed. He unexpectedly asked about Anton's character. Baron confirmed that although he came from a background of thievery, he had worked tirelessly to earn Egan's recognition, which convinced Egan that Anton had met with disaster rather than betraying them. He immediately made a bold decision to depart with only Gunfredok, ordering the entire force to stay behind, await further instructions, dig drainage trenches, and reinforce the camp's defenses. Facing his troops who stood in solemn formation, Egan uttered a phrase that was cold, yet filled with immense authority. The weak are forgotten when they die, but his next words were an oath of honor that carried the weight of 1,000 pounds. He asserted that no matter how weak a mercenary might be, once they were one of his men, whoever murdered them would pay a heavy price. His declaration, like red-hot steel, caused the entire army to roar their loyalty in unison, convinced they had chosen the right master to serve. Amidst the sheeting white rain, a bandit was held fast in Gunfredok's iron-like grip. The man trembled uncontrollably, tears and snot streaming down his face as he was choked to the point of suffocation. Egan signaled for him to loosen his grip, then coldly instructed the man to simply nod or shake his head in response to his questions. After confirming Van Mong was the leader and asking about Anton, Gunfredok saw the bandit's desperate hesitation and concluded with a grit of his teeth that Anton had been killed. Meanwhile, deep inside the silver mine, the bandits were still chattering about their ambitions of being knighted, even getting the name of their patron wrong. They scoffed that a knight's title was meaningless compared to pure silver, but Van Mong roared that political power was the only thing that would ensure their long-term survival. Their dreams of power were cut short by a thunderous explosion and a cry of ambush that ripped through the night. The surprise attack threw the bandits into a panic. They screamed in terror, thinking they were under attack by monsters. Cries for help echoed throughout the tunnels as they were cornered with no way out. One desperate man pounded on a door, begging for help, but was only answered by the sound of a collapse, signaling his tragic end. Amidst the rubble, the trembling survivors suspected an ogre had appeared, but immediately dismissed the idea, as no such monsters existed in this region. The desperate situation caused one man to scream and try to flee, but Van Mong roared that running out into the heavy rain was just another form of suicide. Just then, an immense pressure descended upon them, and the sturdy wooden door exploded into splinters. The men standing behind their shields were thrown back amidst pathetic screams. Through the cloud of dust, Egan entered like a demon king in his black and red armor, followed by Gunfredok, who strolled in as if he were taking a leisurely walk. The shivering bandits realized that these two men were far more terrifying than any monster they had ever faced. Van Mong was the first to regain his composure, and he roared for his men to counterattack. The bandits screamed and charged forward, but they were like moths drawn to a flame. Miriam materialized on Egan's shoulder. unleashing a brilliant green wave of energy that enveloped the entire mine. The spirit's power disoriented the enemies, sending them into a panic as they were suddenly blinded. Within the chaotic energy, they swung their weapons wildly, slaughtering one another in their confusion. Looking at the battlefield littered with corpses, Gunfredic asked if they should keep a few alive for interrogation. Egan coldly refused, stating that these were the men who had killed his soldier. Gunfredic immediately understood why only the two of them had been sent. His master didn't want to risk any more of his own men. His eyes glowed with a bewitching pinkish hue, signaling for the end of it all. Gunfredic bowed his head in obedience, then shot forward like a phantom in the darkness. He recalled his time as a human, when he was unable to fight in the dark, but now, that very weakness had become his greatest advantage. With the power of a vampire, the darkness became his ally, and his heightened senses allowed him to perceive every heartbeat and the flow of blood in his enemies. Gunfredic tore through every obstacle, his murderous rampage accompanied by pathetic, agonizing screams. The massacre was over in a flash, and his smile, revealing long fangs, struck terror into his enemies. He laughed coldly, declaring, "I can see every single one of you in the dark." Desperate pleas for mercy echoed from all around Model, but nothing could sway the will of the bloodthirsty knight on the battlefield. A soldier standing on a rocky outcrop watched in horror as his comrades were wiped out in the blink of an eye. Cries for help echoed throughout the mines. In their desperation, they cursed Andre for leading them into this hell. They screamed that Andre never told them a monster like this was guarding the silver mine. Before the words were even out of his mouth, Egan appeared like the Grim Reaper and delivered the finishing blow. The bandit collapsed, his life ending in cold silence. Gunfredic was surprised to see him keep one survivor, to which Egan replied that the man had just revealed something noteworthy about his leader. He realized that behind this band of robbers lay a complex political conspiracy. Soon after, shocking news was delivered to the mansion of the Merchant Guild's president. Gadier was astonished to learn that Van Mong was being manipulated by Sir Andre, while Egan casually mentioned he had brought back a prisoner for interrogation whenever needed. He was cautious because the mastermind was a nobleman's lackey, but Gadier saw this as a golden opportunity to curry favor and expand his own power. The old man analyzed that Andre was the nephew-in-law of Marquis Archibald, and also the first to betray him. Although Andre was despicable, other nobles had also participated in overthrowing the Marquis, so none of them were in a position to criticize him. Currently, Archibald's descendants are vying for power, while the person behind Andre is none other than Gabriel, the Marquis's eldest son, which brought a cryptic smile to Egan's face. He realized Andre was merely a pawn and could not have acted on his own accord. Gadier applauded Egan's intelligence, but Egan himself remained cautious. He worried their adversary might deny the accusations, but Gadier was determined to persuade him. The old man pledged that if Egan stepped forward, the city of Moping and he himself would offer their full support. Gadier explained that thanks to Egan, the trade route to Belgalan was now stable, causing all the influential powers within the city to take notice and back him. The old man urged that this was a golden opportunity to solidify his position, and he hoped Egan would make a decision. Egan pondered deeply, realizing this action was not just for himself, but for the stability of the entire peninsula. Gadier continued, promising to summon the mercenary guilds, and declaring that a warrior with the aura of a conqueror like Egan could not be allowed to go to waste. Looking into the old man's ambitious eyes, Egan asked when they could begin, and upon receiving an immediate reply, he finally agreed to recruit soldiers. Standing by the window and gazing at the bustling Moping city, Gadier smiled with satisfaction, knowing he had bet correctly on a rising new power. Over 100 soldiers, along with a grand merchant caravan, entered the city with great fanfare. This was a testament to the enormous investment the Merchant Guild had placed in Egan. They stood before the majestic, black-armored knight. Mercenaries and knights from all over the Canby Peninsula showed no fear. Instead, they were filled with fighting spirit. They gathered under Egan's banner not just for silver and strength, but because they believed he would bring peace to this land, and their cheers echoed throughout the streets. From a high vantage point, Gadier and his associate discussed how many knights had voluntarily joined in exchange for a chance to own land, and to the old man, this was a massively profitable investment. He sneered, thinking that even if Egan held the title of Wyvern Slayer, he was just an amateur in management and politics. In his eyes, the knight was merely a chess piece for Moping City to profit from. Upon hearing that Egan's manager was waiting in the study, Gadier flashed a confident, cunning smile. The old man believed that a young manager like Del Mondo would be easily manipulated by his own seasoned experience. Gaidier entered with a superior air, but immediately froze when Del Mondo bluntly demanded the construction of a castle. With a frighteningly calm demeanor, Del Mondo asserted that for a master who owned 6 towns and 4 villages, having a castle was a matter of course. He presented a detailed plan that made Gaidier tremble with astonishment the more he read it. From watchtowers and barracks for 50 soldiers, to hiring dwarven craftsmen from Pomerol, and utilizing an old mansion to save on costs, everything was calculated with absolute precision. Gaidier was completely outmaneuvered, realizing his opponent was not some naive rookie, but a veteran manager with profound foresight. Del Mondo coldly declared that if Gaidier wasn't interested, he was free to refuse, because Moping City wasn't the only place that could make use of his silver. He turned to leave, casually mentioning that Marin was also a fine option, which made Gaidier hastily stop him. The old man's tone immediately shifted to one of warm welcome, inviting Del Mondo to sit and negotiate, even bringing up the possibility of military support. Del Mondo's lips curled into a slight smirk as he schemed, armed with a secret advantage that not even his master was aware of. It was the cunning he had accumulated from years of studying administration, human resources, and social skills in a past life, now perfected with the physique of the Black Tribe. With his vast experience, he was confident he could see through any of Gaidier's plots, no matter how well the old man concealed them. He leaned in close and asked directly if the old man truly believed Egan would be content to remain an ordinary lord. Del Mondo sarcastically remarked that the head of a merchant guild should have more foresight than that. He painted a picture of Egan not just becoming a marquis, but the grand lord of the empire. Del Mondo revealed that his own father had been a lord, but he believed Egan would achieve ultimate power. With a sinister, fanged smile, he asserted that his master was fully capable of reaching for the throne. Back in the territory, a soldier cheered with joy upon seeing Egan appear. He eagerly reported that this victory was for his lord. The soldier proudly recounted how they took the bandits' hideout without even drawing their swords, but Egan coldly asked why he had broken formation on his own authority. He fell silent when he saw the bandits kneeling on the ground, crying and begging for their lives. They pleaded to be made into slaves and begged not to be eaten, believing the terrifying rumors about him. Annoyed, Egan asked why they thought he ate people. One of them trembled as he explained the rumors, that the black-armored knight would tear thieves to pieces and eat them alive, which was why they'd hidden in the forest in terror, and could now only beg for forgiveness. The ironic scene made the soldiers break out in a cold sweat, as they realized the enemy had surrendered out of fear of Egan's reputation, not because of them. The budding pride they had just felt was instantly crushed. Miriam flew over and whispered advice to Egan, telling him he should offer praise to maintain the knight's morale. Understanding her point, he sighed and turned to look at his waiting troops. He declared that it was their bravery that had forced the enemy to surrender, and this praise made the soldiers beam with pride. But immediately after, Egan's smile turned cold as he reminded them that all actions must follow his orders. He warned that if it happened again, they would have to duel him directly, a place where accidents were common, which made everyone's face turn pale. In truth, he wanted to deal with the one who acted without orders immediately, but he let it go for now since he needed to build up his forces to confront the Archibald family. Seeing that his subordinates understood, Egan coldly ordered them to continue the march. The entire company silently advanced toward the Marquis's domain ahead, the atmosphere thick with tension. At the rear, a few soldiers were still grumbling, but their comrades reassured them, saying to trust the man who slew the wyvern and that their rewards would come. As they ventured deeper into the new lands, their guide pointed to a distant castle and said that was the domain of Marquis Archibald. Egan observed it for a moment, then asked if this family owned most of the Canby Peninsula. The guide replied that while their direct territory wasn't large, the Archibalds were an ancient family with many powerful vassals. He revealed that the family was deeply divided internally, which made Egan realize that Gaidier's proposal had been completely valid. Their destination was the territory of Duke Gabriel, a 3-day journey away, which required them to pass through the lands of Lady Essendra, the legitimate heir. Even though she held the legitimate right of inheritance, it was Gabriel who held the real power, while Essendra was suppressed and had no voice. Egan realized this was a world where bloodline and status decided everything. He saw the injustice clearly. Captured soldiers would become slaves, while nobles could simply be ransomed for their freedom. Egan's gaze became resolute as he gave the order. He decided to meet Lady Essendra directly and ordered an envoy to be sent ahead. At the magnificent castle of the Archibald family, Lady Essendra Antigo Archibald was leisurely enjoying the service of her slaves and merely smirked when she heard the news about Egan. Even though she'd heard he had conquered the ruins of Belgalan, she still considered the story about slaying a wyvern to be a baseless rumor, since no one had ever seen the monster's corpse. Despite warnings that Egan might be one of Gabriel's pawns, Essendra ordered him to be let in. When she learned that Egan's envoy was accompanied by about 100 soldiers, and that more than 10 knights were waiting outside, she just gave a cold laugh and demanded that he enter alone. Essendra stepped out of her bath with a sharp, cold gaze, confident that her status alone was enough to deal with anyone. She stated that she was a skeptical person and would only believe what she saw with her own eyes. Watching the castle gates open, she was eager to see just how formidable this man who was causing such a stir truly was. Inside the magnificent halls of the castle model, Egan rode in on horseback, calmly meeting the sharp gaze of Lady Archibald. Essendra observed him and realized he was much younger than she had imagined. Standing in the magnificent hall, she broke the silence, saying she had heard countless rumors about him. Facing Egan's calm demeanor, Essendra remarked sarcastically that those rumors were even harder to believe seeing him in person. She listed everything from tales of cannibalism to slaying a wyvern, dismissing them as wild myths. Egan replied that the cannibalism story was just a baseless rumor, but slaying the wyvern was true, and this meeting was surely not just to satisfy her curiosity. As soon as he finished speaking, a nearby guard shouted at him, accusing him of being disrespectful. However, Essendra let out a hearty laugh, intrigued by his straightforward manner. Egan ignored the compliment and suggested they get straight to the main point of their meeting. He bluntly stated that he had come with a request and a groundbreaking proposal. Essendra immediately guessed that Egan wanted her to recognize his ownership of the villages he had conquered. When Egan asked if that was possible, Essendra's expression instantly turned cold and wary. She asked in a low voice if he was deliberately trying to provoke her. Faced with her firm attitude, Egan let out a soft sigh and went straight to his proposal, dropping his initial polite demeanor. He revealed that he had captured Wan Meng, the notorious bandit leader from the Nadia Mountain silver mine. He emphasized that Wan Meng had killed the noble who hired him, and confessed that the mastermind was Knight Andre, who had promised him a pardon and a title if he could seize the silver mine. When Egan pointed out that Andre was one of Duke Gabriel's men, Essendra couldn't hide her shock. He asserted that he had all the necessary evidence from the Mo Ping Merchant Guild, and offered to hand over Wan Meng to help her officially become a marquess, in exchange for being recognized as a legitimate lord. The blunt condition left Essendra utterly surprised. After a few seconds of silence, she burst out laughing heartily, admitting she had been too harsh and promised to provide extra silver and a deed of ownership as an apology. Essendra explained that the messy succession situation had caused her to misunderstand, and then she began to share complex political secrets with him. She revealed that she could become a marquess at any time, but the royal family's interference in the Canby Peninsula was complicating everything. The royal family was always looking for ways to expand its power, and Duke Gabriel was the pawn they were targeting. They were trying their best to win him over, even willing to grant him a higher title. Essendra bitterly admitted that if that happened, her own power would be severely diminished. She asserted that the problems of the Canby Peninsula must be solved by its own people, and that the Archibald family had to remain neutral. Therefore, she was forced to keep her younger brothers by her side, shouldering the burden of both her house and her family. However, the greedy Gabriel also wanted to seize the family's demon realm, and Essendra needed to conquer it as soon as possible. The problem was that the path to the demon realm was blocked by the territory of Edric, the fourth in the family line, and he was demanding a passage fee for every single person. Edric was remaining neutral to see who would win, using the fee as a way to state his position without siding with Essendra. Egan coldly asked what the fee was. The answer was 10 silver coins per person, which made even him fall silent. Essendra gave a bitter laugh, saying that after paying her soldiers' wages, she couldn't afford that fee. She gently touched Egan's hand, her gaze distant. She spoke of Edric with a look of regret, having once dearly loved her treacherous younger brother. Egan cut her off with a bold proposal. He wanted to be the one to conquer the demon realm, immediately making the atmosphere tense. Essendra immediately refused, emphasizing that the passage fee for over 100 people would be unbearable. But Egan calmly looked her straight in the eye and said that he would go alone. The room fell silent, and an astonished Essendra asked if people often called him a madman. He nonchalantly replied that he'd never heard anyone say that, his recklessness on full display. Under the setting sun, Egan's troops gathered at an ancient stone bridge that marked the territorial boundary. This was the meeting point between the direct branches of the Archibald family. In a stern voice, Gunfredic warned that no one was to cross the bridge into the territory of Gabriel and Edric, declaring that violators would be severely punished. Egan instructed Gunfredic to stay behind with the soldiers and wait for their travel permits, while he himself would venture into the demon realm alone. Watching his master's retreating figure, Gunfredic knew he was about to perform another miracle, even as the mercenaries began to whisper among themselves in doubt. Beryl worried that the new recruits, who didn't yet understand Egan's true power, would become discontent, so she urged her comrades to go and reassure them. Egan also told his subordinates to keep morale high, knowing that the loyalty of the new forces was still shaky. Miriam flew over to him, her expression full of worry, as she pointed toward a group of knights who were clearly showing their displeasure. She urged Egan to calm them down quickly, before the situation spiraled out of control. He glanced over at the knights, who were volunteering without pay, his eyes turning cold. Although a part of him wanted to use raw power to force their submission, he restrained himself for the sake of the bigger picture. Egan reminded himself that a true lord must know how to conceal his feelings, just like Tywin from the tales of power and intrigue. He turned back to them, his calm composure restored, and thanked everyone for obeying his commands. A knight in silver armor spoke up, expressing his regret that they couldn't join him on the campaign into the demon realm. Egan explained that it was an honor to work with such excellent knights, adding that even Essendra herself held them in high regard. At the mention of Essendra's name, a wave of surprised murmurs rippled through the knights. He assured them that she had praised their knightly spirit, and then ordered Luke to distribute some gifts. To everyone's astonishment, Luke handed each of them a pouch containing 50 silver coins. Egan announced that this was a token of appreciation from both Essendra and himself. While Miriam giggled at his convincing performance, he cleverly secured the loyalty of these forces with his generosity and encouraging words. He motivated them by saying this was their chance to impress Essendra, causing all the knights to roar with newfound determination. Miriam wondered if Essendra even knew these men existed, but then figured it didn't really matter, since it's not like they'd ever meet her in person. Just then, a knight reported that all the formalities were complete, and Egan nodded, ready to set out. One of the guard knights rushed to stop him, arguing that his decision to go alone was far too reckless. He stressed that no matter how you looked at it, the situation remained incredibly dangerous. Egan coldly asked if the knight realized he'd already repeated himself 4 times, adding that he still needed to hunt monsters and bring back the loot himself. Still worried, the knight urged him to return if he wasn't back in 3 days, because the situation could change at any moment. Egan simply replied, "I'm off," then spurred his horse and rode off the bridge. Miriam flew after him, complaining about how chatty that knight was, and urging him to hurry up and wipe out all the monsters. Egan shot the noisy pixie a look, telling her to be quiet before turning away, but Miriam just kept cheering excitedly. The super warrior is off to battle.